Hogwarts, Harley from the Which Way by author Shimo Nuha Lie. Chapter 86 to 120. Chapter 86 Ancient Ghost. George's triumphant look was infectious. Angelina also expressed her support. Ravenclaw's Seeker is also a complete third-year newcomer, simply no match for Katie. And they all need to get used to playing together. While we're a team that has been playing together for so long. Although there have been some small rotations in positions, our chemistry is still there. Exactly, especially since we have such a good new chaser. Katie also expressed her support, patting Harley's shoulder vigorously. She had recently swapped positions with Harley. Then Harley showed everyone the assassin's flexibility and powerful offensiveness. She attacked from various angles, even taking a long-range shot directly from midfield. Except for the shots that were too far and gave Wood too much reaction time, Wood had not yet defended more than 10 shots within the scoring zone. Harley could always dizzy Wood with her extreme speed and flexible footwork. At her scoring rate, it was absolutely no problem for a single player to score the equivalent of a golden snitch in a single game, which allowed Katie to confidently switch to Seeker. It just so happened that Katie had also wanted to change positions for a long time. I'm very confident I can suppress Cho Chang from Ravenclaw and Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff. Although Cedric is handsome, I promise I won't go easy on him. Katie guaranteed, patting her chest. Angelina and Alicia suddenly giggled. Angelina, still laughing, pushed Katie, facing that tall, handsome, muscular, quiet guy, can you really promise not to go easy on him? Katie also started laughing, and the three older girls hugged each other. Only the boys were left looking at each other, seemingly unable to understand what they were laughing about. Harley stood to the side, holding her broom, and sighed. Youth. This busy and fulfilling life continued until a few days before Halloween. That evening, the Gryffindor resident ghost, nearly headless Nick, flew into the common room. He flew straight to Harley, who was doing homework with Hermione and a few other girls. Ahem, Nick coughed twice, seemingly wanting to say something, but waiting for Harley to ask. Harley cooperatively looked up. Hello, dear Sir Nicholas. May I ask if there is anything you need? A smile appeared on Nick's face. Oh, my dear child. I would like to presumptuously bother you and ask for your help. Sir Nicholas, please speak. If it's within my capabilities, I don't mind lending a hand. A smile appeared on Harley's face. Ahem, it's like this. Nick rubbed his hands. This year's Halloween Eve will be the 500th anniversary of my death. I'm holding a party in a rather spacious underground classroom and inviting ghost friends from all over the country. I would be greatly honored if you could also attend. Of course, if you are willing to invite other living people, that would be even more perfect. So, can you come? Saying this, Nick looked at Harley expectantly. Then why did you come to me first? Harley stared at Nick and asked softly, there are so many people around. Nick circled in midair a few times, constantly coughing and rubbing his hands, finally saying in a low voice. You know, child, my nickname is nearly Headless Nick, because my head was not completely severed. As a result, because of this reason, I've applied to join the Headless Hunt, but have never succeeded. They always say that my neck wasn't cleanly severed, and my head and body weren't completely separated, so they rejected me. And you, Harley Potter, you are a celebrity in the wizarding world, with extremely high renown. If you are willing to attend the 500th anniversary of my death party, and tell the other ghosts there that I am very terrifying, that will greatly increase my renown. Then maybe I'll have a chance to join the Headless Hunt. Sir Patrick Delamore will surely take that into consideration. Saying this, Nick stared at Harley pitifully. Harley, my dear child, this is my lifelong wish. Harley played with the quill in her hand, not making an immediate decision. After a brief consideration, Harley felt she should gather more information. Sir Nicholas, is this a dinner party exclusively for ghosts? Oh, yes. Nick nodded vigorously. In fact, we also have various ghost activities, such as the Headless Hunt performing horseback acrobatics and head polo. The several girls around showed interested expressions, but none of them voiced their opinions directly. Only Lavender gently poked Harley's waist, but Hermione slapped her hand away. What about the food at the banquet? Harley continued to ask, without changing her expression. Oh, I have certainly prepared a very sumptuous feast. Nick proudly adjusted the collar of his clothes. I've prepared many foods with strong enough flavors to ensure that ghosts can taste them. For example, cheese fermented for 2 months, large rotten steaks, and haggis full of maggots. Nick's voice suddenly trailed off, as if he had just realized these things were not suitable for living people to eat. The expectant expressions on the faces of the girls nearby instantly disappeared, replaced by a look mixed with disgust and horror. But Harley, instead, showed an interested expression. Why do you prepare such food? I mean, wouldn't it be better to prepare some delicious food? After all, ghosts are all transformed from humans, and I don't think your tastes in life were so unique. Alas, my dear child, Nick shook his head, you must know, we are just a group of cowards who dared not move on. So there is a clear boundary between us and the living, we cannot taste the delicious food that the living can eat. Only this kind of severely rotten and spoiled food, with a very strong taste, can we taste to a limited extent. Nick's gaze gradually dimmed, and he also realized that his chances of a successful invitation were slim. What kept him there was that Harley had not yet explicitly refused. Actually, it's not like I can't go, Harley said, rubbing her eyebrows, after a moment of thought. But, dear Sir Nicholas, you have to give me a reason that would attract me. Nick's eyes instantly lit up, and he circled in place for a long time, finally coming up with a reason. I remember you really enjoy learning, and many very ancient ghosts will be attending my party this time. They possess very interesting knowledge. If I remember correctly, some ghosts have even existed longer than Professor Binns. If you are willing to come, I think they shouldn't mind chatting with you. Harley's eyes lit up. Deal. See you on Halloween Eve, Sir Nicholas. Chapter 87 Death Day Party. Nearly headless Nick left contentedly after receiving Harley's reply. Although among the group of girls around Harley, only Hermione was willing to go with her, nearly headless Nick thought it was good enough that he could invite Harley. After all, she was the main event, everyone else was just an extra. Of course, now, nearly headless Nick felt his luck was good tonight, so he decided to try inviting a few more little wizards. After all, having living people attend a dead person's death day party was, in itself, a very honorable thing. After nearly headless Nick left, Lavender immediately asked, Harley, why did you agree to nearly headless Nick's invitation? You heard it just now, that death day party sounds so disgusting. Saying this, she shivered. Parvati, next to her, also nodded in agreement. Indeed, it sounds absolutely filthy. Harley glanced at Parvati but said nothing. How could she even say that? Harley had analyzed numerous unknown materials from the Ganges water she gifted. That was truly unclean. Hermione also showed a curious expression. So, Harley, why did you agree to nearly headless Nick's invitation? Because many ancient ghosts will be attending. Harley exclaimed. We might learn many extremely confidential pieces of knowledge then. What a wonderful thing that would be. The girls next to her couldn't help but open their mouths slightly, saying nothing. Very good, this is very Harley. Of course, Harley had another reason she hadn't mentioned. She really wanted to research the connection between ghosts and spirits, and to investigate whether there truly was a spiritual realm in this world. Limited by her strength, Harley had not yet attempted to perform a ritual to enter the spiritual realm. And without recovering to a demigod state, Harley would likely not attempt it. But this did not prevent Harley from being interested in it and gathering information in advance. After all, the spiritual realm had always been a treasure trove. On Halloween Eve, Harley and Hermione went to the Halloween feast in advance and took quite a bit of food meant for the living. By this time, the Great Hall had been decorated, filled with bat and skeleton decorations, and enormous pumpkin lanterns hung from the ceiling. Hermione looked at the large empty space in the Great Hall and remembered the news circulating among the girls. Professor Dumbledore had booked a very famous skeleton dance troupe to perform and entertain everyone. The little witch swallowed, regretting her earlier decision a little. What? Don't want to go to the Death Day party anymore? Harley asked, without looking up, as she'd put 2 bottles of pumpkin juice into her backpack. She was truly too familiar with this kind of scene. Changing one's mind at the last minute was not a one-time occurrence for her. But Hermione swallowed hard, forcing herself to avert her gaze from the Great Hall. A promise made is a promise kept. I've already agreed to nearly headless Nick, so I cannot go back on my word. So, at 7 o'clock in the evening, Harley and Hermione passed through a doorway that led directly to the Great Hall. The Great Hall was brightly lit with candles, and plates of fragrant pumpkin pasties were laid out on the tables. Model bats filled with candy flew everywhere in the Great Hall. Lucky students could knock them down to get the delicious candy inside. But Harley and Hermione walked straight towards the dungeons without looking back. Harley still felt a hint of anticipation, extremely eager to meet the ancient ghosts. The corridor leading to nearly headless Nick's Death Day party was also lit with candles. However, these decorative candles might be more to the taste of the dead, as from a distance, they looked like clusters of ghostly flames floating in the air. Harley looked at the dark, thin little candles and the shimmering blue light burning on them, and couldn't help but pull out her wand to examine them closely. Will-o' the wisps. There are traces of magic in these candles. It seems Professor Dumbledore also values these ghosts quite a bit. Harley pointed her wand at these small candles, carefully examining the traces on them. Hermione also leaned in to study them with interest, but her skill level was too low, and she couldn't figure anything out. Once Harley put away her wand, Hermione eagerly leaned in. Harley, is there anything special about these candles? Nothing much, just a simple bit of magic. Harley waved her hand. The prank shops in Diagon Alley probably sell them. The school probably values these ghosts, so they specially purchased a batch. Whether it was psychological or not, Hermione felt the temperature dropping with every step she took. She couldn't help but pull her clothes tighter around her. Are you cold? Harley turned her head and asked softly. Very cold. I regret not wearing a few more coats. Hermione rubbed her hands vigorously, trying to generate some heat. Harley thought for a moment, then unbuttoned her outermost school robe and put it on Hermione. You wear it. I was born with black flame and ice magic, so this cold is nothing to me. Saying this, Harley extended her two bare, pale arms. Black flame flickered on one arm, while the other was covered in frost. Hermione had initially wanted to refuse, but seeing Harley's demonstration, she couldn't help but nod. Just then, a hurried footstep suddenly came from behind them. Harley and Hermione stopped and turned to look. The two hadn't walked far, so the people behind them quickly caught up. It was Ron, Neville, and Ginny. At that time, nearly headless Nick was randomly inviting lucky little wizards in Gryffindor, and Neville didn't feel comfortable refusing. As for Ginny, she seemed to have caught a cold again at the time. Madame Pomfrey, seeing that the young girl caught colds too easily, gave her 2 more bottles of invigoration draft. After all, this potion was herbal essence, and drinking more of it wouldn't harm her body. So, Ginny was in a dazed state that evening and casually accepted nearly headless Nick's invitation. Besides the two of them, none of the other little wizards agreed to the invitation. And Ron didn't have to come originally, but seeing his sister sick and still invited to a ghost's death day party. He was worried about her, so he specifically accompanied Ginny. All 3 were quite surprised when they saw Harley and Hermione. Although Ron didn't know why, he suddenly felt that not choosing to go to the Great Hall seemed pretty good. Harley, Hermione, why didn't you go to the Great Hall? Ron asked quietly. Nearly headless Nick invited us to the death day party, and Hermione and I both agreed. Harley glanced at the 3 of them. You too. Not me, but they are. Ron pointed to Neville and Ginny. I came because I was worried about Ginny, so I'm accompanying her. I can't count on Fred and George, they've long since disappeared. Harley looked at Ron with appreciation. The first time she met him on the train, she thought he was well-mannered. Now, it seems she was right. Chapter 88 The Big Four. Just weaklings like me. According to what Harley learned from the Weasley twins during a break in training, Ron was the youngest boy in his family. His eldest brother, Bill, had 12 OWL certificates, served as head boy, and became a curse breaker at Gringotts immediately after graduation. His second brother, Charlie, was the captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and his skill was so great that he could have directly joined the Britain team as a starter. However, he resolutely declined the invitation from the Britain national Quidditch team and is now in Romania studying dragons. His third brother, Percy, like Bill, had 12 OWL certificates, is currently a prefect, and has a high probability of becoming head boy in the future. During the summer holidays, departments in the Ministry of Magic were already willing to offer Percy internships, as wizards with 12 OWL certificates are relatively rare, and as long as he doesn't slack off, he will surely achieve excellent results in his NEWT's exams. Although the Weasley twins weren't fond of studying and were mischievous, they were very popular among the boys. Furthermore, they excelled in multiple subjects like transfiguration, charms, and potions across their entire year. Fred and George simply never applied themselves to subjects they weren't interested in. As for Ron's sister, Ginny, being the only girl and the youngest, she received the love and attention of the entire family. In this situation, Ron was actually the least noticed person in the family. His every action was compared to his brother's, and he always used his brother's hand-me-downs, leading to extreme low self-esteem. However, Ron never harbored negative feelings towards his family. When Ginny was sick, he was still the most concerned person. Harley discovered such a character among boys for the first time. If she were her old self, she would definitely be very good friends with him. What a pity, she had embarked on the path of a witch. For her mental health, and to avoid losing control, Harley could only choose to keep her distance from boys. The group arrived at the entrance of the underground classroom, where Sir Nicholas stood, draped in a black velvet curtain. The door behind him was ajar, and music emanated from inside, an ear-splitting sound like 1,000 fingernails scraping across a giant blackboard. Oh, my dear friends. Sir Nicholas was very pleased to see Harley and the others arrive. I didn't expect you to invite an extra person. Of course, Mr. Weasley, you are very welcome. He removed his feathered hat and bowed, inviting Harley and the others inside. The underground classroom was packed with hundreds of milky white, translucent figures. They floated around in the air, dancing to the aforementioned grating music. Black candles, like those outside, were lit in the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, casting a gloomy blue light of midnight. The temperature in the classroom was low, and Harley's living breath formed wisps of mist in the air. Sir Nicholas. Harley remembered something and turned her head to ask, you still haven't told me where those ancient ghosts are. Of course, if there are any who were potions masters or charms masters in life, please be sure to tell me about them too. I'd love to chat with them. Oh, Harley, my dear child. Sir Nicholas shook his head melancholically, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. Harley raised an eyebrow slightly. Had Sir Nicholas lied to her in Gryffindor Tower? There are no charms masters or potions masters here, if there were, they would choose to conceal their identities. Sir Nicholas said mournfully, his voice exceptionally desolate. We are just a bunch of cowards, afraid to move on after death, so we chose to return to the place we lived, to linger where we once left our mark. As for those who were masters in a certain field, I imagine they wouldn't lack such courage. Even those ancient ghosts were just ordinary people in life, which is why they chose to return as ghosts. At this point, he glanced at Harley, his voice slightly rushed. Of course, Harley, my dear child, I didn't lie to you. They are indeed very ancient ghosts, and they know a lot of particularly old knowledge. Harley nodded, her voice devoid of emotion. So, Sir Nicholas, where are they? Over there, Sir Nicholas pointed in a direction. That old gentleman in the corner has been a ghost for over 1,000 years, but he's always very silent. Thank you, Sir Nicholas. Harley stopped bothering Sir Nicholas, greeted Hermione and the others, and then slipped towards that corner, being careful not to bump into other ghosts along the way. Hermione also greeted the others, then disappeared into the crowd of ghosts. Neville, Ginny, and Ron exchanged glances, and finally Ron suggested, why don't we go see if there's anything good to eat? Ginny and Neville nodded in agreement, and the three walked towards the long table at the other end of the underground classroom. Harley quickly slipped into the corner, where an old gentleman was staring intently at the wall, lost in thought. Cough, 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 Harley coughed lightly a few times. Hello, old gentleman. The old gentleman glanced at Harley, said nothing, and quickly immersed himself back into his own world. But Harley wouldn't give up so easily. With her hands behind her back, she stood on her tiptoes slightly and spoke again in a clear voice. Old gentleman, I was introduced by Sir Nicholas. He said I could learn some history older than the four founders from you. The old gentleman finally emerged from his thoughts. Four founders. Which four founders? There were so many deities among wizards back then, was there even a title like the four founders? Exclamation mark. Harley realized she seemed to have stumbled upon some incredible history and immediately put on her innocent expression again. Of course not. I'm talking about the four great beings who founded Hogwarts. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. Hey, for them to be called the four founders. The old gentleman snorted, a hint of disdain in his voice. They are merely weaklings on my level, how can they be called the four founders? It only goes to show how wizards have declined. 5,000 years ago, that title could only belong to the great beings who led the wizard race. Harley's heart surged with joy, thanking Sir Nicholas, she seemed to have encountered an extraordinary ghost. However, Harley controlled her heartbeat, not letting it fluctuate too obviously. So, old gentleman, you must have a very fascinating past. I wonder if I have the honor of listening to your life story. The ghost finally turned his head, allowing Harley to see his face, full of stories. Little girl, the old gentleman smiled and said, don't try those little tricks on me. Although I am now just this ethereal ghost body, I can still tell that you are controlling your heartbeat and hiding your emotions. Harley's pupils constricted slightly, but she quickly regained control. Your wisdom is keen, old gentleman. Harley bowed slightly, my insignificant tricks amuse you. Speaking of which, I haven't seen such an interesting little wizard in thousands of years. A nostalgic look appeared in the ghost's eyes. It's rare to meet someone interesting, so I'll chat with you for a bit. There's another update tonight, but I haven't coded it yet, I have class. Chapter 89 God is a protector and also a sinner. Harley waved her hand, and two spider silks pulled over a chair. She then quietly created a spirit wall to block out the surrounding sounds. Hermione also hurried over. Although she didn't know what was happening, sitting down in a chair to watch the drama unfold was perfectly fine. She could always ask Harley about the specifics later. The old gentleman coughed twice and looked at Hermione. Who are you? Old gentleman, she is my friend and is also very interested in your past, Harley explained. All right then, it's rare to find someone interested in my past, the old gentleman muttered. Speaking of which, my glorious history truly shouldn't be buried. Subsequently, under Harley's continuous prompting, a fantastical scroll depicting 5,000 years ago unfolded. Perhaps it was because he wasn't particularly familiar with the two, or perhaps too much of his memory had dissipated as a ghost. The old gentleman only spoke of many important historical events of that time, and he only spoke generally, without going into detailed depth. From the old gentleman's accounts, it was mostly about the wars between the wizards and various extraordinary races. The friction with the house elves, who were then known as gnomes, was mentioned repeatedly by the old gentleman, as if the gnomes were one of the most powerful races at that time. Moreover, Harley discovered something interesting. The old gentleman mentioned a magical creature called the crumplehorn snarkak. After meeting Luna on the train, Harley had specifically looked through various ancient texts, but she couldn't find any mention of this magical creature. Coupled with the fact that the little wizards at school didn't think highly of the Quibbler, considering it an entertainment read not to be taken seriously, Harley had simply assumed this creature was fictional. As for Luna, she was like those Muggle children who believed the stories of Snow White and Cinderella were real. This should just be a little witch's fantasy. But now, Harley heard about this magical animal from the old gentleman. Although their numbers were not large and they were not particularly active, they were said to be very powerful. In the old gentleman's words, the strongest existence in this race could even suppress him. If ghosts didn't get senile dementia from existing too long, then the crumplehorn snarkak would be very interesting. Harley decided to spend more time connecting with Luna when she had the chance, or even visit the editor-in-chief of the Quibbler. Perhaps they had unearthed some historical sites or ancient texts from somewhere and found this term within them. The old gentleman rambled on for nearly 2 hours, as if no one had listened to him for a very long time. Harley quietly brought up a question she was particularly concerned about. Old gentleman, since you are so powerful, how did you die? This question seemed to hit a nerve, making the old gentleman freeze instantly. His eyes suddenly filled with inexplicable emotions, and light flowed within his milky white body. Why did it suddenly get cold? Hermione rubbed her hands, unable to resist leaning closer to Harley. Indeed, Harley also noticed that the temperature in this corner was dropping. And the source of all this was the ghost in front of them. Magic seemed to be emanating from him, affecting the real world. This was the first ghost Harley had seen, besides Peeves, who could interfere with the real world. Fortunately, this was a corner, and there were no living people at the Death Day party, so what happened in this corner was overlooked by everyone. Moreover, everyone else's attention was on the Headless Hunt's performance, which was met with bursts of cheers. Harley looked at Hermione's slightly pale face, held her hand, and while using a ritual to transmit warmth, activated her extraordinary ability to interfere with the mind. Old gentleman, please calm down. This is Sir Nicholas's 500th Death Day party, not an ancient battlefield from 5,000 years ago. Based on the old gentleman's previous words, Harley boldly speculated that he was probably also one of those who sacrificed for the wizards, which was why he had such a strong obsession. After Harley increased her spiritual output, the old gentleman finally reacted, and the surrounding magical fluctuations returned to normal. However, the previous phenomenon was not without impact on the old gentleman. Harley could clearly see that the milky white color of his body had faded. I apologize, I was reminded of my death earlier, so my emotions were a bit agitated, the old gentleman said softly, but there was no apology in his voice. But, little girl, you guessed wrong on one thing. I didn't die on an ancient battlefield. Then, how did you sacrifice yourself? Hermione couldn't help but ask. Me. Hey. The old gentleman let out a disdainful snort, but didn't answer directly. Who made me one of the people who stood at the peak in the spiritual and soul domains back then, but someone in this domain was stronger than me. Hey, isn't that the same reason they had a civil war? For selfish desires, they ruined the future of the entire wizard race. Indeed, a god is the protector of a race, but when there are too many gods, a god will only be the sinner of that race. After speaking, the old gentleman did not continue, but chose to end the topic directly. All right, children, I'm tired too. Please give an old man my age some time to rest. With that, the old gentleman plunged into the wall, disappearing without a trace. Harley and Hermione remained in place, dumbfounded. This old man completely piqued their interest, and then just stopped talking. Was he playing a game? After a few minutes, Harley finally reacted and dispelled the spirit wall. The two put the chairs back in place, Harley still pondering the old gentleman's last few sentences. Harley made no comment on the old gentleman's last statement. With her identity and strength, she was too far from the gods to comment. After all, Harley had seen the blasphemy slates of the witch created by Emperor Rosal, and knew that a god was in existence occupying the sequence 0 position in the sequence pathway. Harley, a mere sequence 3, and demoness of Unaging, naturally wouldn't invite trouble. However, the old gentleman's phrase, "who made me one of the people who stood at the peak in the spiritual and soul domains back then, but someone in this domain was stronger than me," greatly interested Harley. Was it because every world is essentially the same, with the fewest positions at the very top, and the old gentleman blocked someone else's path? So, the old gentleman was killed by a certain wizard at or near the end of the racial war. Harley suddenly felt that the ancient history of this world was also very deep. Hermione looked at Harley's thoughtful expression, feeling a bit curious. Just as she was about to ask, a voice suddenly rang out in both their ears, "Harley." "Hermione. There you are." Chapter 90, Large-Scale Social Death Scene. Harley heard the familiar voice and immediately turned to look. She and Hermione had just arrived at the entrance of the dungeon classroom, and Professor Snape was standing outside. Professor Snape forced a smile, but Harley could still tell that Professor Snape had been worried about something earlier. "Something happened in the school," Professor Snape said quickly. "Now we need to investigate everyone who didn't attend the Halloween feast. I heard from a few students that you and Miss Granger went to nearly Headless Nick's 500th Death Day party, so I came to find you." Harley frowned slightly. She hadn't asked enough questions here yet. Although the old man had played the riddle teller and then slipped away, there were still many ancient-looking ghosts around, who could surely provide a lot of information. However, the school never mandated attendance at various feasts, and now that Professor Snape had come to find her and demand an investigation, something very serious must have happened. Harley asked, "Professor, what happened?" "Filch, the caretaker's cat, was petrified," Professor Snape said softly without hesitation. "Also, the Chamber of Secrets might have been opened." While walking upstairs with Professor Snape, Harley also learned the seriousness of the situation. According to the school's legends, Slytherin had a rift with the other 3 founders over whether to admit Muggle students. After a fierce argument with Gryffindor over this issue, Slytherin left Hogwarts. However, legend has it that before leaving, Slytherin left a Chamber of Secrets and sealed it. Only when Slytherin's true heir came to the school could the Chamber of Secrets be opened, and the terrifying things within be used to purify the school and eliminate all Muggle-born students. And now, Filch the caretaker's cat was petrified, its tail hanging from a torch bracket, and on the wall next to it was written, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." Clearly, this was a very serious incident, and if not handled properly, it could even lead to internal division within Hogwarts. Moreover, this matter could not be concealed. As students saw this scene at the end of the Halloween feast, there were many people present, making it impossible to block the news. Professor Dumbledore made a decisive decision, ordering everyone to return to the Great Hall and tallying the students who had not attended the Halloween feast or had left early. Harley and Hermione happened to be on this list, so Professor Snape volunteered to find the 2 of them. Harley and Hermione followed Professor Snape all the way to the Great Hall. At this time, the other students had already left, and only those who had not come or had left early were there. Harley noticed that Ginny and Neville were also among them. The professors stood at the front of the line, Professor Lockhart wearing a pure gold robe, proudly turning his head, wanting to speak to others. However, it seemed the other professors were unwilling to engage him, but Professor Lockhart didn't seem to feel awkward either. Professor Dumbledore nodded to Professor Snape, cleared his throat. "It seems everyone is here, so I won't waste any more words and will begin directly. But don't be nervous, this is just a simple chat. I believe the professor already told you what happened in the school when he brought you to the Great Hall. So I would like to know, during this time, where were you when you were not in the Great Hall?" After hearing Professor Dumbledore's words, many people's faces turned a little pale. The students began to explain their whereabouts one by one, which was clearly not an easy task. Rather, it was actually a large-scale public shaming. Harley understood this. It was understandable for 15 or 16-year-old boys and girls not to attend the school's unified party. The expressions on the deans' faces also became more varied. They hadn't expected their students to have such rich extracurricular lives. For example, one Hufflepuff boy and one Ravenclaw girl were quite embarrassed, having to explain where they went on a date in front of so many people. The key point was that the boy's chosen location wasn't ideal. He chose to go to the Hogwarts kitchen to enjoy delicious food with the girl at the closest proximity. "Oh, child, I don't think the location you chose was great," Professor Lockhart suddenly interjected. I do know a very good dating spot, I remember when I was there. Thank you, Professor Lockhart. Professor Dumbledore's voice was gentle but firm. I think we have more important matters now, so please wait a moment before displaying your extensive knowledge. Harley couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Professor Lockhart's words were the essence. For a demoness of pleasure, that was absolutely very useful knowledge. Professor Dumbledore, you are so unromantic. No wonder you're still single. Although embarrassed, the students all gave their reasons, and most of them could be verified. Neville was so nervous he was about to cry because he had been afraid to sneak back from the Death Day party early. He finally managed to escape, wanting to get something to eat. But before he even reached the Great Hall, he was caught by Professor Snape, whom he feared most. However, he also benefited from the misfortune, as he could get proof from the ghosts. Professor Dumbledore said he had noted his statement and would inquire with the ghosts. Ginny and Neville were similarly unlucky. Professor, I saw the food at nearly headless Nick's Death Day party, the little girl said with a bitter, pale face, looking very listless. You know, that food was very. Anyway, I went to the bathroom to throw up for a while, and because I had no appetite, I went straight back to the Gryffindor dormitory to rest. My brother, Ron Weasley, witnessed this process and only went to the Great Hall to eat after taking me back to the dormitory. All right, I will verify that with Mr. Weasley. Professor McGonagall nodded, a sympathetic expression on her face. Silly girl, why didn't you learn about ghost food before going to the Death Day party? You must be starving, aren't you? I'll take you to the dining hall to get something to eat right away. You need some hot milk to soothe your stomach. Ginny nodded silently, saying nothing, her pale little face looking very pitiful. I happen to know a very stomach-soothing food that also has beauty benefits. If I weren't in the Great Hall now without tools, I could make it with my eyes closed. Professor Lockhart suddenly interjected, but no one paid him any attention, which made him a little awkward, and he finally obediently shut his mouth. Harley and Hermione's reason for missing the Halloween feast was similar to Neville's, except they tacitly omitted the specific content of their conversation, only saying they were curious about the ghosts gathering. Not to mention whether those ancient histories were discussed there. Just the fact of two beautiful girls and an old ghost intently discussing history seemed exceptionally strange no matter how you looked at it. All right, I will verify that with the ghosts. Professor Dumbledore did not immediately state his position, only nodded. It's getting late, you should all return to your dormitories quickly. Leave the rest to us. Professors, please take the students of your respective houses back to their dormitories, and then return to the Great Hall. Chapter 91. Wandering for half a lifetime, still unable to meet a good master. The next day, all other gossip, including whether the male and female student body presidents were dating, and whether Professor Lockhart had been confessed to by a senior student, was completely forgotten. The little wizards were all discussing Madame Norris's attack in the opening of the Chamber of Secrets. Although Madame Norris had only been Petrificus Totalis, it was a Petrificus Totalis that even Dumbledore, the greatest wizard in the world, couldn't undo on the spot. Although Professor Dumbledore claimed that once the mandrake matured, a special antidote could be prepared to unpetrificus totalis Madame Norris. But this did not prevent the little wizards from discussing the matter repeatedly. The little wizards also tried their best to find information about the Chamber of Secrets. The few copies of Hogwarts, a history that had always been ignored in the library were all borrowed for the first time. When Hermione wanted to borrow the book, she was surprised to find that the reservation list was already 2 weeks long. However, Harley did not join the discussion, but was pondering the clues she already knew. During the holidays, a house elf, and most likely a house elf owned by a pure-blood family, came to stop me from going to Hogwarts. According to its one-sided account, it believed that Hogwarts would be in great danger this year. For my safety, Dobby wanted to stop me from coming to school as much as possible. Considering it's a humanoid creature, its identity is suspicious, and it refuses to talk about more information. Moreover, it has a magic contract on it, so it shouldn't be able to tell me these things without being instructed. Harley leaned on the sofa in the common room. Hermione lay on her lap, enjoying Harley's nimble hands massaging her. However, Harley's mind was not on this, but quickly summarizing the information she already knew. Could it be that after someone planned this series of dangers, someone among the planners wanted to withdraw halfway? Is that why the betrayer chose to send Dobby to warn me? Thinking of this, Harley raised one hand. Under the white silk glove on that hand, there was a dark red mark hidden in the skin. The contract with Dobby went smoothly, no one stopped it. A hint of confusion appeared in Harley's eyes. Why did you stop? Hermione felt Harley stop massaging, and opened her eyes to ask. This massage opportunity cost her a lot, and she pestered Harley for a long time to get it, so not a minute could be wasted. It's nothing, Harley gently rubbed Hermione's face with the back of her hand. I suddenly remembered the correct way to understand a knowledge point, so I got distracted. Saying that, Harley continued to massage Hermione. Hermione thought she was enjoying it, but Harley also felt she had made a small profit. As for the Chamber of Secrets, the contract would be fully established in 2 days anyway, so it wouldn't be too late to ask Dobby then. In the following days, although no more attacks occurred, the intensity of the matter did not subside. After Hermione boldly questioned Professor Binns about the Chamber of Secrets in History of Magic class and received a lot of information, all the little wizards seemed to have activated a new switch. That's right, for an ancient and great existence like Slytherin, the Chamber of Secrets left behind must be extremely hidden. So, how could one possibly find the Chamber of Secrets by looking through books like Hogwarts, a history? Clearly, those ancient ghosts were the best choice, such as Hufflepuff's the Fat Friar, and Gryffindor's nearly headless Nick. Everyone tried their best to choose those ancient and easy-to-talk-to ghosts. As for ghosts like Peeves, who caused trouble everywhere, and Myrtle, who always cried, they were ignored by everyone. After all, they weren't that easy to talk to. Of course, there was one ghost who wasn't easy to talk to, but was pestered by many little wizards, and that was Slytherin's the Bloody Baron. After all, this was Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, and the Bloody Baron's ancient clothing was said to be at least 800 years old. So many people believed that the Bloody Baron must know something. Because of this, the Bloody Baron was even annoyed enough to be forced to seek help from Professor Snape, and Professor Snape was also happy to take the opportunity to deduct a large number of points from other houses. Especially since he had recently given Harley a bit too many points, it was time to balance things out and put pressure on Gryffindor. On Saturday night this week, looking at her roommates already asleep in the dormitory, Harley quietly slipped out of bed. The contract with Dobby was fully established, and Harley successfully utilized the vague concept of the House Elf's core contract pointing to all wizards, combined with other rituals, to change Dobby's master to herself. Now she should be able to ask Dobby exactly what happened. Harley sneaked out of the school and skillfully arrived in the Forbidden Forest. Next time I need to find a secret room in Hogwarts Castle, otherwise it's inconvenient for anything I need to do alone. Harley thought to herself, taking off the white silk glove on her hand. On the back of her hand, the dark red mark hidden in her skin emerged. Harley admired the mark, then, following the way Nicholas Flamel summoned house elves in his home, she softly called out, "Dobby!" Pop! With a piercing shriek, Dobby instantly appeared in front of Harley. Harley had expected it to be like those slaves from the southern continent, still loyally missing its old master after being forcibly changed its allegiance. Unexpectedly, Dobby let out a surprised shriek. Harley Potter! It seemed to want to hug Harley, but it was mindful of its dirty self, so it didn't dare to step forward, only bowing deeply and saying loudly, "Harley Potter is truly great. She rescued Dobby from the wicked dark wizard." Harley was a bit confused. According to the magic on house elves that she learned from Nicholas, shouldn't Dobby now hate her immensely and call her a demon? Why was it instead so grateful to her? Dobby was still expressing its gratitude to Harley, who sharply said, "Dobby, stop talking. I have something to ask you." Of course, it is Dobby's honor, and Dobby's duty. The house elf shrieked. "All right then, I ask you, I snatched your ownership from your original master, don't you hate me?" Harley first asked the question she was most curious about right now. "Of course not," Dobby said loudly, "rather, it is Dobby's honor. Dobby's original master was a bad person. A very evil wizard." At this point, Dobby suddenly trembled all over, wanting to bang its head on the ground. However, Harley immediately used her authority to stop it and forbade Dobby from self-harming. Harley Potter is truly great. Although she doesn't want to listen to Dobby's advice, she still thinks of Dobby. The house elf's eyes immediately filled with tears. Dobby is still not used to speaking ill of its original master, but it's so good to be free from them. Although Dobby doesn't know why its original master didn't give Dobby clothes, Dobby's master became the great Harley Potter, but this is Dobby's honor. Dobby knows Harley Potter saved it. Chapter 92, Faith that Transcends Racial Constraints. After Harley chatted with Dobby for a while, she roughly understood what had happened. Dobby's original master, Lucius Malfoy, was the patriarch of one of Britain's top pure-blood families, and he had followed Lord Voldemort as a Death Eater. However, the House of Malfoy was inherently cunning, and Lucius was no easy target. There was always a rumor among other wizards, "You will never see a Malfoy at a crime scene." Despite being very strong in combat, exceptionally skilled, and even proficient in wandless casting, Lucius never displayed his abilities in actual combat. Instead, he focused on showcasing his money-making ability and perceived weakness, leading Lord Voldemort to appoint him as an important person in charge of logistics. For various reasons, Lord Voldemort entrusted an important dark arts item to Lucius Malfoy for safekeeping. If Lord Voldemort remained powerful, this item would forever lie in the deepest part of the House of Malfoy's treasury, well preserved. Unfortunately, Lord Voldemort himself was incompetent, left half dead, and a fair-weather friend naturally had to choose to side with others. Additionally, recently, Arthur Weasley, the patriarch of the Weasley family, who had always been at odds with the House of Malfoy, repeatedly searched for dark arts items held by the House of Malfoy. To evade the searches and to undermine Arthur Weasley's laws protecting Muggles, Lucius chose to secretly slip this dark arts item to Ginny. And this dark arts item, according to Lord Voldemort, was the key to opening the Chamber of Secrets. Lucius certainly played his cards well. Harley mused over Lucius's intentions after hearing Dobby's words. After opening the Chamber of Secrets, Muggle-born students will be purged. And it would be Arthur Weasley's daughter, who has always advocated for the protection of Muggles, who would be responsible for the deaths of Muggle-born students. If discovered, it would have a huge impact on Arthur's reputation, creating strong public pressure. And if not discovered, then the purging of Muggle-born students would satisfy Lucius's beliefs, benefiting him greatly with no harm. This Lucius is no fool. Indeed, Draco Malfoy lowered the intelligence floor of Lucius's family. One cannot measure other pure-blood families by that little brat's intelligence. Harley recalled Ginny's performance these past few days. Although she wasn't particularly close with her, Harley had paid a little attention to the delicate-looking young girl. Of course, this was instinct, the instinct of a witch, absolutely not any other messy factors. However, that young girl indeed hadn't been in good spirits during this time, her face pale. Harley had initially thought she was frightened by what happened a while ago, as Ginny had also been subjected to the school's scrutiny. Now it seems that might not be the case. According to Harley's understanding of sealed items, more advanced sealed items can easily drain the life force of their holders. This seems to align quite well with Ginny's situation. It seems I need to find some time to play the role of a thief. Harley unconsciously drew circles on the ground with her left foot, her mind working rapidly. Then she waved her hand. Dobby, you go back first. But the house elf uncharacteristically did not immediately obey the command. Instead, his eyes glistened, brimming with tears. Great Master, Harley Potter, can Dobby not stay by your side? Dobby has always longed for this day. I'm sorry, Dobby. Harley squatted down and gave Dobby a kind smile. My methods earlier were a bit rough, but that was for your own good, to rescue you from the evil House of Malfoy. But now, I have a mission for you. Can you do it? Of course. Dobby exclaimed with some surprise, standing perfectly straight. As long as Harley Potter needs it, Dobby can dig out his own heart. Oh, that won't be necessary. You are an important friend of mine. Harley's voice grew even softer. I just need you to stay in the House of Malfoy as usual and obey their commands. Of course, if they order you to torment yourself, you should pretend to hide in the shadows to torment yourself, and use magic to fake injuries, actually prohibiting yourself from harm. I have disguised the contract. They will not discover that your actual master is me. And your mission is to gather as much information as possible for me about the House of Malfoy, and also about other pure-blood dark wizards. Lord Voldemort is not completely dead. I saw him last semester, so he is very likely to be resurrected in the future. And at that time, the information you provide will play a very important role. Are you willing to complete this mission? Upon hearing Harley consider him a friend, Dobby was already crying uncontrollably. After Harley finished speaking, Dobby nodded vigorously. Of course, Dobby will definitely complete this mission. If Dobby cannot complete it, then Dobby would rather cut off his own head. With that, Dobby disappeared with a pop sound. Harley looked at the spot where Dobby had vanished, sighing softly. Was it hatred for dark wizards? Or some other reason? According to Harley's understanding, Dobby's pursuit of certain things even surpassed the contractual magic that bound him, allowing him to defy his master's commands to a certain extent. This could be said to be a very powerful belief, so powerful that even Harley, Indemoness of Unaging who had seen countless deaths, was moved by it. After all, that was a belief that transcended the magical restraints of his race. But if he discovered the true nature of the witch, what would his attitude be? But it didn't matter, an excellent witch was very good at disguising herself. Honestly, such a servant was really useful. Harley's mind was filled with thoughts, and her figure quickly disappeared into the moonlight. Returning to her dormitory, the night was deep. Harley was fully equipped at this time and in excellent condition, so she chose to directly sneak into Ginny's dormitory to retrieve the dark arts item Dobby had mentioned. That thing was too dangerous to be left with a pretty young girl, it was simply unsafe. Harley could only choose to descend into the abyss herself. Where was Ginny's room again? Wait a minute, it seems to be diagonally opposite my room. Is it that close? Harley, relying on her night vision, carefully identified the surroundings of the girls' dormitory and quickly found the room where Ginny lived. This room had the same structure as Harley's dormitory, so Harley skillfully made her way to the desk. No, this is Miss Chapman's book, this isn't it either. Harley cautiously and silently flipped through the books on the desk, but her wand always stayed close to her wrist, ready to slide out of her sleeve at any moment. Who knew what effects that dark arts item might have? It was always good to be careful. This was an invaluable lesson Harley had learned from the deaths of many extraordinary individuals, a lesson she would never forget. Chapter 93 The audience channel is damned. Finally, Harley confirmed Ginny's bed. However, after a thorough search, Harley couldn't find the plain black diary Dobby had described. Is it on the bed? Does Ginny keep items she considers too precious close to her person? Harley's gaze fell upon the bed, and she decided to use some special methods. Deep slumber. Harley took out a bottle of herbal extract representing the domain of night and performed a ritual. This was far more effective than the draft of living death, which only worked when ingested, and didn't require high potion-making talent. Simple extraction methods that even muggles could master were enough to extract the herbal essence, which could then be used in a ritual. After a simple ritual, Harley successfully put Ginny into a deep slumber. Then she directly climbed onto Ginny's bed, carefully searching for any potential dark arts items. Harley even searched Ginny's pajamas, but still found nothing. It wasn't entirely nothing, as Harley confirmed that Ginny had indeed possessed a sealed item, or rather, a dark arts item, because the girl's vitality was slightly weak. However, through a small ritual of the life domain, Harley could determine that Ginny's vitality was no longer draining. What's going on? A hint of confusion appeared in Harley's eyes. She was very confident in her perception abilities. Even if the dark arts item was very good at hiding, with Dobby's description of its appearance, Harley was confident she wouldn't miss it. After all, a black diary of no small size was definitely not a minor item and not so easy to hide. According to Dobby's description, there was no magic fluctuation on that diary, but Lucius Malfoy treated it with great solemnity and called it the key to opening the Chamber of Secrets. So, what kind of dark arts item could a diary create? Could it communicate with its holder by writing in it, thereby hypnotizing and controlling the holder? Harley analyzed based on her past experiences. Indeed, this should be the most probable outcome. In that case, this diary might have a certain degree of self-awareness, belonging to the type of sealed item with living characteristics. When Ginny was being investigated by the school as a suspect, it sensed danger and manipulated its holder to transfer itself elsewhere. Harley quickly analyzed what she believed to be the closest situation to the truth. This situation was troublesome. When Harley returned to her dormitory and lay on her bed, she couldn't help but rub her temples. A sealed item made by a demigod-level powerhouse would most likely have a power that could threaten her current self. And she and Lord Voldemort were mortal enemies, so it wasn't surprising for such a living, sealed item to target her. Even if it didn't target her, having such a sealed item hidden in an unknown corner nearby was truly unsettling. But the school was so big, and Harley had no good way to search for it. As for telling Professor Dumbledore, don't be ridiculous, Harley herself wasn't clean. Among other things, forcibly taking someone else's slave, especially a highly valuable one, was a serious crime in any world. But without exposing this point, there was no way to explain her source of information. Besides, although she had good relationships with most people in the school, Harley didn't actually care about their lives or deaths. For the demoness of Unaging, the only one she cherished now was Hermione. As for the rest, they were just anchors. If they were gone, then they were gone. Harley secretly decided in her heart to pay a little attention to Ginny and see if she could get more news about the diary later. Other than that, protecting Hermione would suffice. In the next few days, Harley didn't notice anything unusual about Ginny. Moreover, Ginny's complexion was getting better and better, and her originally pale face gradually became rosy. However, the girl seemed to have no memory of what had happened recently. When Harley occasionally probed, the little wizards looked confused and had no idea what she was talking about. If Ginny's acting wasn't too superb, enough to deceive the demoness of Unaging who had lived for so long, then her memory must have been modified. A sealed item similar to the spectator pathway. Harley summarized the information she had, feeling a little annoyed. A sealed item similar to the spectator pathway. Spectators are really damn annoying. The types of Beyonders Harley least wanted to face were those from the Diviner, Marauder, Apprentice, and Spectator pathways. Each of them wasn't strong in direct combat, but they had many annoying tricks and strong self-preservation abilities. This diary was also like that. It looked incredibly difficult to find, leaving no loopholes. The excitement surrounding the Chamber of Secrets quickly faded. After all, only one cat was attacked, and it was the cat of the most unpopular caretaker, Filch. And after that, no second attack occurred. Professor Lockhart claimed that his presence deterred the potential attacker, but most little wizards chose to ignore him, with only a few ardent fans still expressing support. The students were more willing to believe that the Chamber of Secrets had never actually been opened, but rather that someone had learned a powerful Petrificus Totalis and wanted to strike at Filch. They even began to regard the attacker as a hero, as Filch's success rate in catching students out after hours significantly decreased without his cat. The only ones who were probably not happy were Slytherin, but they didn't have time to be happy, because Quidditch season had begun. On the first Saturday of November, the first Quidditch match, old rivals Gryffindor faced Slytherin. The Slytherin were full of confidence. After all, their famous alumnus, Mr. Lucius Malfoy, had generously donated 7 Nimbus 2001s. Those were the best brooms on the market. Because of this news, Malfoy strutted around the school every day with pride, like a peacock displaying its feathers. But he soon lost his cheer when someone secretly threw 2 dung bombs on his head and spread rumors that Malfoy's skill wasn't enough, and he had paid his way into the Slytherin team through improper means. It's unknown what the Slytherin thought, but the other 3 houses certainly believed the news and discussed it widely. The Gryffindor were especially happy. After all, Malfoy was a newcomer. If they could put mental pressure on him, he might even perform poorly on the field. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were also happy to watch the fun, as Slytherin had always been arrogant and truly obnoxious. Moreover, Slytherin itself was not a monolithic block. The House of Malfoy was prominent and naturally, other pure-blood families wanted to bring them down. Especially the former Seeker, Terence Higgs. He was not an easy target. Although the Higgs family was not one of the sacred 28 pure-blood families, they were still an old pure-blood family. After inexplicably being robbed of his Seeker position, Terence was not at all averse to creating some small troubles for Malfoy. The news that Malfoy had joined the team through improper means was first spread by him. He also secretly sold some Slytherin tactics anonymously through the school's black market. As long as Malfoy lost more spectacularly, he would have more hope of getting his Seeker position back. As for what would happen to Slytherin, he didn't care. Chapter 94 Welcome to the arena, and say goodbye. Under this tense atmosphere, the Quidditch match officially began. As 11 o'clock approached, the entire school, faculty and students, started heading to the Quidditch pitch. On the way, Professor Lockhart even tried to promote his Quidditch achievements, but no one paid him any mind except for a few young witches. Outside, the weather was muggy and humid, with a faint rumble of thunder in the air. The members of the Gryffindor Quidditch team quickly put on their bright red Gryffindor robes, with Gryffindor students constantly coming to cheer them on. Everyone hoped that Gryffindor would teach Slytherin a good lesson, especially since Slytherin had been exceptionally arrogant recently. Especially Malfoy, Wood had already agreed with his teammates to give this guy, who got into the team through favoritism, a little Gryffindor shock. Fred, George, you two need to really target that uninhibited kid. Wood shouted loudly. I still remember him insulting Miss Granger during his first training session at the start of the term. Don't worry, Wood, Fred said, shouldering his bat and whistling loudly, I'll make him remember the red-haired Weasley forever. Today will be a slaughter. A slaughter against Slytherin. George also agreed. Both teams emerged from their respective changing rooms, and the stadium immediately erupted in noise. 3/4 of the entire stands were a sea of red, with people from 3 houses cheering for Gryffindor. However, Slytherin also frantically booed Gryffindor, though their shouts were not uniform, and some people were playing dirty tricks. Lee's voice also rang out at the opportune moment. Dear Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and the detestable Slytherin, the 1992-1993 Hogwarts Quidditch match has officially begun. As he spoke, Lee deftly dodged several unknown objects thrown by Slytherin and ignored Professor McGonagall's murderous gaze. I believe everyone has been looking forward to this Quidditch match. After all, this is a battle between the great Gryffindor and the evil Slytherin. Lee. Professor McGonagall roared furiously, do you no longer want this commentator position? Oh, I'm sorry, dear Professor McGonagall, I'm just stating a truth that all spectators acknowledge. Lee offered an insincere apology, then quickly changed the subject. As you can see, both the Gryffindor and Slytherin teams have undergone a few changes. On the Gryffindor side, Miss Harley Potter and Miss Katie Bell have made a small rotation. My good brothers Fred and George told me that this is their secret tactic. Of course, Slytherin has also added a new seeker. Mr. Draco Malfoy, relying on his ample funds and his rather questionable skills, has replaced the unfortunate Terence. It must be said that Lee was very good at provoking people. Harley could clearly see Malfoy's face turn bright red. He made a rude gesture at Lee, which drew a chorus of boos from the stands. But Malfoy didn't feel embarrassed for too long, because the match had begun. Under Madame Hooch's supervision, Flint and Wood shook hands, then both teams' players ascended into the air. Tactic 1. Wood shouted the moment they took off. Harley gripped her broom tightly and plunged into the Slytherin formation first. After all, among all of Gryffindor, only Harley's broom could barely contend with Slytherin's Nimbus 2001. Lee's voice pierced through the entire stadium. Flint starts with the quaffle, but Harley is leading the charge, rushing into the Slytherin formation first. This isn't a wise choice. Slytherin is best at flanking and colliding. But Harley dodged it, and stole the quaffle from Flint. Angelina and Alicia are both rushing forward. Are the Gryffindor heroines going to score through teamwork? No, this is just a feint. While Slytherin goes to defend the two veterans, Harley has broken into the scoring zone alone. Goal. Harley scored the first goal directly with the cooperation of her two teammates. After all, according to a former Slytherin player who wished to remain anonymous, Slytherin did not take Harley seriously. Chasers need strong physiques, what could a light, delicate girl like Harley do? However, Slytherin quickly adjusted their tactics afterwards. Although Professor Snape had forbidden direct physical harm to Harley, if they just knocked down the other Gryffindor players, Harley would be left to struggle alone. After all, Gryffindor's chasers were all light-bodied girls, while Slytherin had chosen a group of burly men, and no substitute players were allowed during a Quidditch match. Angelina dodged another bludger again. Good girl, her waist is really flexible. I've asked her out so many times, but she never wants to. Hey, what's that? Lee suddenly let out a strange cry, then laughed and said he had missing. Under Lee's cover, Fred, while the audience and Professor McGonagall weren't paying attention, swung his bat at Slytherin's chaser, Adrian Pusey. Unfortunately, Adrian reacted quickly, and Madame Hooch wasn't distracted by Lee's little trick. Although Fred kept arguing that Adrian's head looked too much like a bludger, so he mistook it, Madame Hooch didn't pay him any attention. Slytherin got a penalty shot, but Wood made an excellent save. Slowly, the match started to turn ugly. Both teams' beaters were having some minor eye problems, frequently mistaking the opposing chasers and seekers' heads for bludgers to hit. Malfoy's backside was hit by George's bat, and George's left hand took a hard hit from a bludger launched by Slytherin's beater, Bull. Both teams' chasers also refused to be outdone and began to engage in direct physical attacks. Slytherin was tall and strong, but Gryffindor was agile. In this environment where they were practically fighting in earnest, Harley quickly widened the score gap. After all, everyone was fighting, so how could a single keeper stop her? Look, Katie is accelerating. Lee suddenly shouted, she's speeding towards the Slytherin stands. Katie rapidly accelerated, charging diagonally towards Slytherin. Malfoy also quickly propelled his broom to chase after her, putting in all his effort. His skill was indeed not bad, and his broom was superior, all he lacked now was an opportunity to prove himself. And in this match, he had to catch the golden snitch to clear his name from the accusation of favoritism. Unfortunately, as an excellent newcomer, Malfoy's only lacking quality was experience. Just as they were about to crash into the stands, Malfoy and Katie were almost neck and neck. But Katie pulled her broom up in time, while Malfoy, unprepared, plunged headfirst into the stands. However, it's hard to say if this was a good thing for him. At least Pansy Parkinson, who was hit, was exceptionally surprised. The boy she secretly admired falling from the sky, could such a good thing happen? But in an instant, she became unhappy, because Malfoy, at the Nimbus 2001's fastest speed, crashed into her fiercely. In the nick of time, Pansy deftly moved out of the way, revealing the seat beneath her bottom. A loud bang echoed, clearly audible throughout the entire stadium. Welcome to the Quidditch pitch, little Slytherin rookie. Katie shouted loudly. And by the way, goodbye, and good riddance. Chapter 95 Malfoy on the verge of death. The game was suspended, and everyone landed on the ground. The Slytherins gathered around anxiously, at least the team members were genuinely worried. After all, such a generous sponsor was hard to find. They were still hoping Malfoy would be happy and throw in tens of thousands of galleons for new equipment. If it weren't for the bad relations with other houses, Flint would have wanted to talk to other captains. Wouldn't it be great if everyone played some exhibition matches, allowing Malfoy, the school board's young master, to retire with a 100% win rate, maintaining his title as the #1 seeker in Hogwarts Quidditch League history. Afterward, everyone could split the money. How good would that be? Harley watched the dying Malfoy from afar, without a shred of sympathy. In his current state, he was still far from death. Even if Malfoy really died, it wouldn't shake the witch who had seen death so many times. Besides, who told him to insult Hermione? In Harley's heart, his death was well deserved. Harley just sighed. Quidditch was indeed a dangerous sport, only a tiny bit safer than the catching stone balls with cauldrons on your head sport. When a broom's speed is pushed to its limit, even crashing into soft grass can cause pain. And crashing into a stone seat, not dying on the spot, was already good. After all, there really had been players who died this way in history, in more than one. Harley had seen such cases in several books about Quidditch. One could only say Malfoy was incredibly lucky. He was unlucky because his current state was unknown in terms of how close he was to death, but it certainly wasn't far off. But he was also lucky because the Nimbus 2001, as the latest broom, still had some protective magic on it. Under the protection of this magic, although Malfoy's forehead had a close encounter with stone at high speed, it didn't explode on the spot like a ripe tomato. Malfoy was now just silently unconscious, his breath faint, and blood streaming from his forehead. Even more fortunately, Professor Snape, a potions master and a master of magic, was right beside Malfoy. Professor Snape immediately pulled out several therapeutic potions and poured them over Malfoy's head. After all, Malfoy's head was already bloody, and he was completely unconscious, so the potion couldn't be poured into his mouth. After pouring the potion, Professor Snape drew his wand and quickly cast 2 simple hemostatic spells. At the same time, he cursed inwardly. He really shouldn't have given Lucius special treatment. He originally just wanted to build a good relationship with Lucius and incidentally get a batch of good brooms for Slytherin. In fact, Professor Snape didn't expect Malfoy to score points. He only hoped that with the Nimbus 2001, the other Slytherin players could rack up a big score just by scoring goals. But who would have thought Malfoy would be so useless? Without a seeker, wouldn't Gryffindor just score points freely? Harley was really something. Even after changing positions, she still played so excellently. One can only say, Harley was truly outstanding, worthy of being Lily's child. As for Harley's father, who was good at Quidditch and played as a chaser, and the fact that Harley's mother was not good at Quidditch, all of it was thrown to the back of Professor Snape's mind. Magic is subjective. As long as I pretend not to know, nothing exists. Madame Pomfrey also rushed over quickly. She complained about the safety of Quidditch while skillfully treating Malfoy's injuries. After all, she was experienced. In the history of Hogwarts, Malfoy's injury method didn't even rank in the top 20. At this moment, Professor Lockhart shouted from outside the crowd to let him in, claiming he could heal Malfoy's injuries in 1 second. He also claimed to have cast these spells countless times with his eyes closed. However, no one paid attention to him. Students from other houses were busy celebrating, and Slytherin students were busy showing concern, at least on the surface. As for Professor Lockhart's deliberate attempts to emphasize his presence, it only made people dislike him more. On the Quidditch pitch, Wood came to Katie's side, comforting the girl. "Don't worry too much, your actions are legal and compliant, no one can trouble you. Besides, Madame Pomfrey and Professor Snape are both here, Malfoy won't die. Thank you for your concern, Wood." Katie had been trembling a bit, fearing Malfoy would really die and she would be convicted of murder. After hearing Wood's comfort, she felt much better. At this moment, the crowd suddenly erupted into a commotion. A silver-white phoenix descended from the sky and landed on Professor McGonagall's shoulder. It spoke Professor Dumbledore's voice. "Game terminated, another attack has occurred." Upon hearing this news, Professor McGonagall didn't bother to ask for more information and casually cast a sonorous charm on herself. Then Professor McGonagall shouted, "As notified by the principal, the game is cancelled. Everyone return to the common rooms immediately. Prefects of each house, please fulfill your responsibilities." A dissatisfied commotion immediately broke out in the crowd. Most people didn't know what had happened, only that the Quidditch game was inexplicably cancelled. The Gryffindors were particularly displeased, as they were already leading by a large margin. Without a seeker for the Slytherins, couldn't they just score as many points as they wanted? However, Professor McGonagall didn't try to explain the reason. After all, when Professor Dumbledore transmitted his voice, there were still many students around. Professor McGonagall, knowing the students' nature, believed they would spread the news. Soon, well-informed little wizards learned what had happened through portraits and ghosts. The second victim appeared, a Gryffindor, and a Muggle-born little wizard. Colin Creevey, the little wizard who always carried a camera and took pictures everywhere. The deans began to count in their houses who hadn't gone to the Quidditch pitch during the game. As Harley expected, Ginny was not absent this time and was in very good spirits. It seemed the diary was truly alive and had moved. This is troublesome. Harley stared at the substitute wand in her hand, wondering if she had any life-saving items that Hermione could use. But unfortunately, it seemed not. The substitute wand and the substitute magic mirror were the witch's innate abilities. Harley had not converted them into corresponding occult knowledge to replicate them. Do I really need to tell the professors? Harley frowned, but in the end, decided not to say anything. Anyway, she and Hermione were inseparable, often even staying over in each other's beds. As for others, the inherently cold-hearted witch wouldn't care. Chapter 96. Don't care about life or death, just fight if you don't agree. After an entire afternoon of searching, the professors found nothing. However, out of caution, dinner that day was delivered directly to the common rooms of each house. In the following days, fear spread rapidly among the students. On Halloween, almost all the students felt nothing. After all, it was only a cat that was harmed, and it was Madame Norris, the cat of Filch, their most disliked caretaker, who had caught numerous students out after hours. As long as it didn't harm them, everyone felt it was none of their business, some even watching the situation with amusement. After all, standing from a distance and mocking Filch's pitiful appearance as he wandered the corridors searching for the culprit was an activity that most students found enjoyable. But now it was different. A student had been attacked. Although he was a first-year student, and a Muggle-born, it was enough to cause fear. If Muggle-born students could be attacked today, would Half-Bloods be next tomorrow? Currently, the victims were only petrified. Would they die directly later? Or even be tortured before dying? No one knew, and no one could answer. When disaster might affect them, most people panicked. Harley found this situation very familiar. Back when the goddess of the night targeted the Mysteries Society sought help from the Demonist sect. But the Demonist sect ignored them, feeling superior because they had a true god, acting haughty and aloof. As a result, the Mysteries Society later aligned with Intis's intelligence department and barely survived. Then it was the Demonist sect's turn to be targeted by the Red Gloves. Ultimately, the Demonist sect completely dispersed. Apart from a headquarters and a few important branches, most members adopted a master-apprentice model, which prevented them from being wiped out by the Church of the Night. After all, this is human nature. Harley was not surprised by this. In the days that followed, rumors spread throughout the school, and everyone became suspicious. Students began moving in groups, fearing that if they were alone, they would be turned into a new statue. Various amulets were constantly exchanged among students. Whether they worked or not, at least they bought peace of mind. Only the Slytherins were the most composed, even becoming more arrogant. After all, the so-called Chamber of Secrets was the Chamber of Slytherin. It couldn't possibly attack a Slytherin, could it? Moreover, Slytherin had just suffered an unprecedented defeat a while ago, with their seeker almost dying. Although the Golden Snitch hadn't been caught, the game was forcibly stopped. But Harley alone scored over 150 points, and the game result was valid and could not be replayed. Therefore, the Little Snakes of Slytherin now urgently needed to regain their morale and boost their confidence. The opening of the Chamber of Secrets was a very good option. Consequently, during this period, Slytherins walked around swaggering, looking down on everyone. You, a bunch of people who don't know when you'll be kicked out of Hogwarts, what right do you have to study with us? In short, what class are you? However, students from other houses did not tolerate them. The Little Lions of Gryffindor had always been at odds with Slytherin, while the Eagles of Ravenclaw, though not looking for trouble, were not afraid of it and refused to be looked down upon. As for the Little Badgers of Hufflepuff, they were badgers. The badgers, also known as honey badgers. Badgers eat snakes, and for honey badgers, life and death are trivial. If you're not convinced, fight. Coupled with the atmosphere of fear in the school, and fear breeds violence. The atmosphere in the school suddenly became exceptionally tense, often erupting into vicious incidents where Slytherins would single-handedly challenge students from the other three houses. Many students were sent to the school infirmary because of this, especially the Little Snakes of Slytherin. Having mushrooms growing all over them was not a comfortable experience. Draco Malfoy was quite happy, because he finally had acquaintances to keep him company. When he was first injured, Lucius furiously came to Hogwarts, then slinked away shamefully. Before arriving, the news he received was that Draco was severely injured, his life hanging in the balance. Lucius's first reaction was that political rivals were targeting him, ambushing Draco. And Hogwarts had failed in its duty of protection. Before coming, he had prepared to cause a huge scene at Hogwarts, even at the cost of his own life, fighting Dumbledore and his political rivals. Using tactics against each other in the Ministry of Magic was acceptable, setting legal traps was acceptable, and attacking the House of Malfoy's businesses was also acceptable. But whoever dared to harm Draco, he would fight to the death. If Draco died, no one would have an easy time. But after coming to the school and understanding the situation, well, he no longer had the face to cause a scene. As a pure-blood wizard who thought highly of himself, Lucius also greatly valued and loved Quidditch. He himself was a Quidditch enthusiast, collecting all models of flying brooms and possessing many professional players' autographs. Otherwise, he wouldn't have donated 7 Nimbus 2001s to Slytherin in one go. Even with money, you don't burn it like that. But what did he hear? Lucius heard from various professors and students that Draco had crashed into the Slytherin stands because of his lack of skill. What was there to fuss about? Lucius wished he had never known about this, he couldn't afford to lose face. But Draco Malfoy was depressed. He had originally thought his school board father would come to seek justice, expel the Gryffindor who had caused him trouble, and scold that old man Dumbledore. But now, he was the one being scolded. Lucius even demanded that Draco, if his skills didn't improve quickly, Professor Snape should directly kick him off the team. This kept little Malfoy in a bad mood throughout his hospital stay, only improving slightly when his Slytherin friends came to visit him. The professors also felt helpless about the current situation in the school. Although most of Hogwarts' professors were powerful wizards, the 4 deans could even overpower the head of the Auror office. But they were essentially still humans, individuals, so their energy had limits. While needing to search for the Chamber of Secrets, find the person who opened it, and the monster within, as well as teach students and manage the houses, they simply didn't have the capacity to attend to every student's psychological well-being. Fortunately, this situation improved greatly later, because a few Slytherin students, during a brawl with Gryffindors, accidentally injured a Hufflepuff Muggle-born little witch. Professor Sprout, usually kind-hearted, lost her temper for the first time and severely punished those students by making them brew dragon dung fertilizer for her. Even more terrifying, this detention would last until the end of the term. After that, most students became much more restrained, and Hogwarts finally managed to somewhat return to peace. Chapter 97 Lockhart wants to fulfill his dream. In this not-so-peaceful environment, time flew by, and December arrived, with Christmas finally approaching. Both teachers and students breathed a sigh of relief. Many students eagerly signed the departure list, as they all felt the school was truly unsafe. According to Harley, more than half of Gryffindor chose to leave, and other houses were much the same. Hermione had originally wanted to invite Harley to her home for Christmas, as she was very concerned about Harley's safety. Moreover, the Grangers were very welcoming of Harley as a guest. After Hermione told them about Harley's experiences, they all felt immense sympathy for Harley. However, Harley was unwilling to leave school for Christmas, so Hermione could only give up and decided to stay to accompany Harley. The professors were also happy to have a leisurely holiday. The thought of Christmas being 2 weeks away, with most students going home and nothing much happening during that time, makes me feel relieved, Professor McGonagall said to the other teachers in the professors' common room, taking a sip of her goji berry tea with a contented expression. Professor Flitwick nodded in agreement, subtly using magic to conceal his dark circles. But the professors soon realized they had rejoiced too soon. Their free time seemed less than they had imagined. Because Professor Lockhart, after pestering Professor Dumbledore for 3 whole weeks, successfully applied for a new opportunity to show off. He finally got his own club approved and decided to do something lively before Christmas arrived. As everyone knows, professors all have their own small clubs, such as Professor Snape's Potions Club and Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration Club. Of course, professors generally select suitable students from third-year students to join, as by then, the basic knowledge of all subjects has usually been covered. Students who choose to join a club will not be completely lost or unable to keep up with lessons after joining. Professors will not repeat first and second-year basic knowledge in the club. Of course, Professor Snape had once wanted to invite Harley in her first year, but considering that one-on-one lessons seemed more effective, he abandoned the idea. He merely quietly adjusted the club's schedule. The Potions Club, which used to meet 2 to 3 times a week, was now only once on Saturday evenings. Lockhart had always wanted to join the professors' clubs when he was a student, but no professor was willing to invite him. Although his grades were indeed good, he almost always got full marks on every written exam, with at most a few points deducted, his evaluation still being O, and his practical skills were also passable. To clarify, although it's graded as O.P.A., Hermione mentioned in the first book that she got 127 points in charms. So the author speculates that there should be a score range corresponding to a grading standard, like 150 to 120 being an O. More specific details are hard to guess. But Lockhart's overly flamboyant behavior made the professors keep their distance from him, fearing he would turn their clubs into the Worship Lockhart Club. Now that Professor Lockhart had an opportunity, he naturally wanted to fulfill his old dream. Although he couldn't join a club, forming his own club wasn't bad either. And to highlight his good name, Professor Lockhart chose to directly post a notice on the school's bulletin board, stating that all students could attend the dueling club. To give the students a surprise, he also deliberately concealed his name. When the students realize I'm the one hosting this club, they'll surely worship me even more. On the first night, Professor Lockhart had a nail in his mouth and was wielding a hammer. However, the nail couldn't shut him up, so he was still chatting indistinctly with Filch. Filch, holding a stack of parchment nearby, was deeply moved to see Professor Lockhart not using magic to accommodate his feelings, so he nodded repeatedly. But the other professors didn't think so. After hearing the news from Principal Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, as the deputy principal, hardly slept a wink all night. After all, the deans believed they were quite clear about Professor Lockhart's actual level. And during this time, Hogwarts was not very peaceful, and the little wizards were almost fighting for real. Now Lockhart had set up a dueling club. Wasn't that just pure fuel to the fire? With him being such a novice, could he control the students? So, after dinner the next day, students who saw the notice gathered in the Great Hall, all in high spirits. On one hand, it was for their own safety, and on the other hand, it was because in the melees during this period, many students found that fists were even more useful than a wand. But how could this be? How could a wizard use his fists? So everyone wanted to learn a systematic and magical way of dueling. However, the teacher's table was the exact opposite. Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and Professor Flitwick, the three deans, all looked grim and chose not to leave. Professor Sprout hadn't been to the Great Hall for dinner in a long time to take care of the mandrake. Although she also knew that Professor Lockhart was up to some new shenanigans, she was powerless to do anything. As for the other deans, they were forced to stay for the safety of their students. Professor Lockhart acted quickly and had already set up a gilded stage in the Great Hall. After all, house elves were very easy to command. Hundreds of candles floated above the stage, illuminating the ceiling brightly. Harley looked up at the sky, a little curious. Was Professor Lockhart really not afraid of candle wax dripping onto his neatly styled hair during a fight? The Great Hall was packed with people. Almost all the students from the school had come. The notice on the bulletin board didn't state which professor had organized the club, and many students thought of Professor Flitwick, who had been a dueling champion in his youth. So everyone was full of anticipation, hoping to learn more. However, upon seeing the gilded stage, the older students showed expressions of pain. They had probably guessed who was hosting this club. Only the flamboyant Professor Lockhart would create such a scene. "It's over, why is it him?" Harley heard a fifth-year student say painfully. "He hasn't taught me anything this year. I feel like I'm going to get AT in my OWL's defense against the dark arts. A professor with so little ability hosting a dueling club is simply a waste of my revision time. Is Professor Lockhart going to teach us?" Hermione also heard what the older student said, then looked disappointed. "Not necessarily, at least the deans haven't left, they can still teach some useful knowledge." Harley pointed towards the teacher's table, comforting Hermione. "Phew, that's good." Hermione patted her chest and let out a long breath. Chapter 98 I Can Kill Him 5 Times. It quickly turned 8 o'clock, the time for the club activities to begin is written on the bulletin board. Professor Lockhart strode confidently through the side door of the Great Hall. His hair had a new style, curled a few times, covering his ears and slightly obscuring his left eye. Professor Lockhart also chose a magenta robe that trailed to his shoes, adorned with various trinkets, and with buttons replaced by gemstones. As for his shoes, Professor Lockhart seemed to have chosen ones with internal lifts, as Harley distinctly felt he was a little taller than usual. Harley's face showed a strange expression as she observed Professor Lockhart's attire. Professor Lockhart's outfit didn't look like he was there to teach a dueling class, it looked more like he was there to teach a dance class. Harley's social dance teacher, that middle-aged woman, used to dress like that when she acted as Harley's male partner. Although Harley never used the female dance steps she was taught, the male dance steps the teacher performed were repeatedly utilized by Harley. Therefore, Harley had a relatively deep memory of that teacher. Memorable as she was, if it weren't for a special sealed artifact, or for the needs of a special ritual, or a special sequence, Professor Lockhart going into battle like that would only get him instantly pulverized. After all, he looked too flamboyant, too conspicuous, definitely the best target for concentrated fire, so he wouldn't even leave a complete corpse. However, Professor Lockhart clearly didn't think so, or rather, he had no such awareness at all. He strode onto the stage, waving and greeting everyone. "Good evening, my dear students." "Oh, no." Harley heard more than one familiar voice, and many hopeful students wailed, feeling they were wasting their time. "I might as well go back and perfect my canary transfiguration. I've already come up with a fantastic idea, but because of this dueling club, I was forced to abandon my original plan." Harley heard Fred complaining in a low voice. "Yeah," George chimed in, "I haven't finished researching my transfiguration potion either. Coming here now is really a waste of time." Clearly, apart from Professor Lockhart's few die-hard fans who valued looks, everyone else wasn't too optimistic about Professor Lockhart teaching them how to duel. "I hope everyone can quiet down and gather around to listen to me speak. Please forgive me, I've tried my best to speak, so can you be a little quieter? Otherwise, my voice might be drowned out. Now, can everyone see me? Can everyone hear me speak? Excellent." Professor Lockhart was all smiles, seemingly oblivious to the disdainful looks from most of the students. After clearing his throat, Professor Lockhart once again spoke loudly with all his might. "It's like this, I mentioned to Professor Dumbledore yesterday that I wanted to teach you some dueling knowledge and fully train everyone. This is so that if you ever need to defend yourselves, you won't be at a loss for what to do. Believe me, as long as you seriously participate in the dueling club and use the methods I have used countless times, you will definitely be able to protect yourselves. Of course, for specific methods, please refer to my published works. I will only briefly explain some knowledge here." "He's hilarious," Seamus muttered under his breath. "The methods he can teach me are not as good as my explosive magic. If someone really came to threaten me, every magic I cast would bring him devastating damage. And Professor Dumbledore clearly knows my strength, so I only mentioned it, and Professor Dumbledore actively invited me to open a dueling club," Professor Lockhart said loudly and exaggeratedly. At the faculty table, Professor Snape snorted and sneered. He knew very well how Professor Lockhart had pestered Dumbledore for 3 whole weeks. Fawkes the Phoenix even felt mentally exhausted and often came to him for potion. Professor Lockhart clapped his hands, then pointed to the faculty table. "At my invitation, the 3 deans voluntarily stayed behind as assistants to help everyone better learn this knowledge. Here, let us express our gratitude to the professors." Saying this, Lockhart actively started clapping. The students also clapped and cheered, though the points of their celebration might not have been quite the same. The students were simply happy, knowing that with the deans present, they could at least learn something. The deans also stood up and reluctantly walked onto the stage. If it weren't for the little wizards present, they would have loved to directly cast a charms at Lockhart's face. Of course, Professor Snape might have chosen a bottle of poison, which could torment people more than a charms. As everyone knows, Professor Flitwick is a renowned dueling champion. However, Professor Flitwick is too old, and I don't want you to think I'm bullying an elderly person. And I, of course, cannot actively challenge a lady like Professor McGonagall, so I have chosen Professor Snape as my dueling assistant," Professor Lockhart said loudly on the stage, offending all 3 professors with 2 sentences. Professor Flitwick already had a fierce look on his face. How did Ravenclaw manage to recruit this fellow? Although he could only reach Professor Lockhart's knees, he wouldn't mind using charms to make Lockhart even shorter than himself. Professor McGonagall also looked displeased, forcibly suppressing the urge to turn Lockhart into a blonde old lady with transfiguration. As for Professor Snape, he had already started sneering again. He had long wanted to deal with Lockhart, but hadn't found the opportunity before. Now, he finally caught him. Harley couldn't help but click her tongue. Professor Lockhart was truly brave. Emotional intelligence, Professor. Professor Snape himself admits he knows a thing or two about dueling. Although it's relatively dangerous, he trusts my strength and believes I won't hurt him. Of course, you don't need to worry, I will return your potion professor to you completely unharmed. Professor Lockhart was exceptionally arrogant, but Harley looked at him with a hint of pity. Among other things, while making potion, Harley had seen Professor Snape simultaneously manipulate 6 knives with his wand, cutting 4 different types of caterpillars into finely minced pieces or thick long strips. How could someone with such exquisite control not be good at dueling? Hopefully, Professor Lockhart's fate won't be like those caterpillars. If Professor Snape is in a good mood, that is. Professor Snape made no comment on what Lockhart said, only sneered and pulled out his wand. Professor Lockhart, on the other hand, actively bowed, exposing his neck defenselessly. As he drew his wand, he even performed various flourishes he had practiced for 2.5 years, almost dropping his wand in the process. What an idiot. Harley really wanted to cover her face. Just in the time it took Professor Lockhart to make that move, Harley could have killed him at least 5 times. Chapter 99, Tisk, that's it. Beat him up. Professor Lockhart had no idea that in his short performance, a battle-hardened witch, who had participated in countless life-or-death struggles, had already sentenced him to death. He was still gloating. Students, did you see that clearly? These series of moves I just did are the most traditional dueling etiquette. You must watch carefully and learn well. Learn what? Learn how, Professor, you almost dropped your wand on the ground. Or how you exposed your neck defenselessly to your opponent. Someone in the crowd, no one knew who, yelled in a high-pitched voice, and the students instantly burst into laughter, while the deans also showed peculiar expressions. Professor McGonagall glanced at Fred, who was holding a bow tie, but said nothing. She was just quietly calculating in her mind, preparing to give the Weasley twins some pointers at the next Transfiguration Club meeting, so they could slightly conceal the magic fluctuations on that bow tie. After all, Professor McGonagall had only taken one glance and easily found the source of the prank. However, Professor Lockhart seemed not to have heard Fred's words, and still looked at Professor McGonagall with a spring-like face. "Oh, my dear Professor McGonagall, may we invite you to be the referee?" "Of course." Professor McGonagall sighed slightly, gaining a deeper understanding of Lockhart's shamelessness. Professor Snape was calm and collected, his wand held steadily in his hand, and he lazily stared at Professor Lockhart. The cheers from the Slytherin students below were ignored by Professor Snape. Crushing a squib was nothing, no need to make such a fuss. Suddenly, he tilted his ear slightly and heard a faint and familiar voice. "Go, Professor. Give this flamboyant guy a good beating, for daring to look down on you. He must have thought you were the weakest, that's why he chose you as his opponent." Professor Snape's aura suddenly surged, the laziness in his eyes vanished, and he stared intently at Lockhart. One spell after another quickly appeared in Professor Snape's mind, and then were discarded. He was preparing to end this battle magnificently, showcasing his brilliant image. 1, 2, 3. As soon as Professor McGonagall's words fell, the 2 participants in the duel simultaneously raised their wands. Professor Lockhart shouted first, "Expelliarmus!" A not-so-bright red light flew out, heading towards Professor Snape. Professor Snape, however, made no obvious movement, merely flicking his wand lightly, and the red light was deflected to the ceiling mid-flight. Several candles were knocked down directly, and the little wizards below shrieked and dodged. If Professor McGonagall hadn't reacted quickly, conjuring an invisible wall out of thin air, that poor child would have been splashed with candle wax. Professor Snape didn't even glance at the unlucky child, as he had great faith in Professor McGonagall's abilities. Professor Snape waved his wand lightly, and several invisible ropes appeared behind Professor Lockhart, attacking Professor Lockhart. And some of the candle flames in the sky also separated, condensing into a huge flaming python, but it did not move, instead circling behind Professor Snape. In addition, several golden lights flew out of the wand simultaneously, rapidly striking Professor Lockhart. These golden charms shone brightly, illuminating the space around Professor Snape in gold. It was clear that Professor Snape definitely had a very brilliant past, and most likely had practiced fighting multiple opponents. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to cast spells so quickly and smoothly while multitasking and casting simultaneously. Professor Lockhart faced the attack from Professor Snape, powerfully waved his wand, and shouted a strange spell. Pescipixi Pesternomi. But nothing happened. Harley vaguely felt the fluctuation of magic, but the magic seemed to have no effect. Professor Lockhart was hit by the golden light, and was directly hung upside down in midair. The ropes also tightly bound him. The fire python behind Professor Snape had already flown to Professor Lockhart's side at some point, circling around him and constantly flicking its tongue, looking ready to strike. "Tisk, is that all?" someone in the crowd said, and a burst of laughter erupted around them. After all, everyone could see that this was simply a one-sided beatdown. And the few loyal fans of Professor Lockhart couldn't say a word. After all, they weren't good at fighting uphill battles. Harley was a little dumbfounded. She knew Professor Snape was a good fighter, but she didn't expect Professor Snape to be such a good fighter. After all, Professor Snape was just a potions professor, who spent years in a sunless basement brewing potions. Without consuming amplifying potions or using directly offensive potions in a duel, Professor Snape didn't seem to have a particular advantage. So Harley had specially cheered Professor Snape on, to give the professor some confidence. She didn't expect Professor Snape to directly beat Lockhart in front of everyone, and also tell everyone not to underestimate the tech geeks. My dear student, it's not very nice to talk about the professor like that. I was just trying to show you the effect of Professor Snape's magic. Suddenly, a voice abruptly sounded on the stage. Professor Lockhart had reappeared there at some point, while the ropes and fire snake were still circling in midair. Professor Lockhart bowed, adjusted his non-existent wizard's hat, and said to the students. Clearly, Professor Snape deftly used charms and transfiguration to hang me up and bind me tightly with ropes conjured through transfiguration. But these are just minor tricks. I merely cast a little magic, and I had already reached Professor Snape's limit. A cheer immediately erupted below, and those loyal fans shouted Professor Lockhart's name. This was the rhythm they were familiar with, a smooth victory, who couldn't fight that? A dangerous glint flashed in Professor Snape's eyes, and a snake-like voice sounded. Since Professor Lockhart is so confident, how about we have another round? That won't be necessary. Professor Lockhart smiled and decisively rejected Professor Snape's invitation. Today's protagonists are still the students, we just need to demonstrate a little. I just demonstrated Professor Snape's charms for everyone. In fact, just as I easily escaped the binds, I could actually stop Professor Snape's charms without any effort. Seeing Professor Snape's murderous expression and raised wand again, Professor Lockhart quickly said loudly. Demonstration time is over. Now, everyone, pair up, and I'll give you some guidance. Chapter 100 Snape vs. Harry. Just as Lockhart was about to step off the stage to group the students, Professor Snape stopped him. I imagine the students didn't find that duel very satisfying, but Professor Lockhart seems a bit timid and unwilling to fight me again. Professor Snape said in a sarcastic tone, eliciting cheers from the students below. Everyone loved a good show and didn't mind a bit of trouble, especially wanting to see their two least favorite professors clash again. However, Professor Snape ignored them and looked in the direction of the Gryffindors. Miss Harley, I wonder if you would mind demonstrating a real duel to the other students. What did we hear? Professor Snape has challenged Harley to a duel. Of course, that's fine, it's good to let everyone broaden their horizons. Before Harley could speak, Professor Lockhart eagerly shouted, earning many murderous glares. Who are you to speak? The person involved hasn't even agreed yet. The Gryffindor students were in an uproar, many of them shouting angrily. If it weren't for Professor McGonagall also being present, and their fear of Professor Snape deducting points, they would have made some indecent gestures. This was blatant retaliation, malicious revenge against Harley for winning against Slytherin in the Quidditch match. A professor in his 30s bullying a 12-year-old girl, aren't you ashamed to even say it out loud? You have no shame. The Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs also looked at Harley with concern, as the Demoness of Pleasure was quite popular. She was usually helpful and willing to teach students, especially girls, various kinds of knowledge. If Harley hadn't often personally taught the young witches magic hand in hand, they wouldn't have been able to quickly complete the practical assignments given by the professors. And now, Professor Snape, who was at odds with Gryffindor, constantly picked on Harley in class, and often gave her detention, wanted to duel her. Even a troll would know there was something wrong with this, okay. Only someone like Professor Lockhart, who was either truly foolish or pretending to be, was still here, overjoyed. Only the Slytherins watched all of this with schadenfreude. This was the correct way to open up about Professor Snape. Protecting one's own was a traditional virtue of the Slytherin dean. However, Harley wasn't too worried. The professor doted on her so much, how could he possibly bully such a weak, pitiful, helpless, and well-behaved child like her? The professor probably just wanted to give her some pointers. Harley. Hermione whispered behind Harley, hesitating to speak. It's fine, the professor wants to give me some pointers on magical dueling, which is a good thing. Harley squeezed Hermione's hand, and then her wand slid into her hand. She held her wand and strode towards the stage. Many Gryffindor students tried to stop her, but Harley smiled and dodged past them. Professor McGonagall, Wood, who happened to be standing behind Professor McGonagall, called out softly with a worried expression. It's fine, I'm watching, Professor McGonagall replied calmly. Knowing everything, she wasn't worried at all, she even wanted to take this opportunity to have another cup of goji berry tea. Don't be afraid. As Harley stood still on the stage, Professor Snape's voice echoed in Harley's ear. That good-for-nothing Lockhart hasn't taught you anything, and sparring with those students won't develop any skills. After all, they don't know anything themselves, and no matter how much you communicate with them, knowledge won't magically appear. Now, feel free to attack me boldly. I will speak through magic like this and point out your flaws. Harley curtsied slightly to the professor, expressing her gratitude. But during her bow, her gaze never left Professor Snape's body, guarding against a possible sneak attack. Good, very good. Professor Snape's voice rang out. Indeed, Harley, you truly are a genius. You are much stronger than that idiot Lockhart. But this is nothing to be proud of, as he doesn't even know the basic principles of gripping a wand tightly and keeping an eye on the opponent during a battle. Professor Snape did not nod slightly as he had with Professor Lockhart, but chose to return the bow. Then I'll be the referee. 1, 2, 3. Professor Lockhart originally wanted to volunteer as the referee, but Professor McGonagall directly took over the job. However, he wasn't embarrassed and nimbly jumped off the stage. As soon as Professor McGonagall finished speaking, both sides made their moves simultaneously. Harley decided to use the charms she had learned recently. As for the witch's extraordinary abilities, she would only use Black Flame and Frost, and at most rely on her physical fitness. As for other abilities, not even the Demoness of Pleasure's most core pleasure-based mental interference would be used. Harley snapped her fingers, and at the same time, her wand in her right hand lightly drew a circle. 4 blunt-tipped ice spears simultaneously condensed behind her and rushed towards Professor Snape. 2 of the spears were struck by the light from Harley's wand tip in midair, transforming into 2 chains. Professor McGonagall stood to the side, a look of admiration in her eyes. The spear tips were deliberately blunted, and she could flexibly use transfiguration, truly a promising talent. Professor Snape wore a solemn expression, without the slightest hint of underestimation. Watch closely, flexibly using the environment is a very important part of combat. Professor Snape's voice rang in Harley's ear. At the same time, the giant fiery python formed from candlelight directly exploded, creating a wall of flame that stood between the two. But something that surprised Professor Snape occurred. The 2 spears suddenly accelerated, heavily impacting the wall and bursting apart. The flames were extinguished directly by the cold, and the 2 chains behind them flew unimpeded towards Professor Snape. Good improvisation, Professor Snape commented solemnly, and 2 blue lights appeared, blasting the chains into countless ice shards. At the same time, half of the candles on the ceiling extinguished simultaneously, their flames converging in front of Professor Snape's wand and rushing towards Harley. However, the temperature of the flames had already been lowered by Professor Snape's magic, so they weren't particularly scorching. Harley inverted her wand, and black flame emerged behind her, devouring the candlelight. After all, black flame was magical fire, much more powerful than the candlelight Professor Snape was using. Professor Snape frantically spun and flicked his wand, injecting magic into the candlelight to prevent it from being immediately devoured. He was somewhat constrained now, as he couldn't use his most proficient dark arts, nor many powerful damaging spells. Even when using candlelight, he had to consider whether it would scald Harley's fair skin, so he lowered the temperature first. Seeing that the candlelight was about to be completely devoured, Professor Snape once again demonstrated his excellent ability to adapt on the fly. He forcefully flicked his wand towards the ground, and the candlelight directly exploded. Professor McGonagall, standing nearby, frowned slightly and waved her wand to intercept almost all the sparks. Only a few flames flying towards Professor Lockhart were, accidentally, missed by her. However, Professor Lockhart was also very agile and dodged them directly. Fortunately, behind him were 2 7th-year students who knew how to use basic water-making charms, so no dangerous situation occurred. Chapter 101. Your dean was beaten by a 12-year-old girl. The battle between Harley and Professor Snape intensified. After losing the candlelight, Professor Snape, for the first time, used some unique magic, filling the stage with black smoke. This black smoke could obscure the vision of both parties, and Professor Snape could also use the smoke to perceive what was happening within it. In fact, this black smoke could also be corrosive and even incorporate certain special potions. It was specifically designed by Professor Snape to complement his own strengths. However, his opponent now was Harley, so certain dangerous methods naturally couldn't be used. If his opponent had been James or some damned traitor, Professor Snape would absolutely not hesitate to inject anesthetics into the smoke and then use his unique secret techniques to slice the helpless opponent into fine shreds. After all, this magic, which Professor Snape had pondered over for a long time, was originally created to deal with a certain 4-person group. Dividing and weakening the opponent, creating a one-on-one situation in a short time, Professor Snape's combat awareness was still very strong. However, he quickly regretted it, because the smoke did not provide him with any trace of Harley. Strange, where did she go? Professor Snape held his wand, his mind filled with confusion. Professor, I'm right here. Suddenly, a wand pressed against Professor Snape's back, and a playful voice sounded in his ear. Harley had, at some unknown point, stood behind Professor Snape, a vibrant smile on her face. How did you do that? In this smoke, I can sense the traces of all living things. Professor Snape lowered his wand in concession, then couldn't help but voice his confusion. Although he hadn't fully unleashed this magic, it wasn't something any ordinary little wizards could break through. What ability? Of course, it was an advanced mastery of assassin skills by a demoness of pleasure. If you can't even conceal your aura, what kind of assassin are you? Of course, Harley wouldn't say it directly. I'm sorry, Professor. Harley's wand moved away from Professor Snape's back, but its direction remained unchanged. You know, I was born with some very peculiar magic. That includes concealing perception, so you couldn't find me through the mist. Really? A flicker of surprise shone in Professor Snape's eyes. That's a truly very useful ability. The black mist had dispersed, and everyone saw Professor Snape lower his wand, while Harley's wand pointed at Professor Snape's back. The outcome was very clear. Harley had won, and Professor Snape, an adult wizard, the dignified dean of Slytherin, had lost to a second-year witch. Professor Snape didn't care about this result, but the students didn't see it that way. Below the stage, the Slytherin students were ashen-faced, while students from other houses looked at Harley with a newfound reverence. Professor Lockhart enthusiastically approached. He had just seen a little wizard secretly holding a magic camera, so he now wanted to take the opportunity to get a photo with Harley. That way, when he left Hogwarts, he could write a book, My Years Educating the Girl Who Lived at Hogwarts. In the book, he could completely portray himself as Harley's mentor, and Harley would have defeated Professor Snape precisely because she had received his personal teachings. However, that would be a bit difficult, as Harley was still alive and it would be hard to employ certain tactics. So he decided to curry favor with Harley, say some good things about her, and preferably flatter her a bit. After all, it was normal for children of this age to be vain. Besides, when you're out in the world, connections are important. Surely, with his sincerity, Harley wouldn't refuse him. So Professor Lockhart walked onto the stage, speaking loudly. This is truly unexpected. I never thought Professor Snape would lose to a second-year girl. But it's understandable. After all, Professor Snape isn't as battle-hardened as I am. He spends his days brewing potions in the dungeon, so it's excusable that he's not skilled in dueling. Of course, he could also listen carefully to my dueling lessons. He would surely gain a lot from them. And of course, I also recommend he try some Muggle 6 flavor Romania pills. They would absolutely suit Professor Snape's constitution. Professor Lockhart, ignoring the murderous gazes of Professor Snape and the Slytherin students, stood on the stage triumphantly, as if the victory was his own. Alright, let's quickly break into groups for dueling practice. Harley had already left the stage and returned to Gryffindor. However, when facing the Little Lions, Harley merely stated that Professor Snape hadn't used his full strength. This was, of course, the truth. For example, Professor Snape's wondrous magic of simultaneously controlling 6 knives had not been displayed at all. And there was that killing green light that Lord Voldemort had once demonstrated. According to some books in the restricted section, that was the infamous Unforgivable Curse, and the only spell in the wizarding world used solely for killing. Harley couldn't believe that the professors at Hogwarts wouldn't know such a famous spell. However, the Little Lions just thought Harley was being too modest. Besides, even if Professor Snape really hadn't used his full strength, so what? Harley won, and that was enough. Next time they faced the Slytherin snakes, they could openly say, "Your dean was beaten by a 12-year-old girl." This was far more powerful than phrases like, "treacherous snakes," or similar insults. Harley originally wanted to team up with Hermione, but Professor Snape appeared at some point. The surrounding students were silent, but Professor Snape paid them no mind, looking only at Harley. "Harley, you will immediately review the previous battle with me. Although you won, there are still many areas in your dueling techniques that can be improved." "Yes, Professor." Harley clasped her hands behind her back, her face radiating obedience and cuteness. JPG. Harley. Hermione was a little aggrieved, tugging at Harley's clothes. "If you leave, who will I train with? Clearly, I was here first. Professor Snape is not being fair." "Sorry, Hermione." Harley helplessly ruffled Hermione's hair. "I can't miss a review from Professor Snape. Wait 2 minutes, I'll be right back." Saying this, Harley, not daring to meet Hermione's gaze, quickly slipped into the crowd. Hermione looked mournful, feeling abandoned. Suddenly, she felt her robe being tugged as well. "If you don't have anyone to duel with, you can come find me. I don't have a dueling partner either." An ethereal voice spoke. Hermione turned her head and saw it was that strange girl she had met on the train, Luna. Harley and Professor Snape discussed the previous duel. Although Harley won, she only relied on her witch pathway abilities. Now, Harley's goal was to learn as much as possible how to fight using magic. And the knowledgeable and experienced Professor Snape was an excellent subject for learning. Professor Snape did not disappoint Harley, quickly pointing out several of Harley's problems. Her transfiguration wasn't flexible enough, she relied too much on her innate magic. Harley felt she benefited greatly. Chapter 102 The Third Attack. Harley was about to ask Professor Snape for more tips when suddenly, the Great Hall filled with a shimmering green mist. Harley and Professor Snape were both startled, looking up to find that, at some unknown point, the Great Hall had descended into chaos. Many of the younger students had not chosen to use magic, but were instead physically entangled with each other. Among the few groups that were using magic, Seamus was kneeling, begging Neville not to die, apparently having blown up the stage floor in front of Neville and injured him. Ron and Malfoy had, at some point, paired up. One was laughing maniacally, while the other's legs involuntarily danced, their hands still tightly linked, their wands dropped at their feet. If not for the look in their eyes that wished to kill each other, Harley would have thought they were dancing. As for the older students, their attacks were even more vicious. 2 Slytherins had small tentacles sprouting all over their bodies, and a Gryffindor had leaks growing out of his nostrils. What a tragic sight this was. Professor Lockhart was currently bouncing around in the crowd, shouting loudly. "Stand up, Ernie, you can do it. Be careful, Daisy, pinch your nose hard, the nosebleed will stop right away. And Malfoy, Ron, I think you two might be able to stop your current ballroom dance. By sheer willpower." Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick couldn't bear to watch. "Is this a professor? Pinch your nose to stop the bleeding. Are you a wizard?" The two of them dutifully waved their wands, dispelling the charms on the little wizards and helping to stop the bleeding of some of the injured little wizards. Professor Snape's face darkened when he saw the miserable state of the Slytherin students, and he turned to Harley, speaking in as normal a voice as possible. "You ponder this on your own for a bit, I'll be back after I treat a few students." With that, Professor Snape swept his black robes, his face grim, and walked with his wand towards the Slytherin little snakes. The subsequent training became much more standardized, and under the guidance of a dueling master like Professor Flitwick, many fundamental issues were corrected. For instance, the most important point, except for medieval gentlemen's duels, one should not bow. Otherwise, your enemy would definitely not mind taking the opportunity to land a few harsh blows. When Professor Flitwick participated in the International Wizarding Duel competition, he had seen a recently graduated pure-blood youngster do just that. At the time, that youngster had only bowed slightly, his gaze not fixed on his opponent. Then he was hit with an exploding charm by the dark wizard opposite him, nearly dying, and only because unforgivable curses were forbidden in the competition. As for someone like Professor Lockhart, who would practically bow at a 90-degree angle, Professor Flitwick believed that every opponent would be delighted to face him. Professor Snape was preoccupied with other matters and did not continue to review the duel with Harley. So Harley slipped back next to Hermione, sitting on a chair by the wall, watching her and Luna duel. To call it a duel was an exaggeration. At best, the two could only be described as demonstrating charms. Hermione knew many charms, and Petrificus Totalis and Expelliarmus spells flew from her wand tip. However, her aim wasn't very good, and Luna was also very agile, so all these charms hit the ground. As for Luna, a first-year little witch, although from a wizarding family, she couldn't cast any proper charms at all. So, in Harley's eyes, the two looked more like mischievous children playing. "Hermione, you should practice your spell accuracy first, hit stationary targets, then slow-moving ones." Harley spoke, correcting the issues they had and offering her own understanding. Training concluded after 10 o'clock that night, with Professor Lockhart loudly announcing, "That's all for today's activities. Let's continue next week." Many students pouted. Next time. You want a next time. If the deans hadn't come, they would never have come again. However, not many people had the energy to argue with the professor, so the students opened the Great Hall doors and began to leave. Harley and Hermione said goodbye to Luna, then headed towards the Gryffindor common room. On the way, Hermione asked, why would Luna, being a Ravenclaw, come to Gryffindor to find dueling training partners? Considering her behavior on the train, I think 11-year-olds might not be particularly accepting, so they'd probably shun Luna. Harley casually stated her guess. Hermione thought of her own first few months in first year, and a look of sympathy appeared on her face. They hadn't walked far when a sudden commotion erupted in the distance. Harley looked in that direction with surprise. If she remembered correctly, that seemed to be the only way for Ravenclaw students to return to their dorms. What's happening over there? Let's go take a look, Hermione suggested. Harley didn't nod, her hand already quietly reaching into her pouch and resting on a magic mirror. Spiritual vision was quietly activated. After reverting to a demoness of pleasure and being able to use her mythical creature form to a certain extent, Harley no longer needed specific movements to activate spiritual vision. Good luck, there are 2 mirrors nearby, Harley mused internally. There's no danger, so we can go over with confidence. After confirming this, Harley agreed with Hermione's suggestion. I'm curious too, let's go take a look. The two jogged to the scene of the incident. It was already packed with people, but Harley, relying on her agile physique, skillfully carved out a path. At the very center of the crowd, Professor McGonagall's face was ashen, and Professor Flitwick's eyes gleamed menacingly. In front of them, a Ravenclaw senior lay there, a completely shattered small mirror beside her. The senior was cold and stiff, as if petrified. The look of utter terror was frozen on her face. If Harley remembered correctly, she should be Penelope Clearwater, a 6th-year prefect from Ravenclaw, a Muggle-born witch. Harley subtly twitched her nose. Of course, she wasn't detecting it through scent, but through spiritual perception, discovering a snake-like smell at the scene. Harley narrowed her eyes slightly. Not many snakes could petrify a person. However, if one combined the 3 crime scenes, according to one student, a large puddle of water was found around where Filch's cat was discovered, and he had even slipped on it. And nearly headless Nick said that when Colin was found, his camera was smashed to pieces, and the air was filled with a burnt smell. And now the mirror beside this senior was shattered, and it was destroyed in a mystical sense, which is why Harley couldn't perceive this mirror when she activated spiritual vision through her magic mirror earlier. There were mediums around all 3 accident scenes, so perhaps they saw a certain snake through the medium. And the medium weakened the snake's power itself, leading to the current state where 2 people and a cat were petrified. Harley quickly unraveled the clues, analyzing the situation. According to legend, there is a monster inside the Chamber of Secrets, and it's a monster that can survive for 1,000 years. Slytherin himself was a Parselmouth, possessing control over snakes, so this monster should logically be a snake. Harley seemed to have thought of something and identified the monster of Slytherin controlled by that air. Chapter 103 Details determine success or failure. What are you all doing gathered here? Go back to your dorms immediately. Professor McGonagall suddenly looked up and shouted loudly. Prefects of each house, presidents of the student body, male and female, please take on your responsibilities. The prefects immediately sprang into action, urging the little wizards to return to their dorms. However, Percy, the Gryffindor male prefect, seemed dazed and did not immediately carry out his duties. It wasn't until the female prefect clapped him hard twice that Percy snapped back to attention and quickly acted. Everyone follow me back to the dorms. Do not make any unnecessary stops along the way. First-year little wizards, stick close to the older students to avoid getting separated. Harley and Hermione followed behind the main Gryffindor group, quickly ascending the stairs. Before leaving, she turned her head to glance at the crime scene. Professor McGonagall was talking to a silver phoenix, and Harley vaguely remembered that it seemed to be Professor Dumbledore's personal messenger. Meanwhile, Professor Flitwick had already waved his wand, levitated Penelope, and was heading towards the stairs closest to the hospital wing. The large group of Gryffindor little lions did not linger and quickly returned to their common room. After returning to the lion's den, the common room quickly filled with an atmosphere mixed with tension and fear. This time, it was an older student, Penelope, who was also an excellent student, who had been attacked. Even such an outstanding wizard had been harmed, so the younger and middle-year students naturally felt afraid, fearing that they too might be turned into stone one day. Harley also learned the full story from Fred and George. According to them, they had too much energy and hadn't fully expended it at the dueling club. So the innocent and adorable Weasley twins, who never did anything bad, decided to sneak into the Ravenclaw group and explore the Ravenclaw common room. As it turned out, the main Ravenclaw group hadn't advanced very far before they encountered Penelope lying on the ground. The group just exploded. Fred exaggerated. The first-year little wizards were all running around, and even the 5th-year male prefect couldn't control them. Luckily, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick weren't far from us and arrived quickly. I've never seen Professor Flitwick look like that, as if he wanted to kill someone. At this point, Fred even dramatically hugged George beside him, pretending to be very scared. Indeed, it was super terrifying. George also cooperated with Fred, trembling uncontrollably. However, Harley did not appreciate their performance and instead walked towards her dorm. By intuition, she felt that she needed to comfort Hermione. After all, 2 Muggle-born students had already been attacked, and Hermione was probably under considerable mental pressure. However, to Harley's surprise, Hermione was not, at this moment, like many Muggle-born little wizards, looking terrified and huddling together for comfort. She was lying on her bed, frantically flipping through a book with a golden-edged cover. A moment later, Hermione suddenly shouted in delight, "I found it." "Found what?" Hermione suddenly felt someone press heavily on her, asking in her ear and blowing on her earlobe. That familiar soft touch, Hermione immediately guessed it was Harley. "Stop messing around." Hermione tried hard to turn over but was firmly held down on the bed, so she had to say, "You're finished, witch. Watch me suppress you." Hermione's cheeks were flushed, and she pounced with bared teeth and claws, but Harley flipped over again and suppressed her. "Are you wrong? If you admit you're wrong, call me big sister." "You wish. I'm older than you." There was no one else in the dorm. Lavender and Parvati were still in the common room discussing the day's events with other girls, so the two of them were unusually unrestrained. After a while of roughhousing, Harley was the first to give up. After all, it would be difficult to get Hermione, with her competitive personality, to admit defeat voluntarily. "So what were you trying to say earlier?" Harley asked, sprawled on the bed. Hermione then remembered what she had been saying earlier and complained, "You shouldn't have just now." "Anyway, I was saying something very important earlier. I think I've discovered the true identity of the monster in the Chamber of Secrets." "A basilisk." Harley was a little surprised. "You figured it out too." "Of course, I'm second in our year," Hermione said smugly, but she couldn't hide the weariness in her voice, even though she had won earlier. Hermione then explained her detailed reasoning process. Harley was surprised to find that Hermione's reasoning process was extremely similar to her own. Both of them had deduced it through Slytherin's monster. Slytherin was a Parselmouth who liked snakes, and that snake has lived for nearly 1,000 years. Indeed, Harley affirmed Hermione's speculation and added, "But you don't seem to have considered how it moves around the castle." "Of course, I've considered that. This basilisk moves within the walls." "Inside the walls." Hermione was startled at first, then fell into deep thought again. Indeed, such a massive monster can only move in places like inside the walls, where it's easily overlooked. There are pipes in the walls, which could indeed allow a snake to move. But logically, the pipes wouldn't be that wide, and the basilisk is very large, especially a 1,000-year-old basilisk. "Wait." Hermione suddenly looked up, jumped out of bed, and pulled out the book she had waited in line for ages to borrow from her backpack, Hogwarts, a history. "I knew I remembered correctly." Hermione found a passage in the book and said excitedly, "In 1700, it was proposed to install a complex piping system throughout the castle. This resolution was quickly passed at the time, and the person in charge was a wizard named Gaunt." Hermione forcefully closed the book and looked at Harley. "Do you remember that book I borrowed last semester for entertainment, the one about great wizards before the 20th century? It mentioned a piece of information: the Gaunt family are descendants of Slytherin. It all fits, everything fits. To prevent the basilisk from being exposed, that descendant of the Gaunt family voluntarily took on this job. And during construction, he deliberately built sufficiently large water pipes within the walls to ensure the basilisk could move freely. It was also because of his existence that the exact location of the Chamber of Secrets was concealed and not discovered at that time." Harley rolled over, looking at Hermione in astonishment. This memory, this brain, and this powerful deductive ability, the seeker and reader pathways must be very fond of Hermione. To be able to reconstruct the entire event with so few details, Harley honestly asked herself, she couldn't do it. Especially after Harley had determined that the basilisk moved within the walls, she hadn't thought as much as Hermione. "Harley, let's go tell the professors quickly." Hermione was eager to change and go find the professors. Harley nodded indifferently. Anyway, all of this was Hermione's deduction, with clear traces. Telling the professors wouldn't hurt. After all, if the basilisk went berserk one day and slaughtered everyone, she would lose many future anchors. Chapter 104. Limited Resources, Cruel Reality. Harley and Hermione quickly changed into their outdoor clothes and slipped out of the dormitory. In the common room, students were still discussing the previous events, and many had already started exchanging amulets. However, Harley just took a glance and didn't think those things would be of any use. She didn't believe that a wooden stick soaked in onion water could ward off a basilisk. If it were her self-made wand, it might even be possible to withstand a basilisk's gaze once. Hermione pulled Harley and quietly slipped to the common room entrance, opening the fat lady's portrait. But as the two squeezed out of the portrait hole, they suddenly found someone standing outside. It was Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall looked exhausted. After all, being busy all night was truly hard for her as an elderly person. When the two met Professor McGonagall, she was about to open the Gryffindor common room door. Seeing Harley and Hermione, despite her fatigue, Professor McGonagall quickly got into character. "It's so late, where are you two going?" "Night wandering." Don't you know how dangerous it is outside right now? I need an explanation. Professor McGonagall didn't immediately deduct points, as both children in front of her were famously good students, always law-abiding, with no history of violating school rules. She merely crossed her arms, staring intently at Harley and Hermione, waiting for their answer. Professor McGonagall. Before Harley could speak, Hermione interjected, "We have an important discovery about the Chamber of Secrets. I think we've deduced what the monster in the Chamber of Secrets is. It's a basilisk." Following that, Hermione explained her analysis process as detailed as possible, including her speculation about the tricks Gaunt played when rebuilding Hogwarts. After listening, Professor McGonagall's expression brightened considerably. She nodded approvingly, looking at Miss Granger and saying, "Miss Granger, a very brilliant deduction. However, Headmaster Dumbledore has already grasped this information. It's just that Headmaster Dumbledore has encountered other problems, so he cannot personally deal with the monster in the Chamber of Secrets." Hermione was about to ask what problem he had encountered, but Harley pulled her. To prevent Hermione from speaking out of turn and continuing, Harley quickly interjected, "Since the professors already know, then we won't bother them further." Professor McGonagall nodded. "It's all right, I'm very pleased that you two could analyze so much. After all, there are too few wizards with logical capabilities these days, and the few who are good at logic have all joined the Ministry of Magic. Go back to bed early. I also need to go into the common room. If I'm not mistaken, everyone else should still be awake." At this point, Professor McGonagall's gaze also began to sharpen. Harley pulled Hermione and quickly slipped back to their dormitory, hearing Professor McGonagall's roar behind them. "The professors will thoroughly investigate this matter, all of you go back to sleep." "Harley, why didn't you let me keep asking?" Hermione complained on the way. Harley rolled her eyes. "Why don't you go ask the Minister for Magic when the Aurors will be dispatched? Things that are not for our level to know, don't ask too many questions." Before Harley finished speaking, she heard Hermione clap her hands forcefully. "That's right. The Daily Prophet wrote that we can directly write to Minister for Magic Fudge. I'll write a letter tomorrow, urging him to resolve this matter." Harley quickly changed the subject, drawing Hermione's attention to other things, to avoid the situation where she might be forced to deal with Aurors. A few days after the first dueling club activity ended, the Christmas holidays began. The students left Hogwarts quickly, without any reluctance. Harley didn't know the situation in the other houses, but at least in Gryffindor Tower, only she and Hermione, along with a few members of the Weasley family, remained. Honestly, why hasn't the Ministry of Magic intervened in Hogwarts to deal with the basilisk yet? Hermione and Harley were in the library together, tackling their homework. Although Harley had persuaded her to abandon the idea of writing to Fudge, Hermione still had doubts. In her free time, she asked the question she was most curious about. "Why do you think?" Harley leaned on the table, tilting her head to look at Hermione. "First, I suspect they don't even know the monster is a basilisk, they just know something bad has happened. There aren't that many smart people, their intelligence is probably all used up in political struggles. Furthermore, they lack the necessary information to analyze the truth. If it weren't for Nick, who would know Colin's camera exploded? And the water next to Madame Norris and the mirror next to Penelope, without being on site, who would know?" Harley paused for a moment, hesitated slightly, then spoke the most brutal truth. "Then, look at who was affected. A Squibs cat, and 2 Muggle-born students. Don't even say they didn't die, even if they all died, the Ministry of Magic wouldn't bear much pressure. Could Muggle parents run to the Ministry of Magic to cause a scene and demand compensation? They don't even know where the Ministry of Magic is. The Ministry of Magic doesn't have to bear too much political pressure, and pure-blood wizards. Hey, if I'm not mistaken, it's pure-blood wizards who rule the Ministry of Magic. Protecting Muggle-born wizards is just politically correct. In reality, they still despise these Muggle-born wizards from the bottom of their hearts. Now that Slytherin's heir is eliminating Muggle-born wizards, it only benefits them, so how could they meddle? Even if they eventually intervene, it's probably just to achieve their own political goals." Hermione fell silent, the quill she had just picked up also stopped. After a long time, Hermione asked in a slightly low voice. "Harley, those pure-blood families, do they really despise us Muggle-born wizards that much?" Harley twirled the quill in her hand, unsure how to answer for a moment. Who said there were only so many resources? Just like Harley had never found an opportunity to advance to an earthly angel, because she simply had no chance to obtain the extraordinary characteristics or main potion ingredients of a demoness of catastrophe. Why? Because there are only so many powerful individuals that the high levels of the sequence pathway can accommodate. Those existing extraordinary characteristics are either with primordial witch cheek or in the hands of major powers like the Church of the Night. And wild extraordinary individuals like herself simply had no ability to obtain extraordinary characteristics. Harley's two deepest collaborations with others, one of which was to take advantage of the Church of the Sun and the Church of Steam besieging Emperor Rosal, to sneak into the White Maple Palace and steal some sealed artifacts. It was also during that time that she found the main ingredient of the demoness of Unaging, at the cost of killing all her companions and being beaten to near death multiple times herself. If her luck hadn't been good enough, and she hadn't forcibly utilized the demoness of Unaging's extraordinary characteristics, she would have become a sealed artifact in someone else's hands. This is the survival status of wild extraordinary individuals. To advance, one must bet everything, risking one's life. Harley almost perished for the demoness of Unaging, let alone the demoness of catastrophe, who is an earthly angel. There was simply no chance at all. And the wizarding world must be the same. Pure blood families occupy various resources, controlling rare plant materials, magical creatures, potion recipes, and various magical items. Why should they let the emerging Muggle wizards have a share? The so-called bloodline theory is actually just an excuse. Only those declining pure blood nobles or particularly foolish pure bloods truly cling to this theory. After a slight hesitation, Harley still chose to tell the truth. After all, some things, not spoken, don't mean they don't exist. But in the end, Harley also gave counter-examples. Of course, not all pure blood wizards are like this. Like Neville, the Weasley family, Ernie, and me. I understand, Harley. Hermione's eyes were slightly misty, and she forced a smile. Thank you, it's good to have you. Chapter 105 Magic School Potions Championship. Although Hermione learned the cruel reality, she didn't stay depressed for long. After silently resting her head on the table for half an hour, Hermione perked up again. I've figured it out. Only by becoming strong can I change all of this. I've decided to study hard, with the goal of becoming the Minister for Magic. Then good luck to you, Harley responded languidly, turning another page of 50 nearly extinct rare plants in her hand. She didn't believe Hermione could achieve this almost impossible goal, unless she could truly find all the materials for the demoness of catastrophe. At that time, Harley could use a disaster targeting pure bloods, to complete the ritual. Only under such circumstances would Hermione have a chance to completely break the shackles of the pure blood family and become the Minister for Magic. As for other scenarios, Harley felt it would be better to just go to sleep. After all, anything is possible in dreams. The Christmas holiday was pleasant because the library was almost empty, so Madame Pants no longer minded students talking loudly. In fact, only Harley and Hermione were regular fixtures in the entire library. Percy and the Weasley twins also came occasionally. Percy came to research books on the Ministry of Magic's system, preparing for his post-graduation goals, as he had always been an ambitious person. Fred and George, on the other hand, were flipping through various obscure Transmigration and Potions books, often muttering to themselves. Harley felt she might have an opportunity to chat with them, as the Potions books they were reading were quite advanced. As for students from other houses, the few who remained clearly preferred the warm fireplace in their common rooms and never appeared in the library. The night before Christmas, Harley, having learned from experience, left a small crack in the window. Although it was cold, she had to leave a path for the owls. I'm really freezing to death, Hermione complained before bed. Last year, the owls just dropped the Christmas presents at my doorstep. I didn't need to leave the window open at all. If you're cold, you can come over. I don't mind, Harley said, already wrapped up in her blanket. Forget it, the blanket monster has me firmly trapped in bed. I can't get up. Hermione rolled over in bed, wrapping herself more tightly. The next morning, as soon as Harley opened her eyes, she found a pile of gifts at her bedside. Many of these gifts were from the magic masters, mostly their proud works, complete with their signatures and annotations. Harley was not surprised by this. A few days ago, when Harley specifically asked Professor Dumbledore what gifts to send these elders, Professor Dumbledore had hinted at this outcome. Harley, following Professor Dumbledore's advice, sent the elders handwritten cards and items related to their small hobbies. For example, Horace Slughorn, the former Slytherin dean, most wished to receive candied jackfruit for Christmas, not some new discovery or major advancement in potions. Professor Dumbledore sent Harley a homemade small alchemy device, a sneakoscope. Though small, the sneakoscope was crafted entirely from precious magic metal and possessed the ability to detect dark creatures, making it quite valuable. Harley couldn't help but sigh. Professor Dumbledore was truly wealthy, making Harley, who had only given him a pure handmade wool sweater, feel a bit embarrassed. Professor McGonagall sent Harley a Transfiguration book and mentioned in the card that she had a Transfiguration club, and this was the club's textbook. Professor Snape sent her several valuable potion recipes and mentioned a very important matter in the card. He wanted to take Harley to participate in the Magical School Potion Championship during the summer holiday. This was a very important competition, but Hogwarts had been absent for decades. On one hand, it was because Lord Voldemort was at his peak at the time, threatening the entire British wizarding world, leaving everyone no time to consider such an international event. On the other hand, it was also because Hogwarts had not had suitable potions talent for a long time. Professor Slughorn had once believed that Snape and Lily would be the most promising to win this competition for Hogwarts. However, in those years, Lord Voldemort's power reached its zenith, so other schools refused to compete with Hogwarts. Now, Lord Voldemort had been gone for so many years, as long as there was suitable talent, other schools would no longer refuse Hogwarts' participation in this event. It was a pity that Hogwarts had no one capable in the previous two tournaments, not even a third of Professor Snape's skill during his student days, so they could only regretfully be absent. Now, upon discovering Harley's extraordinary potions talent, Professor Snape's hope was rekindled. If I cannot win the Magical School Potion Championship myself, it would still be good if my student could achieve it. And these potion recipes were what Professor Snape had prepared for this tournament. He asked Harley to familiarize herself with the recipes during the holiday. After the term began, Professor Snape would personally fund and provide a large amount of materials for Harley to practice. Looking at Professor Snape's parchment card, Harley was also somewhat tempted. Harley was naturally unwilling to miss such an event where she would surely meet potions masters. So she carefully put away the rolls of parchment containing the potion recipes, intending to study them thoroughly during the rest of the holiday. Her classmates once again gave Harley a lot of candy, which was similar to the gifts Harley gave them in return. Hermione gave Harley a set of Muggle dental hygiene tools, because among wizards, there was only magic for orthodontics, and no one seemed to have developed magic for cleaning teeth. Fleur gave Harley a book introducing Bobatons and invited Harley to visit during the holiday in her card. Harley was somewhat tempted, but thinking about her upcoming participation in the Magical School Potion Championship, she suddenly felt she might not be able to go. At this moment, Hermione was also woken by the sound of Harley unwrapping gifts. She didn't have many gifts, so she finished unwrapping them quickly. Hermione happily put on the red scarf Harley had given her. "Harley, did you knit this yourself by hand? You actually know this skill. This lion is so lifelike." As she spoke, Hermione examined the golden trim and golden lion on the edge of the scarf. Harley's face was slightly red. This time, many of her gifts were handmade knitted garments, especially for those magic masters without children. Harley even sent a full set, and subtly mentioned in the card that they were purely handmade by her. However, this actually didn't take her much time, as simultaneously manipulating spider silk and hair to control needles and thread, weaving garments at the same pace, was not actually difficult. The two had breakfast with candy and had a spirited snowball fight with the Weasley siblings. At noon, the Great Hall was decorated as usual, looking magnificent and grand. A dozen silver-frosted Christmas trees in the ceiling were adorned with streamers, also featuring magically solidified snowflakes. All the long tables had disappeared, as most students had left, and the total number of students remaining from all four houses was less than 25. So Professor Dumbledore simply cast a spell, arranging all the tables and chairs along the sides, and replaced the long tables with one enormous round table. Chapter 106 Harry, the Unfailing Cup. Seeing Harley, Professor Dumbledore greeted her with a chuckle. "Harley, Hermione, you're here. Come and sit, everyone is sitting together today. After all, there are so few people in the castle now, it would be too silly to still separate by house." The two sat down beside Professor Dumbledore, who smiled and showed off his brand new sweater. "Harley, your craftsmanship is quite good. It must have taken a lot of effort." "No." Harley's face was slightly red, but she hid it by looking down. A short while later, Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape also arrived. Professor Snape even deliberately wore the new silver scarf he had received, unwilling to take it off even though the Great Hall was very warm. "That scarf is really beautiful, it perfectly suits your temperament," Malfoy said loudly. He was one of the few Slytherin students who hadn't gone home. Professor Snape nodded, but said nothing, which was considered a response. As dinner approached, most of the people in the castle had arrived. Most of the elective teachers who usually rarely showed up also came to this Christmas feast. "It's a pity Sybil didn't come. I was going to open a bottle of sherry," Dumbledore said with some regret. Lunch was lavish. Although Professor Dumbledore didn't open the sherry, he still opened a few bottles of mead. Despite Professor McGonagall's assertion that there were students present and Professor Dumbledore shouldn't drink, he still insisted on having a glass, and even poured a glass towards the direction of the European continent. That glass of wine quickly evaporated in the air, vanishing without a trace. Dumbledore also didn't suppress the effects of the alcohol, letting the spirits go to his head, making the old man's face flush red, filled with a look of reminiscence. Harley also took the opportunity to taste a bit of this mead made with magic. It tasted quite good, much better than the wine at noble banquets. So, by the time Professor McGonagall noticed, Harley had almost finished the bottle of mead. Harley. Professor McGonagall was a bit angry. However, considering it was Christmas, she didn't let out a roar, but suppressed her voice and scolded softly, "You're only 12. How can you drink alcohol?" Professor Snape sharply turned his gaze, and after hearing Professor McGonagall's words, he cast a murderous look at Professor Dumbledore. "It's all right, Professor McGonagall." Harley felt the alcohol going to her head a bit, as she hadn't used her magic to forcibly suppress its effects. However, Harley's alcohol tolerance had always been excellent. She was always able to drink endless cups at banquets, making various nobles gnash their teeth in frustration. This bottle of mead was nothing to her. The two Hufflepuff first-year students who hadn't left watched their senior drink mead with awe and exclaimed in wonder. Professor McGonagall saw that Harley was still conscious, and considering it was Christmas, she didn't say anything more. After enjoying the lavish Christmas feast, Harley decided to take a holiday and explore outside the castle. However, before that, she still needed to speak a few words with Professor Snape. "Professor, Merry Christmas." Harley ran lightly to Professor Snape's side, her hands behind her back. "Do you like the scarf I knitted for you?" "Thank you very much, Harley." A rare smile appeared on Professor Snape's face as he adjusted the scarf around his neck. "Honestly, this is far more precious than all the potion ingredients others have given me." Hearing that Professor Snape liked her gift, Harley's smile grew even brighter. "Since you like it, Professor, I'm relieved. Next time, I'll knit you a whole outfit." A rare hint of anticipation appeared in Professor Snape's eyes. He nodded slightly, saying nothing. As she and Hermione left the Great Hall, Harley mused inwardly. "The Jinkong flower is probably secured. I'll talk to the professor after a while, and Professor Snape should provide me with quite a few Jinkong flowers. After all, the gift I gave him was very much to his liking, and the correct usage of this flower hasn't been discovered by anyone in this world. So right now, it's just a rare and special material, not expensive, and I can probably procure more. With Jinkong flower, which contains forbidden-type rules, I should be able to replace many materials. Then I just need to find 2 more, no, those 3 materials, and I can restore to sequence 5. After taking a holiday on Christmas Day, Harley spent the next few days researching information about the Magical School Potion Championship. According to the parchment and the information Harley found in books, the Magical School Potion Championship is jointly organized by 11 magic schools worldwide in the International Confederation of Wizards. The tournament has a total of 2 rounds, or rather, 2 + 1 round. In the first round, the officials will specify a potion and provide the corresponding ingredients. Each participating magic school can send 2 contestants to brew this potion. Finally, the judges will score them, and the 10 highest scoring participants will advance to the next round. The next round of the competition is equivalent to 2 matches. Because contestants must enter a magical garden full of potion ingredients and find the materials they need within a specified time. This in itself is a test, especially since there are no magical creatures in the magical garden, and the environments in different locations also vary. Many potions that require a specific part of a magical creature cannot be made, and when searching for ingredients, one must also consider the environment in which the material thrives. Contestants must fully consider these factors and find the ingredients as quickly as possible. After all, the faster they find the ingredients, the more time they can save for brewing the potion. After finding the ingredients, contestants need to brew a potion using the materials they found. The judges will comprehensively evaluate the difficulty of potion creation and its quality to give the final score and announce the champion. The judges of the competition are generally internationally renowned potions masters, so there is no need to worry about the fairness of the judges. These potions masters would not ruin their reputation by promoting their apprentices and giving them an undeserved title. For potions masters who can live for a long time, reputation is more important than anything else. Furthermore, even if they forcibly gave their apprentice the title of champion, the onlookers are not fools. Strange, don't these potions masters usually rarely show themselves? I've never seen any information about them in newspapers. Why would they be willing to serve as judges? As Harley lay on her bed reading, Hermione also leaned in to watch. She had always known that Harley communicated with those potions masters and had carefully read the letters she could understand. Harley had also not hidden from Hermione the fact that Professor Snape intended to take her to the magical school potion championship. Probably to get acquainted with promising younger generations, Harley's fingertips lightly traced the pages of a book, looking at the names recorded there. All the names recorded in the book were potions masters renowned in the circles of magic masters, and most of them had served as judges for this competition. You see the records in the book, many masters have a certain inclination in their research of potions. They definitely have potions they are not good at making. And at this time, getting to know more promising younger generations or friends of the same level might play a crucial role at some point in the future. Chapter 107, Carnivorous Slugs. Sandwiches. Harley's words made Hermione nod thoughtfully, then feel a bit regretful. It's a shame, my parents said before school started that they were taking me to France this holiday, so I probably won't be able to watch this match. This match isn't open to the public, Harley ruthlessly shattered Hermione's fantasy. There will be no live audience, at most only a few reporters. Oh, come on, if you just ask Professor Snape, he'll definitely agree. Hermione pouted. Professor Snape is so biased towards you. Never mind, I'll just read the newspaper reports and look at the moving photos afterwards. Harley didn't respond further, instead, she began to look through the potion recipes Professor Snape had given her. The recipes were all for potions that 6th-year students would learn, and they also noted both the standard recipes recorded in textbooks and Professor Snape's own improved versions. Professor Snape had also left some questions on the recipes, such as thinking about why Professor Snape made such improvements based on the original recipe's content and the medicinal properties of the ingredients. Professor Snape even specifically left a message saying that he had made these improvements in his 4th year, without any guidance. And with his guidance, 2nd-year Harley should be able to understand them. For the rest of the holiday, Harley happily researched these potion recipes, hardly leaving the castle. It wasn't until the day before the students were due to return to school that Harley left the castle to visit Hagrid with Hermione. The two walked through the thick snow, heading towards Hagrid's hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Harley looked at the forest and suddenly remembered that she seemed to have missed a very important task during the holiday. She had forgotten to go to the Forbidden Forest to look for potion ingredients. It was so cold in winter, and many special ingredients happened to grow during this time. What a waste. A hint of pain appeared in Harley's eyes, feeling that she had lost a large sum of galleons. Hagrid had been off drinking somewhere this Christmas, only writing to Harley yesterday to say he was back and inviting her to visit. Sure enough, Harley and Hermione noticed from afar that the previously closed hut now showed signs of life. Fang was lying by the door, gnawing on a huge beef bone, but the entire dog was curled up in a ball. Upon seeing Harley and Hermione, Fang immediately stood up, wagging his tail frantically and barking excitedly. He recognized the two girls, as Harley and Hermione had visited Hagrid numerous times. And each time, he managed to get a lot of delicious treats, so now, pleasing the two had become Fang's muscle memory. Fang, did you miss me? Harley crouched by the door, dangling 2 sausages on a spider silk string, swaying them back and forth, teasing Fang. The big black dog barked excitedly, his tongue hanging out, while quietly kicking the beef bone into his den with one paw, his eyes still fixed on the sausages. Don't tease Fang, be careful, he might bite you. A loud shout suddenly came from inside the house, and then Hagrid pulled open the door forcefully. However, after seeing it was Harley and Hermione, Hagrid mumbled, "Oh, it's you two, then it's fine." He then warmly invited them inside. Harley cut the spider silk, letting Fang bite down on the 2 sausages. The two walked inside, and Fang didn't sneak back into his den to enjoy his meal, but instead followed Harley and Hermione closely into Hagrid's hut. "Oh, no, Fang. Out." Hagrid scolded loudly. "You're a mature big dog now, you need to learn to resist the cold. Look at the blood mastiffs we saw a while ago, they can roll in snowdrifts, stand in the cold wind all night, and don't even need a fire. Your bloodline isn't as good as theirs, but resisting the severe cold during the day is no problem. I've just been spoiling you too much." A strange look appeared in Harley's eyes. "Hagrid, what did you encounter? Why are you so stimulated? Also, what on earth is a blood mastiff? I've never heard of such a creature." "Ah, don't even mention it." Hagrid's attention was instantly diverted. He strode towards the fireplace and took a kettle of tea from it. "It's a bit of a shame, I only prepared black tea today. But I remember you both quite like it." After pouring tea for Harley and Hermione, and then serving homemade sandwiches with unknown fillings, Hagrid sat heavily on a chair. "This holiday, I went to visit an old friend. He used to provide me with a lot of interesting little darlings. I once kept a Cerberus, Fluffy. That child was only obtained from a Greek fellow after my friend provided the information. Oh, what a pity, he was killed by a nasty scoundrel last semester. Saying this, Hagrid sniffled. Upon hearing this, Harley understood. What friend? Wasn't he just some shady merchant in Nocturne Alley? And that Cerberus was probably the one Dumbledore used to guard the door last semester. It was indeed pitiful, as it ran into a furious Lord Voldemort. Hagrid continued. He recently raised a batch of blood mastiffs with the bloodline of Cerberus and Swallowtail dogs. Those big dogs are so cute. Much cuter than Fang. Fang shivered when he heard the word, blood mastiff, whimpered twice, and then burrowed under Harley's chair. And they're not afraid of the cold at all, much stronger than this coward Fang. At this point, Hagrid glared at Fang. Look at his useless appearance. This can't go on, as this child's mother, I must train him properly. Harley couldn't help but cough twice. In just a few sentences, Hagrid had revealed who knows how many illegal things. He privately bred Cerberus, abused pets, and his friends smuggled magical creatures and illegally crossbred special magical creatures. Good heavens, Hagrid simultaneously violated both Muggle and Wizarding World laws, and he truly had no filter. Moreover, Fang was just an ordinary big black dog. How could he possibly compete with those mastiffs mixed with the blood of magical creatures? Don't even bring it up, just talking about Fang makes me angry, that coward. Hagrid waved his hand and casually threw a large piece of bacon to Fang. I saw the gift you sent yesterday, Harley. Thank you very much, you actually managed to knit a wool sweater that fits my size. Harley nodded without changing her expression. It's good that it fits, it seems my skills haven't deteriorated yet. By the way, Hagrid, what's the filling of this sandwich? Oh, this is my latest invention. Hagrid instantly became excited. I remember when you visited me at the beginning of the school year, I told you that a group of carnivorous slugs was ruining my cabbage. I couldn't buy a suitable potion in Nocturne Alley to deal with them, but Professor Dumbledore stepped in and got rid of them all with magic. At this point, Hagrid paused, an even more triumphant expression on his face. I thought it would be a waste to just throw away these carnivorous slugs. So I dried them, cured them with a lot of salt, and combined them with my secret recipe to make these carnivorous slug sandwiches. I guarantee you, they're absolutely delicious. Chapter 108 A Photo Album. Hearing Hagrid's words, Harley and Hermione shivered simultaneously, glad they hadn't eaten the sandwiches in front of them earlier. At that moment, Harley felt that Hagrid definitely had a lot in common with Frank Lee from the Star Pirate Group, at least in terms of creativity. Harley decisively steered the conversation towards the recent Christmas holiday, successfully diverting Hagrid's attention. After chatting for a long time, it was already getting late. Hagrid still wanted Harley and Hermione to stay for dinner, promising that his newly invented stew was absolutely delicious, so much so that Fang drooled just smelling it. However, Harley caught sight of a large glass jar of pickled slugs on Hagrid's windowsill, wisely poked Hermione's waist, and then found an excuse to slip away. Although he didn't treat Harley and Hermione to dinner, Hagrid still gave them something before they left. Fortunately, he gave them normal Christmas gifts, a photo album of Harley's parents and a book about magical creatures. Fang was probably the most reluctant to see Harley and Hermione go. He followed them all the way to the edge of the castle, and only after snatching 2 sausages did he leave contentedly. He was very happy that he wouldn't have to endure the torment of Hagrid's cuisine tonight. It's a good thing Hagrid didn't use those pickled carnivorous slugs as Christmas presents. Hermione said as she walked towards the Great Hall, flipping through the book in her hand and complaining. This book, 30 Adorable Creatures You Didn't Know About, is much more normal. Wait, I take back what I said earlier. This book calls Acromantulas and Cerberus adorable little guys. Aren't they XXXXX rated dangerous creatures? Hagrid wanted to raise a dragon last semester, and just now he revealed that he had raised a Cerberus. So this is very much his style. Harley complained mercilessly, hugging the photo album to her chest, deciding to look through it carefully tonight. Although her memory was excellent, and she could even recall the appearance of her parents as an infant. But after receiving this photo album, a complex emotion, a mixture of anticipation, joy, sadness, and various other feelings, still arose in her heart. A demigod had divinity, but humanity was still the foundation. That night, after dinner in the Great Hall, Harley retreated into her tent and tightly zipped it shut, constructing a spiritual wall. The clever Hermione guessed what Harley was about to do, so she suppressed her curiosity about Harley's parents and didn't follow her in. After sealing her tent, Harley solemnly placed the photo album on her pillow. She didn't open the album immediately, but gently stroked its exquisite leather cover. After a long time, Harley gently opened the album and looked at each photo carefully. The photos were mostly of her parents when they were young, from their time as 7th-year students until after they were married. After her mother became pregnant, the photos became fewer. According to Hagrid, at that time they had already joined the resistance against Lord Voldemort, so Harley's mother, Lily, was hiding in a safe place. After giving birth to Harley, Lily wanted to continue fighting, but then news spread that Lord Voldemort was hunting down the Potters, so the couple could only continue to hide. Harley looked at the people in the photos. Her father's past appearance was very similar to her own, while her mother's appearance was very similar to her current one, only lacking her current extraordinary charm. In one photo, James and Lily smiled at Harley, waving constantly. Beside them stood a pale, thin young man and a hunched young man. Hagrid thoughtfully added notes to the photo: Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew. There should be one more person in the photo. Harley looked at the empty space between her father and Lupin. Is it in memory of someone who has already sacrificed themselves? No, the magical fluctuations that were originally integrated in the photo are missing, so someone must have magically erased someone from the photo. That was during the Wizarding War, probably a traitor. Or a spy. Is that why their figure was erased afterwards? Harley silently finished flipping through the entire album and stopped at the last photo. It seemed to be a selfie. Her parents were sitting on a sofa, and Lily was holding an infant Harley in her arms. Harley watched as the infant opened a pair of emerald green eyes, curiously reaching out to the camera outside the photo. Tears slipped from her eyes. At that time, she was just an adorable child, but now she was the noble demoness of Unaging. The mother in the photo was affectionately pinching the child's little face, a brilliant smile on her face. Harley swallowed, feeling a bit envious for a moment. She had never experienced a day of such a life. The next day, the students who had left school returned, and the castle became lively again. Harley's face was once again adorned with a smile. She had carefully preserved the photo album with a ritual and placed it at the bottom of her trunk along with her invisibility cloak. Now, for her, the most important thing was to deal with the returning classmates. Heaven knew why some people would try to complete an entire holiday's homework on the last day of the holiday. On the evening of Christmas, Hogwarts once again held a grand feast to make up for the regrets of those students who were not at school. At the feast, Professor Dumbledore once again opened many fine wines. Harley felt a little regretful because all those wines were on the teacher's table, and she had no reason to drink them this time. There were a few bottles of fire whiskey in there, and they smelled really good. At the dinner, Professor Lockhart seemed particularly happy, as if he had encountered something joyful, and he almost drank an entire bottle of fire whiskey by himself. As the dinner was about to end, he suddenly stood up, deliberately shook his golden robe, and announced loudly, "Dear students, and my colleagues, I have good news to announce to everyone here. I, Lockhart, 3rd Class Order of Merlin recipient, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, solemnly declare here. I have permanently resolved the attack incidents and found the culprit. I assure you, no more attacks will occur." However, the students below did not respond. They merely looked at Professor Lockhart, who was acting crazy again, whispering among themselves. With his strength, the heir of Slytherin could completely crush him into dust. Is he drunk? Harley heard Ron whisper not far away, and several boys immediately chuckled. Professor Snape's lips had already curled into a smile. Having such a colleague who could bring him amusement seemed not bad. The other teachers also had doubtful expressions, their suspicious gazes cast upon Lockhart. Professor McGonagall frowned, only hoping Lockhart wouldn't cause any more trouble. "I know you don't quite believe it, but it's true." Professor Lockhart hiccuped and said loudly, "I guarantee, in my name, that this matter has been completely resolved by me. And now the school needs to boost morale and erase the memories of those things from last semester. So I have prepared a little surprise for everyone." With that, Professor Lockhart raised the fire whiskey in his hand high. Chapter 109. Professors recall their fear of being dominated by Lockhart. Professor Lockhart did not keep everyone waiting too long. Soon, the students knew what the surprise was. February 14th was Valentine's Day. That morning, as Harley stepped into the Great Hall, she paused, suspecting she had stumbled into a wedding. The walls of the Great Hall were covered with large, dazzling pink flowers, and many heart-shaped confetti floated down from the pale blue ceiling, landing on the bread and bacon. The students disdainfully brushed the confetti away, hesitating whether to eat the food in front of them. They felt as if the delicious food had been contaminated and thus couldn't bring themselves to eat it. Harley found a seat and snapped her fingers, arranging crystalline spider silk in a certain area above her head to block all the confetti. Then, she looked at Seamus diagonally opposite her. "What's going on?" Professor Lockhart's antics, of course. Seamus shrugged helplessly, pointing at the teacher's table. Harley looked in the direction he pointed and almost burst out laughing. At the teacher's table, Professor Lockhart was wearing a pink robe that matched the decorations, along with a tall pink hat adorned with flowers. The other professors, including the youthful-looking ancient runes Professor Bathsheba Babbling, were at most wearing light blue wizard robes. One could only say that Professor Lockhart's taste was 20 years ahead of its time. Professor Lockhart's style is so strange, completely different from the other professors. Someone complained, causing many to nod in agreement. Professor Lockhart was unfazed by his incongruity. He stood up, waving his hand for everyone to quiet down. "Happy Valentine's Day, everyone," Professor Lockhart said loudly. "To liven up the oppressive atmosphere at school, I took the liberty of arranging today's Valentine's Day surprise. So far, 32 people have sent me cards. Please allow me to express my gratitude to them. Of course, I believe I will receive far more cards than these. After all, my fans outside the school haven't come to deliver cards yet. You lucky little ones can be the first to give him cards," being closest to Professor Lockhart. Before he finished speaking, suddenly, a large flock of owls poured in from outside the Great Hall. As if to echo Professor Lockhart's words, most of these owls flew towards Professor Lockhart. Only a few flew towards the students, one of which landed in front of Malfoy, carrying a heavy package. At the teacher's table, the already displeased professors instantly changed their expressions, each employing their own methods to construct a defensive line above their heads. All the professors present at the teacher's table today, except for Professor Snape who joined later, had taught Lockhart. And today, they all recalled the fear of being dominated by Lockhart in the past. Back then, it was also a morning like this, everything was fine, it seemed like just an ordinary Valentine's Day. Hogwarts was very quiet at the time, and everyone was enjoying their food at their seats. But, disaster struck, and owls formed a cloud, covering the entire ceiling. Lockhart, still a student, personally handwritten over 800 unique love letters and hired owls to send them to himself. And that morning, the dense swarm of owls left an unforgettable impression on the students. The dining tables of all 4 houses were covered with feathers and droppings, everyone was hungry all morning and had no appetite until noon. That night, it was Lockhart's turn to feel the pain. Lockhart, who had been happy all day and constantly showing off, was severely beaten by a group of masked students. Even some of the usually proud Ravenclaws and the always kind Hufflepuffs couldn't suppress their inner anger and participated in the melee. Can you understand the feeling of having delicious food in front of you, but having no appetite and being hungry all day? Although Lockhart's theoretical grades were good, his spell-casting level was rather ordinary. So, under the siege of a group of masked students, Lockhart's face was swollen the next day. And now, Professor Lockhart seemed to be reenacting the incident from back then. This time he was a professor, and unless Headmaster Dumbledore spoke, no one could justifiably punish him. The professors' faces already showed wonderful expressions, Professor Snape's eyes already held murderous intent, and Professor McGonagall's teeth were chattering wildly. Professor Flitwick fiercely stabbed the sausages in front of him with a fork, seemingly treating them as Lockhart. He was secretly annoyed, wondering why he hadn't eaten in his office like Professor Sprout, or left the school altogether like Professor Dumbledore. Among the students, the younger ones were still confused, not knowing what was about to happen, while the older students had already reacted. Aguamenti. Freezing charm. The Weasley twins acted simultaneously. Fred's wand tip sprayed a stream of water straight towards the ceiling, while George froze the umbrella-shaped water into ice. The two combined their efforts to create an ice umbrella, blocking their surroundings. It must be said, their charm's level was quite high. The other older students who reacted either used similar methods or conjured an umbrella for themselves with transfiguration. However, these were a minority, and many people's skill levels were not that strong. So they could only choose to quickly grab 2 pieces of bread and a bottle of pumpkin juice from the table, then rush out of the Great Hall. "What are they doing?" Ron asked curiously, still clutching a sausage in each hand. Hermione looked at him with pity, pointing at the sky. "So many owls, and owl droppings rain is coming soon." Ron's face instantly changed, he shoved the sausages into his mouth, then grabbed his school bag and rushed towards Fred and George. Although he wasn't strong himself, he knew how to cling to others. Harley sighed. "This is truly disgusting." As she spoke, the spider silk above Harley's head rapidly expanded, its surface covered with a layer of ice. In an instant, a large umbrella appeared over the Gryffindor long table, preserving a clean area in the Great Hall. Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws also flocked over, joining the Gryffindor dining line. Only the Slytherins, too proud to lose face, were unwilling to eat at the Gryffindor table. By this time, Professor Lockhart's front was already filled with owls. These owls kept hooting and flapping their wings, eager to be the first to hand their cards to Lockhart. "Do you see, you lucky little ones?" Professor Lockhart shouted, collecting the cards. "So many people want to send me cards. How fortunate you are to receive my personal guidance." Harley quickly finished breakfast and slipped out of the Great Hall with Hermione. Before leaving, she cut off the connection between herself and the spider silken ice, ensuring the large umbrella would remain. Harley believed that after breakfast, the professors would handle it. Chapter 110, A Love Letter to Professor Snape. Today, students were restless all day. A group of peculiar-looking dwarves with golden wings on their backs and harps in their hands kept rushing into various rooms, delivering Valentine's Day cards to students. According to students who remained in the Great Hall, these were Valentine's Cupids hired by Professor Lockhart, specifically to deliver Valentine's Day cards to students. Is employment in the wizarding world really this difficult now? Harley complained when she first saw these dwarves. These dwarves clearly have magical creature bloodlines. They're so strong and have magical fluctuations, yet they still have to do this kind of work. Maybe Professor Lockhart pays them enough. Hermione observed the dwarves. How can you tell they have magical creature bloodlines? Look at their appearance. Don't they resemble goblins a bit? And also house elves a bit? Those pointed ears aren't something humans have. Harley pointed at the dwarves, analyzing them from various angles. Wait, I misjudged them. They're not human at all. They're mixed-blood magical creatures. That does seem to be the case, Hermione agreed. But it doesn't matter. These Cupids have nothing to do with us. We're only 12. Yes, only 12. Harley suddenly became expressionless, only verbally agreeing. In a way, Professor Lockhart wasn't entirely wrong. He did liven up the atmosphere in the castle. It's just that the professors all wanted to kill him because he chose to liven up the classroom atmosphere. In every class, dwarves would suddenly burst into the classroom, delivering Valentine's Day cards to students. Occasionally, some students would even choose a recitation service, letting their crush hear the Cupids' passionate recitations. At these times, the dwarves would recite the card in front of an entire class of students. The professors' expressions were all very bad. Professor McGonagall directly transfigured the first dwarf that burst into a rabbit and hung it on the classroom door. However, the magic on these dwarves seemed to be quite strong. Professor McGonagall missed the first time and only succeeded on the second attempt. Strange, where did Lockhart find this group of magical creatures with such strong magic? Harley heard Professor McGonagall muttering softly, her voice full of confusion. Professor Flitwick was much more amiable. He simply locked the classroom door tightly and isolated the sounds from inside and out. However, the little wizards were a bit unhappy with this method because Professor Flitwick also blocked out the bell for the end of class. It's unclear whether he did it on purpose or accidentally. Other professors would also more or less try to stop the dwarves. Even the usually good-tempered Professor Sprout would ask students to receive their cards outside the greenhouse to avoid disturbing the fragile plants. Professor Snape, on the other hand, was the most unique among all the professors. He never stopped these dwarves and was very happy to see them deliver cards to students. Professor Snape specifically chose to teach a purely theoretical class today so that he could stop lecturing when a dwarf rushed in. He even encouraged these dwarves to recite the cards publicly, a malicious smile on his face. This morning, several Gryffindor 6th-year students had already experienced social death. However, in the afternoon's Gryffindor and Slytherin 2nd-year class, when the lesson was halfway through, a dwarf rushed in. "Oh, let me see, who's so popular now? Someone's already confessing in their 2nd year." Professor Snape said lazily, a malicious smile on his face. The Slytherins below responded with malicious laughter, Malfoy's being particularly loud. Ahem. The dwarf cleared his throat loudly and plucked the strings of his harp. "I have a musical message to deliver personally to Professor Snape. Ah, my dear Professor Snape, I love you deeply. Your raven hair, though no longer greasy, its shining luster remains in my heart. Your dry, sallow cheeks." Boom. Before the dwarf could finish speaking, the harp in his hand directly transformed into a pillar of fire, burning him and making him scream. "Can't you see I'm teaching a class? Thank your lucky stars, if this were 15 years ago." Professor Snape didn't continue, because another dwarf rushed in. "I have a musical message to deliver personally to Miss Harley Potter." He also didn't finish his sentence before the harp in his hand turned into fire, just like the previous dwarfs. At the same time, Professor Snape waved his wand, and the two dwarves flew directly out of the classroom, crashing heavily against the opposite wall, then falling unconscious. The classroom door was tightly shut, with magical light flowing on it. Coupled with the murderous intent in Professor Snape's eyes, it looked terrifying. Professor, you didn't say that just now. The students were dumbfounded, and everyone, including the Slytherins, regretted it, feeling they had missed a good show. Someone actually sent a love letter to Professor Snape. That's incredibly explosive. The little snakes were all curious, wanting to know some gossip about their dean. After all, the dean had always been single, which wasn't normal. In contrast, Harley receiving a love letter was not surprising at all. After all, she was beautiful, charming, and had good grades and popularity. Professor Snape's expression remained unchanged as he turned to look at Harley. Miss Harley, disrupting class order, detention. Until the end of this term. The Slytherins immediately grinned mischievously, making faces towards the Gryffindor side. Professor Snape never disappointed them, always giving Harley Potter detention for various reasons. Although there was no good show to watch, this outcome was also quite good. The Gryffindors, however, glared angrily at Professor Snape, as this was not Harley's fault. But they didn't dare to speak up, to avoid losing more points for Gryffindor. Harley, on the other hand, had an indifferent expression, as she had already been in detention for almost 2 years anyway. Harley, who do you think wrote you a love letter? Hermione secretly poked Harley's waist and whispered into her ear. I don't know. Harley shook her head, her lips barely moving, and replied softly. Anyway, it's probably a pervert. I'm only 12. Indeed. Hermione nodded vigorously, agreeing with this. At Hogwarts, gossip always spread the fastest. The news of Professor Snape receiving a love letter instantly spread throughout the entire school. Everyone was guessing who was brave enough to dare to play a prank on Professor Snape. Yes, no one thought this was a serious confession, they only considered it a prank. After all, Professor Snape was not a gentle and considerate handsome man. Or rather, he didn't fit any of those descriptions. Most students suspected the Weasley twins did it, as they loved pranks the most. However, Fred and George stated that they were truly innocent. After all, Fred had transfigured George into a canary in Transmigration class this morning, and then both were scolded by Professor McGonagall all afternoon. They considered themselves absolute scapegoats. At dinner, Harley quietly snuck over with her plate. Did you two write the love letter Professor Snape received today? Harley asked with interest. The twins didn't answer immediately. Instead, they looked around, confirmed no one was paying attention to them, and then spoke. Don't tell anyone, we only told you. How could it not be us? Fred lowered his voice, covering his mouth, and said triumphantly. It would be a pity to miss such an interesting event. Who told that old bat to target us every day? For just 10 nuts, our dear little brother Ron would help us do all this. George added, smiling. Harley suddenly felt a bit disappointed. She had thought Professor Snape, who had been single for so long, was finally going to find someone. Wasted emotions. Chapter 111. A possible out-of-control heir. After getting the answer she wanted, Harley, holding her plate, slipped back to her original seat. Hermione was chatting with Lavender and the other girls, who occasionally covered their mouths and giggled. Was it Fred and George who sent Professor Snape a love letter? Hermione, noticing Harley's return, turned her head and whispered. Harley nodded, then felt a bit curious. What were you discussing earlier? Why were they laughing so happily? With that, Harley subtly pointed at the girls across the long table. Hermione's expression instantly became quite interesting. After a moment of hesitation, she replied, they were guessing who wrote you that love letter today. Harley, who do you think wrote it to you? And specifically asked for a verbal message to be delivered. Lavender, across the table, suddenly interjected, then covered her mouth and laughed with Parvati. Harley rolled her eyes, ignoring them. It was probably some boy who would do something like that, but he was destined to be disappointed. If it were a cute and pretty girl, a certain appearance obsessed, fickle witch might consider it. Boys, get as far away as possible. Dinner was still ongoing when, suddenly, Peeves burst in, shouting loudly. Run, everyone, run. Someone else has died, and this time it's a Slytherin pure blood. The Great Hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted into chaos. The students' faces were filled with fear. A while ago, Professor Sprout announced that the mandrake was about to mature, and the petrified students would soon be cured. Upon hearing this news, everyone's mood was cheerful, as if the dark clouds in their hearts had completely dissipated. But now, everyone was once again reminded of the fear of being dominated by a monster whose existence could not be observed. Professor McGonagall was the first to stand up, using magic to quiet the students, and skillfully directed the prefects to lead the students back to their respective house common rooms. She, along with the other professors, hurried off to deal with the emergency. Professor McGonagall's face was very grim, and the other professors also looked ashen. Professor Snape, who was always protective of his students, had already drawn his wand, an invisible chill radiating around him. It was clear that if the Slytherin heir were to appear before him, he would definitely fight to the death. And Professor Lockhart's face showed fear for the first time, and unusually, he didn't stand up to proclaim his name. It was unclear what he was thinking. The students quickly returned to their common rooms. Soon, the ghosts of each house brought the students the actual situation. Terrence Higgs, the former Slytherin Seeker, was attacked at the entrance of the Slytherin common room. After learning the details from nearly headless Nick, the common room instantly exploded into a commotion, with many faces filled with deep fear. "Why are you all so scared? Slytherin got punished, isn't that a good thing?" Ron asked, puzzled. "My foolish younger brother," Fred sighed, "can't you use your not-so-clever brain to think it through properly?" Just as Ron was about to retort, George picked up where Fred left off. This series of attacks must have been orchestrated by the Slytherin heir, especially since the Chamber of Secrets was mentioned in the first attack. But now, a pure blood has been attacked. What does this mean? Ron understood, and immediately gasped. The monster in the Chamber of Secrets is out of control. There's another possibility. The Slytherin heir has gone mad, Fred sighed. In that case, no one is safe. A mad heir could very well launch indiscriminate attacks on Hogwarts students. Ron's expression instantly became as dramatic as possible. Harley did not participate in the students' discussion, but instead moved closer to Nick. "Sir Nicholas, may I ask some questions?" "Of course, my dear child," Nick replied. To Harley, who never called him by his nickname, Nearly Headless Nick, but only by his proper title, Nick was always an open book. Was that Slytherin also petrified? Were there any unusual phenomena around him? Harley asked softly. "Nothing at all," Nick shook his head. Unlike the previous times, where there were mirrors or cameras or something, this time there was nothing. Harley nodded, saying no more. That night, the dormitory remained gloomy. Many little wizards couldn't sleep, discussing the day's events all night. While Lavender and Parvati went to the washroom together, Hermione called out to Harley. "Harley, what's wrong? You look particularly unwell today." "Hogwarts might be closed," Harley said, lying on her bed with her hands behind her head. "What?" Hermione couldn't believe her ears, and it took her a long time to react. "Hogwarts is going to close. It's just a possibility, but a fairly high one," Harley added faintly. "Why?" "Because of the attacks." Hermione still couldn't believe it. "Because a pure blood was attacked." Harley stared deeply at the top of the canopy. Any old pure blood family will have more or less influence over the Ministry of Magic. The Terrence family also has considerable power in the Ministry of Magic. I remember Percy saying that several members of their family hold positions in the Ministry of Magic, one of whom is an Auror. As long as they pressure the Ministry of Magic, the Minister for Magic will definitely investigate this matter thoroughly, and Hogwarts is very likely to close as a result. Hermione fell silent, not speaking for a long time. During this time, Harley's mind was racing. The situation was actually more serious than she had said. Why would the heir attack a pure blood? Harley felt it was highly likely to be to exert political pressure on Professor Dumbledore and Minister for Magic Fudge. A pure blood wizard being attacked would certainly be heavily reported by the Daily Prophet, unlike the previous attacks on Muggle wizards, which went quietly. Fudge would definitely not be able to withstand the political pressure and would come to trouble Dumbledore. It's just unknown whether Hogwarts is ultimately a government-managed school. If it is, then Professor Dumbledore would be Ministry of Magic personnel and would be dismissed. Even if Hogwarts is an independent school, public opinion could still force Professor Dumbledore to resign voluntarily. After forcing away the only demigod-level powerhouse, this heir could then do whatever he wanted at Hogwarts with impunity. After all, the Ministry of Magic operates by procedures. After Dumbledore leaves, various formalities would still need to be completed before Hogwarts could officially close. And the goal of this mysterious heir could undoubtedly be accomplished within this brief window. As for whether Hogwarts lives or dies afterward, or if it can reopen, that is probably not within the killer's consideration. In fact, if the killer is not caught before he achieves his goal and is allowed to leave the school, Hogwarts might not be able to reopen for a very long time. Harley sighed. She didn't want Hogwarts to close. After all, here she could greatly enhance her abilities and most effectively increase her potions knowledge. Harley had almost completely pinned her hopes of restoring her original strength and advancing further on Hogwarts. It seems I need to talk to the professor about the diary. I hope it's not too late. Harley turned over in bed and picked up a magic mirror. This magic mirror was a magic mirror carefully crafted by Harley, treated with various materials. The mirror also had the blessings of various rituals attached, and although it belonged only to the extraordinary items of the witch pathway, it had actually reached the realm of magical artifacts to a certain extent. Harley looked at the face reflected in the mirror, her green eyes calm as an ancient well, devoid of any emotion. Chapter 112 Dumbledore, this is a society abiding by law. Harley had originally planned to seek out Professor Dumbledore first thing the next morning. Regarding how she had come to know about the diary, she decided to selectively reveal a portion of the truth. After all, it was Lucius Malfoy's house elf, so she could completely attribute her information source to overhearing Malfoy speaking. As for whether Professor Dumbledore believed her, that was his problem. Harley couldn't possibly admit to stealing someone else's house elf, could she? However, Professor Dumbledore did not appear at the faculty table for breakfast or lunch, only showing up in the evening. After dinner, Harley found an excuse to slip out of the Great Hall alone and headed for the headmaster's office. She had already learned Professor Dumbledore's office password from Nick in advance. Harley arrived in front of a hideously ugly, giant stone gargoyle and whispered, "Cockroach clusters." But the stone gargoyle ignored her, remaining motionless in its spot. Harley couldn't help but tap her head. This was bad. When she asked Nick for the password, Nick had confidently assured her that Professor McGonagall had used that very password to enter the headmaster's office 3 days ago. She didn't expect Headmaster Dumbledore to change the password so quickly. What bad luck. After a moment of hesitation, Harley extended her left hand. That hand had always been covered by a white glove. "Distort," Harley whispered, injecting her spirituality into the glove. But it was useless. In that instant, Harley felt as if she were contending against some immensely powerful force. However, this contention only lasted for an instant before vanishing. Harley initially thought her ability had taken effect, but she immediately noticed that the wall behind the stone gargoyle had split in half. Behind the wall was a moving spiral staircase, and an old man was standing at the front of the staircase. It was Dumbledore. "A very interesting magical item, to be able to briefly contend with my magic," Professor Dumbledore said, looking at Harley through his spectacles. "Is Confundo attached to the glove?" "No, it's not that simple. The glove also contains a spell to restrain the Confundo, ensuring that the confused target is confused in the direction desired by the caster. This is no easy feat. Most people who use Confundo can only ensure the target becomes confused, but cannot make them confused in the desired direction. If I'm not mistaken, this is already approaching the realm of certain forbidden magic." Professor Dumbledore's expression was exceptionally serious as he spoke these words. Harley secretly marveled, thinking, as expected of the powerful Professor Dumbledore, he analyzed the general capabilities of the glove in an instant. "This glove is indeed very interesting," Harley said, her mind racing, but her expression unchanged. "I found it in the deepest part of our family vault and felt it was very useful, so I took it out." Professor Dumbledore nodded slightly. "The Potter family is a very old family, and I am not surprised to find such precious magical items. However, I hope you will make good use of them and not use the abilities of these magical items to do things prohibited by law." Harley nodded indifferently. As long as what she did wasn't discovered, it was as if she had done nothing at all. In this regard, Harley, who had mingled among the upper echelons of multiple kingdoms like Loan and Intis, could be said to be a master. "Come, I imagine you've come to me for something. We'll discuss it in the office." With that, Professor Dumbledore stepped onto the staircase. After Harry followed Professor Dumbledore up the staircase, without Dumbledore making any visible movement, the staircase began to spiral upwards, rising higher and higher. Finally, the staircase stopped in front of a large door with a brass knocker. Everything in the office was exactly as Harley had seen it last time: the familiar bookshelves, strange silver instruments, and portraits of former principals. "Hello, Sorting Hat," Harley greeted the hat. "Long time no see." "Yes, long time no see," the Sorting Hat tilted its tip. Professor Dumbledore sat down behind the desk, and with a gentle flick of his wand, a chair appeared out of thin air. "Sit down, Harley," Professor Dumbledore said softly. "Would you like something to drink? Tea or milk? I recommend a glass of milk before bed." "Thank you, Professor." After taking a sip of the milk in front of him, Professor Dumbledore's blue eyes looked at Harley. "So, Harley, why have you come today?" "Professor, I believe I have discovered the true identity of the Slytherin heir." Harley didn't hesitate. "Oh, what is it?" Professor Dumbledore clasped his fingers, an expression of great interest on his face. The old principals in the portraits on the wall, who had been feigning sleep, also stopped their snoring in unison and quietly perked up their ears. "It's a diary from Lord Voldemort, a black-covered diary that can communicate with people," Harley whispered. I unintentionally overheard Draco Malfoy saying that his father had planted this dark arts item in Hogwarts. According to Lord Voldemort's past statements, and this diary is the key to opening the Chamber of Secrets. I see, Professor Dumbledore nodded slightly. Thank you very much, Miss Harley. Actually, there are many details I'd like to understand. However, our conversation may have to be postponed slightly, as we have new guests. As he spoke, Professor Dumbledore gently waved his hand, and the door to the headmaster's office opened. In that instant, Harley also moved her stool to the wall, blending into the shadows in the corner. Professor McGonagall walked in, followed by 2 other people. Harley recognized these 2 people, Lucius Malfoy and Cornelius Fudge. Fudge was wearing the pinstriped suit he often wore when appearing in the Daily Prophet, and a black cloak was draped over him. At this moment, he was constantly wiping sweat, clearly having just made some difficult decision. Lucius, meanwhile, had a malicious smile on his face, though the smile seemed a bit forced. Albus, Minister Fudge and Mr. Malfoy wish to see you, Professor McGonagall said without emotion. She keenly noticed Harley in the corner, a hint of surprise flashing in her eyes, but she didn't ask why Harley was there. Instead, she said expressionlessly, "You 2 talk. I'll take my leave. Of course, Minerva, I hope you have a good night's sleep." Professor Dumbledore smiled, turning his gaze to his visitors. "Well then, Cornelius and Lucius, it's quite rare to see you 2 arrive together." "Oh, in fact, I didn't want to." Minister Fudge wiped another bead of sweat, his voice trembling slightly. "But you know, Albus, there have been many attacks recently, and a pure blood, a child from the Higgs family, he was also attacked." At this point, Lucius let out a sneer. Attacks are already very serious incidents, and with the Chamber of Secrets reopened, now even a pure blood has been attacked. To be honest, Albus, you stay in the school all day and don't go out. You have no idea how much pressure I've been under recently. Furthermore, a very influential wizard sent complaint letters to both the Daily Prophet and the Ministry of Magic at the same time, and that person also has a criminal record, so we must arrest him. Fudge spoke very quickly, unwilling to give Dumbledore time to interject. "I understand your meaning, Cornelius." Dumbledore's voice was devoid of emotion. "But you also understand that I always maintain my past view. I completely trust Hagrid." Fudge's expression was unnatural, but Hagrid's criminal record works against him. "You know, Albus, the situation is urgent, and the Ministry of Magic must take some measures." "Cornelius, I will repeat myself once more," anger flared in Dumbledore's blue eyes. "I trust Hagrid, and taking Hagrid away will be of no use whatsoever." "HMPH. Lucius suddenly interjected. "Then I must also remind you, Headmaster Dumbledore, the wizarding world is a society that values law. We have evidence that after a student died back then, Hagrid released some monster. And now he refuses to say what monster he released, so we can only assume he ordered the monster in the Chamber of Secrets to kill people. If you have a different opinion, please provide evidence. You cannot simply absolve him by repeatedly stating that you trust Hagrid, relying on your status. Headmaster Dumbledore, this is a society of laws, and the law is on our side." Chapter 113, Lucius seeking death. Harley was happily eating melon in the corner. With the assassin sequence's blessing, she had strong aura concealment abilities, and Fudge and Lucius didn't discover her at all. Professor McGonagall being able to find Harley earlier was actually Harley's intentional act, to report her existence to her dean. In this unnoticed situation, Harley was eating melon when she suddenly froze. If she hadn't misheard, Lucius and Fudge meant that they believed Hagrid was the heir of Slytherin. And Hagrid had once opened the Chamber of Secrets and ordered the monster inside to kill someone. Oh my goodness. The expression on Harley's face was exceptionally vivid. Leaving aside everything else, Hagrid was a Gryffindor. And the Ministry of Magic was mostly pure blood, which was an undeniable fact. With a little thought and combining it with news from the newspapers, this fact could be deduced. And most of those people also graduated from Slytherin. So they were saying that those pure bloods acknowledged Hagrid, a Gryffindor who was very likely a half-giant, as the actual heir of Slytherin. What kind of century-old joke is this? You might as well just kill them directly. Besides, that's impossible. Even if you take a step back and assume Hagrid really had Slytherin blood. What would that situation be like? Most likely, a generation of Slytherin heirs had very peculiar tastes and married a female giant. In this situation, he would definitely be disowned. After all, pure-blood wizards valued bloodline the most. As for a female heir marrying a male giant, that wasn't considered by Harley, as the possibility was too small, unless there was special magic. Moreover, with Hagrid's loose tongue, if he really was the heir of Slytherin, could he have kept this secret for so long? Harley could bet that Hagrid would have made it known to the entire school within the first month of knowing this information. Anyway, Harley didn't believe this information. So Harley quickly figured out that, in fact, these two, who came aggressively to cause trouble for Hagrid, were just looking for an excuse. The Ministry of Magic needed someone to take the blame, to appease the wizarding world's public, and to relieve its political pressure. Lucius, on the other hand, seemed very much at odds with Dumbledore, and according to Draco's inadvertently revealed words, Lucius was also a Hogwarts school governor. Then the result was obvious. Hagrid was merely Lucius's overt target, the actual target was Professor Dumbledore. Hagrid, with his prior record, could be used as a scapegoat by the Ministry of Magic, and Lucius could use Hagrid as an excuse to attack Professor Dumbledore. Perfect. As for Hagrid's opinion, what did it matter to the two of them? Just a half-giant, in a wizarding world where half-breeds and non-human humanoids were mostly unwelcome, his views and feelings were ignored. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought of this too, so there was anger burning in his eyes. But he didn't erupt, because Lucius was telling the truth. The Ministry of Magic had a large amount of evidence. Although this evidence couldn't directly prove Hagrid committed this series of crimes, the only suspect pieced together was still Hagrid. Professor Dumbledore wanting to clear Hagrid's name couldn't be done with just a simple statement that he believed him. With Hagrid himself unwilling to hand over his lovely pet, Professor Dumbledore could only tacitly allow all of this to happen. However, the matter didn't end there. Lucius triumphantly pulled a roll of parchment from his robes. "I am truly sorry, Headmaster Dumbledore," Lucius said slowly. "After a full review by the Board of Governors, you should be leaving. What I hold is the dismissal order." Lucius spoke a great deal in a methodical manner, but Harley only understood one sentence from it. "Dumbledore, you should get out of Hogwarts, and this is a very reasonable and lawful request." And Fudge kept wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. Although he stuttered a bit, he still looked like he was supporting Lucius. Clearly, political pressure forced him to support Lucius. In exchange, Lucius would probably also help him resolve some of the pressure from the pure bloods. Harley silently sipped her milk, looking like she was enjoying a good show. How could Lucius and Fudge be so bold? Were they really not afraid that the old man in front of them would instantly slice Lucius into fine pieces and feed him to Fudge? Harley believed that Professor Dumbledore definitely had that power. But Professor Dumbledore didn't do that. He just took the roll of parchment and read it carefully. "This is indeed the Board of Governors' approval," Professor Dumbledore sighed. "Lucius, although I don't know what price you paid, it's clear that all the governors have signed it. Since you wish to do so, then I will naturally leave the school." Professor Dumbledore's blue eyes stared into Lucius's gray eyes, which were full of mockery. However, Professor Dumbledore's tone shifted. "I will only truly leave this school when Hogwarts Castle no longer acknowledges me, and when everyone in Hogwarts betrays me. Also, Fudge, although you need to arrest Hagrid, I hope you can let him stay temporarily in the Ministry of Magic's cells, rather than being sent to Azkaban. This is my only request. Of course, I can't, he will stay at the Ministry of Magic until the trial results are out." Fudge promised, but his voice wasn't so confident. "You don't need to worry about that, Headmaster Dumbledore." "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, I've forgotten the fact that you are no longer the headmaster." Lucius rolled up the parchment in his hand, smiling maliciously. "The Ministry of Magic will send professional Aurors to be stationed at Hogwarts. No student will be harmed again. Of course, everyone will miss your very unique way of handling things, Dumbledore." Dumbledore stood up, waved his wand lightly, and a golden red bird from a nearby perch flew down. "Fox, my dear old friend, we must leave here temporarily," Dumbledore said softly. "But we won't be gone for too long. Believe me, we will be back soon." "That's not necessarily true, it still depends on our Board of Governors' appointment." Before Lucius finished speaking, he once again met Dumbledore's eyes. And this time, for some unknown reason, Lucius suddenly obediently shut his mouth. Under Dumbledore's gaze, which could see through people's hearts, Lucius suddenly remembered that the old man in front of him had single-handedly suppressed one Dark Lord and deterred another. His former master, as arrogant as he was, never underestimated Dumbledore. So Lucius obediently shut his mouth and decisively walked towards the door, leaving only one sentence. "Dumbledore, I'm leaving first. I hope you hurry and clear out the headmaster's office for the new headmaster to move in." Fudge watched Lucius walk out the door before sighing. "Albus, you know, this wasn't my intention. But you see, I've been under a lot of pressure lately, you have to understand me. Harley Potter." He suddenly saw Harley standing up in the corner. "Oh, my dear child, what are you doing here?" Fudge still attached great importance to Harley. After all, Harley's political status was evident. "I came to talk to Headmaster Dumbledore about some things, Minister Fudge." Harley curtsied slightly. Fudge folded the scroll, tucked it back into his pocket, then put on a hat he had tucked under his arm. Child, I am very sorry. By law, I have no right to prevent the Board of Governors from dismissing Dumbledore. However, the Ministry of Magic will intervene in this matter. Hogwarts will soon return to peace, and there will be no more attacks, so you don't need to worry. I need to go now. I wish you sweet dreams tonight, Harley, Albus. Saying that, Fudge hurriedly left the headmaster's office, unwilling to look back. Chapter 114 Don't let violence fill your heart. After both visitors had left, Professor Dumbledore looked at Harley in the corner and sighed helplessly. I'm sorry, Harley, I don't think you need to report to me anymore. After all, I'm not the principal now, and I don't have the authority to handle this matter. Harley's face showed an expression of disbelief. So, Professor, you just agreed to Lucius Malfoy's unreasonable demand? Yes. Professor Dumbledore nodded slightly. Harley's tone was filled with confusion. Professor, if I'm not mistaken, you alone could tear Lucius Malfoy and Cornelius Fudge into pieces, or even grind them to dust, in 1 second. And now, they are clearly making trouble for you, dancing on your dignity. If the people they were dealing with were Grindelwald or Lord Voldemort, the 2 generations of Dark Lords, I don't think they would dare to say a single, no. No, they probably wouldn't dare to say a word, they would just kneel there obediently, awaiting the Dark Lord's command. And you suppressed Grindelwald, imprisoned him forever, and powerfully deterred Lord Voldemort, preventing him from approaching Hogwarts. I don't believe you were weaker than them. So, can you even tolerate this? Professor Dumbledore sighed again, but this time his sigh was for a different reason than before. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes filled with a look of reminiscence. After a long while, Professor Dumbledore spoke in a slightly sorrowful voice. Harley, I hope you can remember one thing. Violence is never the best way to solve problems. A progressive society always needs laws and regulations. Although laws and regulations may not fully accommodate everyone, they can always accommodate the vast majority of people. And I have always adhered to this principle. Although I am old, I think my mind is still quite useful. I can see that they are targeting me, and I know that Cornelius is unwilling to remain in my shadow, and Lucius wants to bring me down for the benefit of his family. But all the documents they presented are in accordance with the law, and the law itself does not target me. Given this, I will stick to my principles and obey the law. As long as it doesn't touch my bottom line, I will not violate this principle. And I also hope you can understand this truth and not let violence fill your heart. As he spoke, Professor Dumbledore stood up and gently waved his wand. A box flew from the deepest part of the office, already filled with clothes, and a few special silver items. Professor, where will you be staying during this time? Harley stopped persuading and instead showed concern for Professor Dumbledore's life after leaving the school. Don't worry about me. Professor Dumbledore raised a hand, and the Phoenix Fox flew onto his shoulder. Professor Dumbledore gently stroked Fox's feathers and said softly, I still have a few old friends, and I think they would be happy to take me in. Professor, don't you have your own house? Harley raised an eyebrow slightly. Dumbledore did not take up this topic, but instead shifted the direction of the conversation. Harley, I think the culprit will continue to appear. He went to such great lengths to force me to leave Hogwarts, so he must be plotting something within Hogwarts Castle. If needed, you can call Fox's name. As a phoenix, it can appear by your side at any time and provide considerable help. Fox let out a proud cry, and with a slight shake of its wings, a golden red feather fell onto Harley's hair. Harley felt a connection instantly form between herself and Fox. She nodded, and her hair naturally grew, a part of it curling slightly to envelop the feather. Soon, Harley's hair returned to its smooth state, making it impossible to detect any abnormality. Dumbledore watched this scene, saying nothing more, only patting Fox. The man and the bird transformed into a flash of fire and vanished into thin air, leaving only a whisper in Harley's ear, "Be careful, Harley." Watching Dumbledore disappear into the air, Harley quickly pondered the previous information. Professor Dumbledore's behavior, while not aligning with her own values, was consistent with her first impression of him. An old man, similar to an ascetic from the prisoner pathway, who binds himself with rules. And judging by the reminiscent look in his eyes earlier, Professor Dumbledore was also a man with a story. It was probably because of these past events that Professor Dumbledore, even after gaining power, chose to be bound by the law. If it were Harley, those 2 weaklings wouldn't have dared to act so brazenly. Harley would have turned them into ice sculptures long ago. Harley shook her head, no longer dwelling on it, and left the headmaster's office, leaving only the awakened old principals exchanging words. The next morning, upon reading the Daily Prophet, Harley understood why Fudge had rushed to Hogwarts late at night. For some time, neither the Daily Prophet, the most authoritative newspaper, nor other various periodicals and magazines, had published any content about the Hogwarts attacks. Clearly, this was the result of pressure from the Ministry of Magic, to avoid causing panic or creating negative news. But today, the news of Hogwarts students attacked, suspected to be petrified by a monster from the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, appeared as the headline in the Daily Prophet, firmly occupying 2 pages. The headline was interesting. Slytherin Chamber of Secrets suspected to be open, Professor Lockhart catches the culprit. Harley flipped to the back, and sure enough, Professor Lockhart accused Hagrid of opening the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. He also stated in the newspaper that Hagrid had opened the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago as well, so the evidence was conclusive. How could Hagrid be the heir of Slytherin? Hermione was also reading a newspaper, and her face showed an expression of disbelief. Harley took a bite of bread spread with strawberry jam. After swallowing her breakfast, she quietly and in detail recounted to Hermione what had happened 50 years ago. When she returned to the common room last night, Harley had already learned a lot of information from the Fat Lady. Professor Dumbledore had forbidden the Fat Lady and other portraits and ghosts from proactively revealing this information to students, but they could speak if asked by a student. So Harley finally learned the truth of that year. Hagrid had raised a dangerous magical creature, and coincidentally, the Chamber of Secrets opened around that time. Several students were attacked, and a Ravenclaw girl died. As a result, Hagrid was reported, and he also actively let the monster escape. So he was ultimately expelled from school, his wand was broken, and he was even imprisoned in Azkaban for a period. Fortunately, Professor Dumbledore, who was then the Transfiguration professor, personally vouched for him, which allowed Hagrid to be released from prison and become the Hogwarts gamekeeper. Hagrid is our friend, and it's wrong for me to make such a comment. But I still want to say that Hagrid brought it upon himself. Hermione remained silent for a few minutes after listening, then gave her assessment. He thought he didn't want to trouble Professor Dumbledore, but his actions actually caused Professor Dumbledore immense trouble. There's nothing to be done, you know the man. Harley shrugged, spreading another spoonful of strawberry jam on her bread. Chapter 115 Lockhart's Death. As Harley was about to finish her meal, Professor Lockhart walked into the Great Hall. He was wearing a brightly colored, flamboyant robe, a fancy hat, and a pair of glasses. Professor Lockhart, with an exaggerated smile on his face, strode towards the teacher's table. The professors all looked at him with disgust, shifting their chairs away. It was clear that everyone knew of his actions and blamed him for Professor Dumbledore's removal from the principal position. However, Lockhart paid no attention, instead clearing his throat and casting a sonorous charm on himself. Dear students, look, your wise professor didn't lie to you. I have caught the culprit, the so-called heir of Slytherin, Rubeus Hagrid. 50 years ago, he was apprehended by the Ministry of Magic, with irrefutable evidence. It was only because Professor Dumbledore vouched for him that he was merely expelled from Hogwarts and not subjected to further punishment. At this point, Professor Lockhart shook his head. I have no intention of criticizing Professor Dumbledore's kindness, but it's clear he lacks judgment when it comes to people. Professor Lockhart continued to ramble, oblivious to the murderous looks from his colleagues and the students below. Professor Dumbledore was extremely popular among the 3 houses, led by Gryffindor. And now, in everyone's minds, Professor Lockhart had used despicable tricks to drive Professor Dumbledore out of Hogwarts. So Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff students wished they could go straight to the stage and hammer Professor Lockhart's head. As for the Slytherins, while they didn't like Dumbledore, they detested Lockhart even more for calling Hagrid the heir of Slytherin. This was a blatant insult. An insult not much better than praising Slytherin for courage. So, for the first time at Hogwarts, over 3/4 of the students' thoughts aligned. Get rid of Gilderoy Lockhart. However, their thoughts remained just that, thoughts, because another group of wizards walked into the Great Hall from outside. That group of wizards wore uniform black attire, dragon hide gloves, and their wands were placed where they could be drawn at any moment. They were Aurors from the Ministry of Magic. Lockhart excitedly ran down from the teacher's table and greeted the Aurors. Oh, you've finally arrived. Dear Mr. Higgs, I didn't expect you to be leading the team. It's a pleasure to see you, Gilderoy. The leading Auror shook hands with Professor Lockhart, a smile on his face. You know, my good-for-nothing nephew, Terence, was also attacked and is now lying in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Unfortunately, to lift his petrification, a potion made from mandrake that has just matured is required. So, on one hand, we are waiting for Professor Sprout's mandrake to mature, and on the other hand, Shacklebolt and I are leading a team to eliminate that monster, to see if petrification will automatically lift when the monster dies. Harley looked at the Auror who bore a striking resemblance to Terence and deduced that he was the Higgs family member serving as an Auror, whom Ron had mentioned. Harley didn't waste time listening to the adults' pleasantries. Instead, she and Hermione went to the library. In the following weeks, no new attacks occurred. Led by 2 captains, 20 Aurors split into pairs, stationed in the common rooms of each house and other important locations. Students were also restricted and forbidden from moving alone. Now, no matter what class it was, students had to be escorted by a professor or an Auror. Professor McGonagall was appointed temporary principal, temporarily in charge of school affairs. However, Professor McGonagall did not move into the headmaster's office. She firmly believed that Professor Dumbledore would return. Of course, none of this affected Harley. She easily continued to move through Hogwarts using her invisibility, going to Professor Snape for detention. Perhaps knowing her abilities, Professor Snape tacitly allowed all of this and never said much. Time gradually approached the Easter holiday, and the Aurors still had nothing to show for their efforts. Mr. Higgs grew increasingly anxious. After all, Terence was his brother's only heir. In pure-blood families that value lineage and inheritance, Terence's position was very important. If Professor Sprout's Mandrake hadn't been getting closer to maturity, Higgs probably would have applied to the Ministry of Magic to tear the school down. Harley's mood was the exact opposite of Higgs's. She had been in a very good mood recently because the Jinkong flower she had ordered from Professor Snape had arrived, and she had received a full 10 of them at once. This meant that she wouldn't have to collect many auxiliary materials in the same field. And after Hagrid was taken away, the meticulous Harley and Hermione went to feed Fang once a day. As a result, at Hagrid's window, Harley found a package for herself, containing many materials she had ordered from Hagrid. Harley was still very touched when she received the package. Hagrid was usually careless, often leaking information, and even forgot to leave food for Fang, only unlocking its chain and letting it forage for itself. But Hagrid never forgot the materials Harley had asked him to help collect. Perhaps he was an incompetent teammate, but he was definitely a friend worth entrusting one's back to. After collecting these materials, Harley could also begin to prepare the potion for unsealing. On the weekend a week before Easter, Harley stayed alone in a room on the 8th floor called the Room of Requirement. Harley heard Dobby mention this room during one of her summons to Dobby to investigate the Malfoy family's movements. According to Dobby, it was told to him by a Hogwarts house elf he met while procuring food. Harley quickly found the room based on Dobby's information and basically mastered its use. After that, Harley carried out all potion brewing activities in this room. By simply setting a logical trap, requesting a room that only Harley Potter can enter, she could ensure that others could not enter. To Harley's surprise, this room could also conjure many auxiliary tools used when brewing potions. It seemed that, with the exception of the 5 exceptions to Gamp's law of transfiguration, this room could conjure everything else. After processing all the materials using the tools provided in the room, Harley did not light a fire as usual, but simply took out a bottle. After all, the sequence potions of the sequence pathway world are not like the potions of the wizarding world, which require slow brewing. Sequence potions don't even need to have materials added in a specific order. As long as all the materials are thrown in, a finished product can be obtained. Harley quickly added various materials and pure water to the glass bottle, finally adding the Jinkong flower. Although the name of this flower is Jinkong, meaning forbidden air, in reality, this flower contains rules of prohibition and is one of the main ingredients for the Lawyer Pathway's demigod potion. According to Harley's speculation, the phenomenon of flight being forbidden around this flower is merely one of its manifestations. If the flower's output of rules itself could be changed, it might be possible to prohibit other actions. However, there was too little information, and the worlds were different, so Harley couldn't make further conjectures. Of course, not many conjectures are needed now. Chapter 116 The Witch of Pain. Harley unhesitatingly added 2/3 of the Jinkong flower to the potion, then looked at the blue liquid shimmering with starlight in the glass bottle and drank it all. Her spirituality kept reminding her that this potion was dangerous. Although the danger was not great and was within an acceptable range, there was still danger. However, this was normal, as sequence potions themselves were also poisons. If one drank it and succeeded, they would advance to the next sequence. If they failed, they would fall into madness, or even death. Although Harley was not concocting a sequence potion, but rather a similar potion, it was for the purpose of using the principle of extraordinary characteristic aggregation to peel off the extraordinary characteristics that sealed her. However, this potion was similar to a sequence potion. If an ordinary person drank it and was extremely lucky not to die, they could gain strange extraordinary abilities. Of course, the probability of this happening was very small. Soon, the familiar sharp pain struck again. The kind of pain that felt like tearing the soul surged in waves. But this time, Harley was prepared and collapsed onto the bed that the room of requirement had conjured. The spider silk she had prepared earlier was bitten tightly by Harley to alleviate the pain. The sharp pain came and went quickly. This was also thanks to the powerful aggregation effect brought by the Jinkong flower, which saved Harley much torment. 10 minutes later, the pain completely disappeared, and Harley barely climbed out of bed, covered in cold sweat. Her close-fitting clothes were completely soaked, and an imprint of a human figure was left on the bed. Fortunately, Harley had draped her robe over a nearby chair in advance, otherwise she might not have had a jacket to wear tomorrow. Although Harley was exhausted and weak, she still moved to the bedside and picked up a piece of extraordinary characteristic. The aura of this extraordinary characteristic was extremely mixed, containing not only Harley's own aura and the characteristics of a justiciar, but also a certain amount of the power of a law magus. After all, so many Jinkong flowers were not added for nothing, those were one of the main ingredients for demigod potions. It seems the gloves can form a pair, Harley said, studying the extraordinary characteristic in front of her, her voice revealing fatigue. I hope my luck is a little better, and the side effects of the resulting sealed artifact aren't too severe. Harley dragged her weary steps out of the room of requirement and collapsed onto her own bed. This time, she specifically confirmed that it was her own bed. After all, her spirituality had been depleted quite a bit, and the basic abilities of a demoness of pleasure had also improved. If she accidentally activated certain skills while unconscious, that would be terrible. The next day, Harley woke up very early. While the others in the dormitory were still asleep, Harley slipped into the Forbidden Forest again. She needed some time to refamiliarize herself with her abilities. A long time later, the disease ability and the frozen world are both the same as before. Harley's surroundings were already covered in frost. This was not a scene she had slowly created by utilizing her control over ice, but a phenomenon created using the demoness of affliction's unique frozen world. Looking at the two rabbits frozen in place, stiff all over, and another half-dead rat nearby, Harley nodded with satisfaction. The mythical creature form has also been further unsealed. Although I can't directly release the mythical creature form like a demigod, the power I can borrow from the sealed mythical creature form has further increased. After completing all this, Harley gently clapped her hands, the ice dissipated, and the two rabbits were unfrozen. However, the two poor little creatures still seemed a bit stiff and only reacted after a while, scrambling to flee the spot. As for that damned rat, Harley would not help such a disgusting creature with its illness. Harley activated her invisibility ability and quietly snuck towards Hogwarts Castle. She needed to hurry back and soak that contaminated extraordinary characteristic in pure water to make a new sealed artifact. After 3 days, the right-hand glove, which matched the white silk glove on Harley's left hand, absorbed the entire potion, and a new sealed artifact was formed. Harley's luck was not so good this time. Although many Jinkong flowers were added, the ability of a law magus did not appear in the glove. However, correspondingly, the side effects of this glove were almost non-existent for Harley, even less severe than the side effects of the previous, fallen glove. It would only softly chant Harley's honorific name 3 times a day, directly feeding the sound into the mind of the glove's wielder. Harley speculated that this was probably because the Jinkong flowers used their prohibitive ability on the negative effects. However, with limited materials, Harley couldn't make too many attempts. She planned to see if she could collect a few more potion ingredients from Hagrid in the future and then add Jinkong flowers. Anyway, there were plenty of materials in the Forbidden Forest, and the Potter family's wealth was substantial enough, so Harley was brave enough to experiment. Although it didn't have the ability of a law magus, this glove was still very useful. The glove contained the abilities of a Sequence 6 Judge, Judgment, Deterrence, and Law of all things, and all of them reached the strength of the abilities held by a Justiciar. After a brief attempt, Harley felt even more that these abilities were not something an ordinary Sequence 5 could possess. They approached the level of a law magus to a certain extent. Although Harley did not get the extraordinary ability, punishment, of a Sequence 5 Justiciar that she particularly wanted, if these 3 abilities of a judge were utilized well, they could also produce miraculous effects. Harley named the glove the Judgment Glove, corresponding to the fallen glove, and carried both with her. After all, praising oneself wasn't really a side effect, so carrying it around was perfectly feasible. After making the gloves, the Easter holiday also arrived. This holiday was very short, so the school did not send students home. Everyone stayed at school to celebrate Easter. During the holiday, second-year students had new things to consider. Third-year students would have elective courses, so second-year students needed to make their choices. Hogwarts is really good, all courses can be chosen freely, with no upper limit, Harley heard Dean exclaim while eating in the Great Hall. It's not like some schools in the Muggle world. According to my mom, in those schools, you have to fight for a course, and some people can't even get enough credits in 4 years. Many older students were happy to share their experiences with their juniors, including which courses were easy to pass and which were troublesome. Especially Prefect Percy, although he was always serious and usually not well liked by Gryffindors. But it had to be said that his research into all courses was extremely thorough, and he understood very clearly what jobs were suitable after graduation for those who took certain courses. Percy also gave many little wizards a suggestion: before choosing courses, think about the job they want to do in the future, as many jobs have requirements for the courses mastered. Harley thought Percy made a lot of sense, but unfortunately, Percy couldn't tell her which courses she needed to take to become a primordial witch. So she could only decide by intuition. Harley, which courses are you going to choose? Hermione poked her head out to look at Harley's course selection sheet. Divination, care of magical creatures, and ancient runes, Harley replied casually, checking off these 3 courses. Although witches themselves had no talent for divination, and the magic mirror divination in the sequence pathway world was to pray for answers from unknown existences, it was not considered orthodox divination. However, according to the information Harley learned from reading miscellaneous books, the magic mirror divination in this world was also a type of traditional divination. Coupled with the witch potion that made extraordinary individuals have a certain convenience in learning mysterious knowledge, allowing them to learn these mysterious knowledge more quickly. So Harley decided to choose divination. After all, the Mysteries Society had left too deep an impression on her. Care of magical creatures was to prepare for future potion class, because only by understanding magical creatures could she better hunt them and collect materials from them. As for choosing ancient runes, Harley wanted to try and see if these ancient runes could be used to make magic items. Although Harley had good luck when making the first 2 sealed artifacts, and the side effects were closely related to her mythical creature form, so using them herself was almost equivalent to having no side effects. However, what sealed Harley's Sequence 4 was a magical item corresponding to the Spectator Pathway Sequence 4. Harley didn't think her mythical creature form could completely contaminate it, so she needed to learn some knowledge about making magic items. Although she could follow Nicholas Flamel to learn, Harley was not sure if the old man would agree. So now Harley needed to prepare herself first. Chapter 117. Just a mere auror, I, Lockhart, can kill him with ease. It seemed as if to prevent students from overthinking, the teachers tacitly assigned a large amount of homework, filling the Easter holiday schedule to the brim. They seemed to firmly believe that as long as students were busy enough, they wouldn't have time to feel uneasy. Although a long time had passed since the last attack, the Aurors continuously patrolling Hogwarts still reminded the students that the danger had not passed. The news that Professor Dumbledore would no longer serve as principal only intensified this unease. Despite this, the atmosphere on Easter Day was relatively pleasant. Students heard rumors early in the morning that Hogwarts had arranged a grand Easter feast. The school governors even allocated special funds to purchase a large batch of high-quality Easter eggs, attempting to boost morale with chocolate. Harley had finished all her homework, made her sealed items, and submitted her course selection form. She decided not to read today and to relax. After this holiday, she would try to find the monster in the Chamber of Secrets. Not only to prevent Hogwarts from being closed, but also for a potentially large amount of materials. After all, according to the book's description of the basilisk, it seemed to be a treasure trove, incredibly valuable. The Easter feast was underway, and a sense of joy returned among the students. However, at the faculty table, the teachers still wore expressions mixed with fatigue and solemnity, silently eating their meals. Even Professor Lockhart, who usually loved to cause mischief during holidays, was uncharacteristically quiet. No, or rather, he hadn't come at all. This was not a common occurrence. Professor Lockhart, who loved to show off, never missed a single holiday. Harley narrowed her eyes, committing this information to memory. She took a small bite of cake, wiping her mouth with a napkin, when she suddenly felt her whole body tremble. No, it wasn't her body trembling, but the entire castle shaking. Although it was only for an instant, everyone clearly felt it. The Aurors reacted very promptly, quickly drawing their wands and standing up to look around. They had also spent 7 full years at Hogwarts, but they had never witnessed such a phenomenon. The professors were equally surprised, drawing their wands and preparing for any potential danger. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the open doorway of the Great Hall. It was Professor Lockhart. He was wearing an emerald green wizard robe, a pointed hat, gently waving his wand in his hand, and humming a tune. Professor Lockhart exuded a carefree air, like a common street magician from the Muggle world. "Professor Lockhart, what are you doing?" Professor McGonagall, as the interim principal, was the first to speak. Her voice was slightly angry, as everyone knew that the current situation was unstable, so panic should not be created. "Oh, my dear Professor McGonagall." Professor Lockhart's voice was incredibly flippant. "Of course, it's for my plan. You see, I put a lot of effort into planning the series of attacks that came before." "What?" The Great Hall erupted in an uproar, everyone discussing animatedly. If they hadn't misheard, Professor Lockhart had just admitted that he planned the attacks. "Do you know what you're saying? This is not the time for you to perform, Professor Lockhart." Professor McGonagall's words were cut short by the aura from the Higgs family. "Professor McGonagall," Teal Higgs' voice carried unconcealed joy. "Since Professor Lockhart himself admitted that he planned the previous series of attacks, then this matter should be handled by the Aurors. Whether or not he is the attacker, we should first arrest him. The Ministry of Magic will try him. Team 4, Protocol 3, come with me to arrest the culprit. Kingsley, I hope you take Team 5 to protect the students and prevent the culprit from taking students hostage." "No problem, Teal," Shacklebolt responded, waving his wand to create an invisible wall. "Oh my, oh my." Professor Lockhart stood still, his voice full of confidence. "I'm sorry, but mere Aurors, please don't make a fool of yourselves, okay? Pescipixi Pesternomi." Professor Lockhart waved his wand and shouted a spell. Harley's gaze sharpened. If she remembered correctly, that spell was precisely the one Professor Lockhart used against the Cornish pixies in his first class, and also the one he used to counter Professor Snape's attack in the dueling club. The scene in the Great Hall immediately changed, and Professor Lockhart vanished from his spot. The Aurors immediately stopped, looking around with surprise and uncertainty. They were certain that Lockhart had not cast a disillusionment charm, as two Aurors had already cast counter charms together before the fight began. And Hogwarts had anti-apparition charms, so wizard apparition could not be performed here. So, where did Lockhart go? Was it a new invisibility spell? Protocol 5, rally to me. Teal Higgs immediately made the most correct judgment, ordering everyone to gather to prevent being picked off one by one. But no sooner had he spoken than his entire body suddenly stiffened. His neck twisted in jerking motions, reminding Harley of those poor souls being controlled by a puppet master. Their expressions were practically identical. "Captain, what's wrong?" shouted the nearest Auror, firing several protective charms at Teal Higgs. "Disperse, everyone disperse," another Auror shouted, urging the surrounding students not to stay put. Suddenly, Teal Higgs stopped all movement, then abruptly swelled and exploded, turning into a dazzling fireworks display, fireworks made of flesh and blood. His limbs and organs flew everywhere, and blood splattered. Previously, Teal Higgs had been eating at the Slytherin table, so he was now closest to the Slytherin students. Some students seemed not to have reacted at first, so they remained in place, such as Malfoy. Malfoy and his crony Crabbe were splashed directly in the face with blood. They first froze, then let out piercing screams. "Shut up, you idiots." Professor Snape waved his wand from afar, and their screams immediately ceased, as if they had been stuffed back down their throats. "All students return to your respective common rooms immediately. Led by the professors, ensure safety," Professor McGonagall shouted. At the same time, Professor Lockhart's figure reappeared at the Great Hall's doorway. He slightly tipped the hat on his head, instead of bowing and exposing his neck as he had at the dueling club. "Aurors are really weak, simply rubbish." "Wait, I'm not specifically targeting anyone, I'm just saying that all of you here are rubbish." With that, Professor Lockhart walked backward out of the Great Hall, leaving only one sentence: "You useless Aurors, come and catch me if you dare." Almost all the Aurors were overcome with rage and wanted to rush out immediately. But Shacklebolt shouted, "Don't be reckless. Team 4 lacks a captain's command, so stay here, 2 per team, to protect the students. The extra team will patrol the castle with the professors to prevent the culprit from secretly returning to the castle and harming students. Team 5, follow me out, stay vigilant at all times, and cast all defensive and detection magic." After a period of chaos, the number of people in the Great Hall rapidly decreased, until only Harley remained. She seemed to have been forgotten, even Hermione hadn't noticed that Harley was still there. Harley, wearing white gloves, had finished her meal. She was leisurely flipping through a book, as if the previous panic and the current silence had nothing to do with her. "I didn't expect you to actually stay, Miss Harley Potter." A gentle voice suddenly rang out, accompanied by crisp footsteps. Professor Lockhart walked in step by step from the antechamber. Chapter 118, Illusion Master Lockhart. Harley closed the book, casually setting it aside, then gracefully stood up. She turned around and gave Lockhart a charming smile. Your killing intent towards me is already so obvious. If I were to pretend not to notice, wouldn't that be disrespectful to you? Professor Lockhart slightly raised his top hat, a smile playing on his lips. No wonder you are so highly regarded by dear Tom Riddle. So that's it. You truly are extraordinary, my dear Miss Harley Potter. Tom Riddle. Who is that? Harley's face showed an expression full of curiosity. Oh, I apologize, I suddenly remembered that you might not be very familiar with this student. Professor Lockhart clasped his hands together and bowed slightly, striking an apologetic pose he had learned from someone. Then allow me to introduce a new student to you. Tom Marvolo Riddle, the only surviving bloodline of Slytherin in Britain. Of course, he also has a name that people are very familiar with, Lord Voldemort. Speaking of this, Professor Lockhart stared intently into Harley's emerald eyes, hoping to see a different expression. But Harley's face still held a gentle smile, though at some point, her countenance had gained an added allure, making people want to kneel and lick her shoes. However, Professor Lockhart was not affected in the slightest, merely showing a surprised expression on his face. This is truly unexpected, Miss Harley. You're not afraid of that name. In this spiritual charm, you're the same as me, aren't you? We are both geniuses, we wouldn't be like those foolish ordinary wizards, inexplicably afraid of the name, Lord Voldemort. Professor Lockhart fell into his own rhythm, chattering on, repeatedly emphasizing his uniqueness and greatness. However, during his speech, he remained vigilant, his wand clutched tightly in his hand. Harley sighed, abandoning the idea of a sneak attack, and interrupted Professor Lockhart. Professor, I really don't understand what you're saying. And honestly, I'm still completely bewildered as to what exactly is happening. Professor Lockhart showed a bright, sunny smile, raising his left index finger and waving it in front of him. Oh, my dear Miss Harley, you haven't figured it out. What I mean is, we are both masters with our own talents in a certain field. So we wouldn't be afraid of Lord Voldemort like those foolish people. Take me for example, I'm not boasting, but even though I can't defeat Lord Voldemort, if I wanted to escape, he couldn't stop me or find me. That's why I said, we are both geniuses with special talents. Before he finished speaking, Harley suddenly felt her spider silk being touched. Although the two had previously seemed like ordinary teacher and student chatting idly, in reality, Harley had not relaxed her guard at all. Around her, layers of transparent spider silk had already spread out, imbued with the power of disease. Harley leapt backward without hesitation. After reaching Sequence 5, the extraordinary agility bestowed upon her by the Sequence 9 assassin had reached an extremely terrifying level, allowing Harley to instantly float from the middle of the long table to the very front. At the same time, the spot where Harley had been standing was hit by a charmed shot from the void, and that section of the table directly twisted and exploded. Harley couldn't help but inwardly break out in a cold sweat. If that spell had landed on her, she would probably have had to activate the primordial cocoon. Otherwise, Harley's fate would likely be identical to Teal Higgs. But using the primordial cocoon would consume a terrifying amount of spirituality, and there was also a limit to how many times it could be used within a certain period. This would be extremely disadvantageous for Harley's subsequent battle. Truly unexpected. The previous Professor Lockhart vanished, and Lockhart's figure appeared in front of Harley's former position. You're actually so cautious. You've already set up spider silk in advance. What a pity, I wanted to give you a fireworks surprise. Thank you for your kindness, Professor, but if you could turn yourself into fireworks, I think I'd be even happier, Harley said with a smile. That won't be necessary. Professor Lockhart shook his head and gently waved his wand. The shattered long table flew up, transforming into iron spears in midair, all pointing at Harley. Rather than turning myself into fireworks, I much prefer setting off fireworks. Professor Lockhart pointed his wand forward, and the spears rained down on Harley. Harley lightly flicked her wand upward, and a sturdy, translucent ice wall instantly appeared, blocking her. But Harley immediately felt surprised. There was no sensation on the ice wall where the iron spears were flying from. However, Harley's spirituality was still sounding alarms, making her expression grow increasingly solemn. Suddenly, Harley heard a whooshing sound by her ear. Judging by the sound, the attack was already very close to Harley. Utilizing the agility granted by assassin, Harley gracefully tilted her head, dodging the blow. But the attack didn't stop there. Professor Lockhart's distant figure rapidly waved his wand. Flames appeared out of thin air, surging towards Harley. Streaks of Stupefy and Petrificus Totalis covered the surrounding open ground, leaving Harley unable to dodge, only able to defend. Moreover, many of these charms were illusory. Instead, it was in places where no charms seemed to be flying that the ice wall suddenly felt impacts. After passively defending for a few minutes, Harley finally began to counterattack. Harley raised her right hand high, not to cast a charms, but to inject spirituality into the ring of judgment on her right hand. Law of all things, no sneak attacks allowed here. Judgment, the sneak attacker shall be punished. A muffled groan suddenly came from the open ground in the distance. Professor Lockhart's previous figure vanished and reappeared at the source of the groan. The judge's law of all things is not as absolute as a law inquisitor's prohibition. This ability can only mark people or objects that violate the law within a certain range as criminals, while prohibition can prevent a certain action from happening entirely. But when the law of all things is combined with judgment or chastisement, it can effectively inflict damage. Of course, Harley didn't expect a mere judgment to kill Professor Lockhart, she only wanted to force out his position. Harley had already seen through Professor Lockhart's magic, illusions. "Professor, your illusions truly are powerful," Harley murmured in admiration, pointing her wand forward. Countless black flames appeared around Harley, then flew towards Professor Lockhart. Professor Lockhart's figure in place suddenly exploded, causing the black flames to lose their target. Harley seemed to have anticipated this and simply let the black flames explode in midair, rediscovering Professor Lockhart's position. "I didn't expect you to figure it out so quickly." Professor Lockhart reappeared after fending off two black flames that nearly struck his head. He was smiling and rubbing the back of his left hand. During the previous battle, that spot had been harshly whipped by an invisible whip. Although no marks were left, the pain was very real. "Even if you've figured it out, what can you do to me?" Professor Lockhart chuckled. "I am Lockhart, the master of illusions." Chapter 119. Miss Harley, I really want to kill you. Harley's expression wasn't too bad, just slightly solemn. Illusions were indeed very troublesome. Those pathways skilled in illusions, such as the spectator pathway and the seer pathway, were all very difficult to deal with. And Professor Lockhart was unusually cautious. Other than the first time he touched the spider silk, he never approached Harley's vicinity. This made it impossible for Harley's newly recovered disease ability to envelop him, as Harley's current disease coverage wasn't extensive. While the Judgment Glove's ability could cover a large area, if the offender was too far from the gloves, it could only inflict minor punishments like flogging or needle pricks. It was practically impossible to accumulate an enemy's sins from a distance to a degree that would warrant a death penalty. What made Harley even more uncomfortable was that, due to the sudden situation, she only carried her most precious magic mirror and a substitute wand. Many special ritual materials, Harley had not carried with her, so many rituals against illusions could not be activated. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so passive. But this didn't mean Harley was completely out of options. "Professor, since you're so strong, why do you act so incompetent in class?" Harley suddenly asked softly. "Oh, you mean class?" Professor Lockhart didn't care if Harley was trying to stall for time and replied, shaking his head. "I wanted to show off my strength in the first class, but then I suddenly remembered that illusions and this series of magic targeting the mind and memory are my trump cards. If you all learned them, what would I rely on to make a living? I'm not a good teacher, nor am I a generous person." "How could that be?" Harley complimented. "Shouldn't you be best at dealing with dark arts creatures? I've always felt that you should confront those evil beings head-on, fighting them with spells until they're dead. And illusions are just a side trick, a seasoning for your leisure time." No. Professor Lockhart waved his hand. "I'm not good at all at dealing with those disgusting dark creatures. Of course, while I can't defeat vampires and werewolves, I can defeat the people who can solve them." "Professor," Harley asked in an inquisitive voice, "could you elaborate on that?" Professor Lockhart pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Actually, I shouldn't be saying this, but keeping my glorious deeds hidden in my heart is truly unbearable. To tell you the truth, Professor, all the stories in those books I wrote were stolen. I spent a long time investigating those past events and finding the protagonists of the stories. Then I would make detailed plans, either using various potions to increase charm, or using charms that could confuse thoughts, to facilitate me stealing the truth from their mouths. Then I would subdue them, make them sober up, and give them a completely new memory while they were conscious. Do you know, I enjoy their hateful gazes the most, they're even more wonderful than any other gaze in the world. Oh, right, for those who personally experienced these things, like the villagers of a remote small village, I also had to completely alter their memories, not a single detail could be wrong. This is a massive undertaking. It's a pity that many things are filed with the Ministry of Magic, and I also need people to testify for my books, otherwise, I really want to just make them disappear in a puff of smoke. At this point, Professor Lockhart sighed deeply, shaking his head slightly, as if venting his inner regrets. Wow, Professor, you're truly a pervert, a complete villain. Harley covered her mouth with one hand, a frightened expression on her face. So, perverted Professor, you wouldn't do anything to me, would you? Oh, Miss Harley, this isn't perversion, but art. Besides, you're thinking too much. Professor Lockhart's wand pointed at the wall to the left, his eyes so clear, not affected in the slightest by Harley's charm. I admit that the message on Valentine's Day was sent to you by those monsters at my behest. However, that was also to have those foolish monsters plant an illusion seed in your mind by reciting specific content, allowing you to stay at this point in time. But fools are just fools, besides having not so weak magic, they are utterly useless. They deserve to be used as materials. It forced me to take a risk and put on a grand show to clear out everyone from the Great Hall, leaving you alone. Of course, this also satisfied my desire to perform. You see, I'm not perverted at all, but a very pure writer and artist, and I haven't had any special feelings for you. No, perhaps there is a little special feeling, for example. I really want to kill you. The wall on one side of the Great Hall instantly burst open, and a basilisk emerged from it. It was entirely green, gleaming with the vivid luster unique to venomous snakes, its body thicker than an oak trunk. In the smoke, Professor Lockhart put on a pair of glasses, and a leisurely voice came. Considering that neither I nor Tom can control each other, we can only choose to cooperate. For example, I help him resurrect and take over, and he helps me lift the curse and restore my strength, while also fulfilling some of my demands. Oh, and we have a very important condition for cooperation, to kill you. He has a grudge against you, and I want to write a brand new chapter with your death. Of course, your rudeness to me back then is also one of the reasons I hold grudges. He paused, a hint of pride entering his tone. Also, do you think I don't know you're stalling for time, slowly moving closer to me? Although your footsteps are always small, don't think you can hide them from the great Lockhart's eyes. You're stalling for time, and I'm also waiting for the basilisk to arrive on the battlefield. Harley quickly cleared her mind, no longer dwelling on the meaning of Lockhart's previous words, and chose to prioritize her survival. Her spirituality was warning her, but it wasn't particularly strong. Despite this, Harley still chose to close her eyes immediately, retreat several steps, and place her left hand on the magic mirror. A simple ritual was activated, and Harley connected to the ceiling through the witch's spiritual vision. The ceiling of the Hogwarts Castle Great Hall was a piece of enchanted glass. Although it wasn't a mirror, through the many rituals already applied to the magic mirror in Harley's hand, it could consume a large amount of spirituality to barely connect with it. While it couldn't yet achieve mirror travel or magic mirror substitution, observing the Great Hall seen through the ceiling was still possible. The basilisk is to my side, but the danger it poses to me is not great. Right, the basilisk is equivalent to an artificially created mythical creature form, so it is not complete. Thinking of this, Harley made a new decision. She spoke very quickly, rapidly praying in a low voice in giant language. Favored one of disaster and calamity. Master of pain and despair. The sojourner of this era. The ageless and immortal witch. Great Harley Potter. I hereby implore you to grant me strength, to help me overcome the current difficulty. Although Harley was still Sequence 5, she still couldn't directly use her mythical creature form, but she could already pry open more openings and borrow more powerful strength from the past. In less than 2 seconds, Harley felt a temporary elevation of her own status, and that strange yet familiar power, infinitely approaching her strength from her former Sequence 4 period. Harley's left hand moved away from the magic mirror, and she also cancelled her spiritual vision. Because she was now confident in temporarily resisting the basilisk's gaze. The dust raised by the basilisk breaking through the wall had also disappeared. At this moment, the basilisk was coiling its body, located in the very center of the Great Hall. And Professor Lockhart, at some unknown point, had once again vanished without a trace. Chapter 120, 2 Moves to Send You to Hell thanks to the leader of the Nine-Tailed Flame Fox, extra chapter. When Harley noticed Professor Lockhart's figure disappear, she immediately became alert and quickly scanned the Great Hall. After all, he was a scoundrel who was very good at sneak attacks. Although the wizards of the wizarding world seemed very weak defensively, Harley had also met several masters of combat in France. Those wizards always carried some defensive magic items or had charms fixed to their clothes. By this reasoning, the wizards Lockhart ambushed must also have been skilled in combat, and their defenses certainly wouldn't have been particularly weak. Even if some people were careless, it's impossible that everyone was caught off guard and knocked out by a single blow, especially since Lockhart wrote so many books and stole so many stories. Therefore, Harley was still somewhat wary of Professor Lockhart's sneak attack. Finally, Harley saw Professor Lockhart by the intact wall at the edge of the Great Hall, but she wasn't sure if it was really him. However, Harley was quite confident that even if Professor Lockhart wasn't in that exact spot, he would definitely be in some corner of the Great Hall. Although Professor Lockhart had already put on special glasses and wasn't afraid of the basilisk's gaze, the basilisk's massive body was still very threatening. If a basilisk tail accidentally swept over, Lockhart wouldn't die but would be severely injured. Harley felt that no one would be willing to take such a risk. "Miss Harley, prepare to die." Professor Lockhart's voice came from all directions, with a hint of excitement. "The most magnificent article will soon be composed with your flesh and blood." "How exciting, pervert." Harley spat, a smile curving at the corner of her mouth. "You're not the only one with reinforcements." In her ear, thanks to the assassin's enhanced hearing, Harley had already heard a series of footsteps approaching from a distance. The two had been fighting and talking for over 10 minutes. During this time, their scuffle had created a lot of noise, and the basilisk's earlier smashing through the Great Hall wall had shaken the castle. Even if the Aurors were all fools and incompetent, at least the deans and professors still had their strength. Harley didn't believe they hadn't noticed the battle in the Great Hall by now. If they really hadn't noticed, Harley would suggest they restart their lives. Loud voice. Harley suddenly thought of something, pointed her wand at her throat, and then said, "Careful. Lockhart is in the Great Hall, skilled in illusions and memory magic. There's also a basilisk in the Great Hall." The footsteps outside immediately stopped. Clearly these Aurors had sufficient basic knowledge. Immediately following, a familiar voice rang out. It was Auror Captain Kingsley. "Professor McGonagall and I will go in. You all guard the perimeter, find cover, and prevent anyone else from approaching, or the prisoner inside from escaping." "Captain, we can go in and help too," said an Auror whose name Harley didn't recognize. "Wally, don't forget, there's a basilisk inside the Great Hall. If you go in without closing your eyes, you'll just die for nothing. If you close your eyes, will your spells be accurate? Your super sensing charms aren't very good," Kingsley replied. Hearing this, the Aurors also reacted and responded one after another. Harley could clearly hear everyone's answers. Poor discipline. A better unit in the Lowen Kingdom could give a uniform answer. No matter what organization they belong to, extraordinary individuals know that when encountering danger, they must not disobey the orders of a stronger person. Harley pouted, concerned about the Aurors' strength. While listening to the Aurors' conversation, Harley also remained vigilant. Driven by someone, the basilisk charged madly at Harley, hissing from its mouth. "Yes, my master. I will kill her, tear her apart." Harley leapt, dodging the basilisk's heavy tail sweep, and ignored the unintentional eye contact between herself and the basilisk. With the protection of her mythical creature form, the mere gaze of a basilisk could no longer harm her. Harley didn't want to go all out. She only needed to hold on for another 2 or 3 minutes, and the Auror Captain and Professor McGonagall would arrive. Why fight alone when you can gang up? But while still in midair, Harley suddenly sensed a deadly danger. A layer of ice instantly appeared on Harley's body, but this layer of solid ice shattered immediately as if it were made of paper. Harley's figure exploded, then transformed into a wand broken into several pieces. Harley, meanwhile, appeared in the center of the Great Hall, where the basilisk had been previously. "Damn it!" Harley clenched her silver teeth. "I thought this was just an easy bullying session, but now it seems I can't hold back. Kill Lockhart first, I can't let him ambush me with illusions. 2 moves to send him to hell." Thinking this, Harley no longer hesitated and looked up, letting out an invisible scream. "Ah!" A layer of ethereal blue halo instantly formed and surged outwards from Harley's body. Wherever this ethereal blue halo passed, frost instantly condensed, stopping only at the edge of the Great Hall. Ice crystals formed on the tables and chairs of the Great Hall, covered with a layer of soft white snow, while beautiful and dreamy snowflakes drifted in the air. Sequence 5 Demoness of Affliction Frozen World. This ability, an advancement of the witch's ice control, could envelop creatures in ice, slowing their movements or even turning them directly into ice sculptures. Originally, the casting range of this ability was not large, but after Harley borrowed power from her mythical creature form, she was able to extend it to the entire Great Hall. Under such cold, the basilisk, despite its extremely magic-resistant skin and scales, quickly stiffened. At the same time, Harley clearly felt that there was also a living creature frozen near the main entrance of the Great Hall. "I found you." Harley's voice suddenly turned cold, revealing countless murderous intentions. The snowflakes dancing in the air instantly transformed into 4 ice spears. These were not the same spears that flew towards Professor Snape at the dueling club back then. Their tips were incredibly sharp, reflecting a bloodthirsty gleam. "Hello, Professor Lockhart, and goodbye." Harley waved one hand, and the spears instantly pierced the frozen location. A scream, and suddenly blood splattered in midair, then the illusion faded. The image of Professor Lockhart by the wall instantly shattered, and where the spears pierced, Professor Lockhart's eyes gradually became vacant as he fell to the ground. So that's how it is, the skilled swimmer drowns. Professor Lockhart looked at the ceiling, which was currently a clear blue sky due to the magic cast upon it. Unfortunately, he would never see it again. Indeed, I was just a clown. The Dark Lord is still the Dark Lord. Blood flowed from Professor Lockhart's mouth. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.